Alright folks, it's fun part of script time. World's original monsters first. Great Jagras is your opening boss of the game and sets a trend for big lizard-like fanged wyverns making up the majority of the bottom level boss monsters on each map. You'll be facing down Great Jagras within pretty much the first hour of Monster Hunter World, and you'll see him and his young cohorts stalking the lower regions of the ancient forest pretty constantly. It's often said, including by me, that Great Jagras is this sort of thesis statement of Monster Hunter World. Your first introduction to Jagras are them being this dangerous pack animal that are led by a large alpha. That large alpha is dangerous, but pales in comparison to some of the larger and more dangerous predators within the forest. Great Jagras is a major threat to the large herbivores that graze within and around the forest itself. He'll devour them whole, inflating his stomach and delivering the partially digested contents to the smaller members of his species. Great Jagras establishes a lot of the potential for the monsters of Monster Hunter World that the monsters of the previous games couldn't or just didn't do. Great Jagras has a relationship with the younger and smaller members of his species. He is a lower level monster who can be tossed around in turf wars by the stronger beasts like Anjanath. He actively preys upon some of the smaller monsters and has a complex behavioral pattern that seamlessly has him trek across several regions of the map at once. He makes great use of the more complex animal behaviors and the seamless map design that World allows for, and that grants this giant doofy lizard a fair bit of initial wow factor when you first boot up the game. And even after hundreds of hours put into World, that work that went into him is still worthy of some appreciation. He sets a precedent for what the monsters can do in World, and how much more complex they can be outside of combat than some of the monsters in the past. I will say, not every monster has this many animations and behaviors put into them, and Great Jagras sets a slightly unrealistic expectation for every boss in the game. Honestly, that fact is probably what keeps Great Jagras feeling special after all this time, because otherwise he'd be, I don't know, a little more than a yellow speed bump. Great Jagras was born to die. Even in his skinnier form, he's slow, his damage is low, his attacks aren't complicated, he doesn't have combos, he doesn't really have any pack synergy in combat, and he is incredibly easy to get part breaks and staggers and knockdowns and clutch claw throws and mounts on. Great Jagras is designed for new players to kill a boss within the first hour. You're not going to die to him. Not when you start the game, not later on in low rank, not when you meet him again in higher rank, and not when you meet him again in master rank. He doesn't even have a tempered form for you to fight. You might die to him in his special Greatest Jagras event quest that he got in World's Endgame, which is a pretty fun quest that gives him a huge size increase, a projectile spray, quakes, and stronger roars. That fight is really fun, and it gives Great Jagras a little bit of extra memorability, but the core fight, the real animal, it's just kind of not much. He's slower than the preceding Monster Hunter opening bosses when the hunters are now faster and have more utility. There's nothing offensive about him, there's just not like all that much to him, barring his inflated form when he eats an herbivore. No pack tactics, no debuffs, no elements, no quakes, no roars, nothing like that. He's one of the most animal-y animals they've ever made. He's a giant lizard who can bite and scratch and toss his weight around. The only real mechanical depth here is that if you do enough damage to his stomach when he's inflated, you can force him to regurgitate the contents of his stomach, as well as putting him in a prolonged knockdown. Hey, he's a charming beast with some neat personality and some cool environment interactions, which can only really do so much for his nothing combat. Kuliaku is basically an oviraptor. He's a big raptor with lots of bird-like traits who runs around deserts and forests stealing eggs out of herbivore nests. The most monster huntery aspect about him is his intelligence and his tool usage, which is pretty neat for a bird wyvern. He uses his claws to dig up and grip eggs and rocks and pots, and even in exploding rocks in master rank, he can use these objects as improvised weapons to attack with and defend himself with. This is what the bulk of his fight is built around. He will try to slam the rock into you over and over again while holding it up to his face every once in a while to block attacks, and you're trying to flinch him and force him to drop the rock to make him a little bit easier to fight. He's also got a couple of hops and swipes and pecks on top of all of that. Kuliaku is an animal that I like with a fight that I really don't enjoy. On paper, I didn't like the concept of a tool-wielding monster that can defend himself with a big rock. I think that my biggest issue with Kulu is that he is just a very hoppy monster with a narrow heart box, and he can occasionally just basically wall off half half of his hurt box for about half of the fight. That wall makes it tough to hit just about his only good hit zones, as well as his 2-part breaks. I think if you're looking for a monster that uses a rock to defend itself and to wall off certain parts of itself, look at Tetsukabra. He does it far, far better than Kuliaku does. I think he's particularly well designed as a super grounded monster. The tan scales with the stripe patterns make for some good desert camouflage. I like that he's the most bird-like of the raptor bird wyverns with his beak and his sound design, and I enjoy the restrained use of his very nice looking orange and red plumage. And even with all that, he's still recognizable with a goober personality. I don't think I'll ever particularly enjoy his fight, but I enjoy him as a creature, just kind of bumbling around on the lower rungs of the desert's hierarchy. He's a quaint little mischief maker. Pookie is actually like a pretty fantastic lower tier monster. One of my favorites, honestly. He's not tough, not in this game at least, and not even really so much in Sunbreak either, but he has just kind of a lot to him. A fantastic design, some really good sound effects, a pretty fun fight if he isn't stun locked into oblivion. If you want to have fun with Pookie, you're gonna want to fight his tempered master rank version, or just fight him in Sunbreak. Pookie is unique in that he's a bird wyvern who sticks to the lower regions of the ancient forest. I believe it's the case that the Wraths more or less drove the Pookies out of the treetops and then down to the ground to forage for fruits and seeds. He's got a mixture of goofiness that Kulu and Jagras has, with some size and some status usage to actually add more potential danger to him. In terms of his fights, he's kind of just a better Gypsaros from the older games in, I think, like every way. He's got a better personality, cooler flair, and just better defined traits. Like Gypsaros, he is a poison-wielding bird wyvern. However, instead of spastically barfing poison everywhere, Pookie uses straight glob shots of poison from his mouth and gaseous clouds of poison from his tail, and sometimes also from his mouth. Like Gypsaros, he has a rubbery extending body part to attack with, this being his tongue as opposed to Gypsaros' underused rubber tail. Like Gypsaros, he has an auto stun mechanic, but unlike a spammed flashbang attack, Pookie can occasionally eat scatternuts and add a concussive property to his poison spit attack. Additionally, if Pookie eats spore puffs, it can add a gaseous quality to his poison, allowing him to expel it in area denying poison gas clouds from his tail. This gives him a cool dynamic part break, because if you hack that tail off, you can get rid of his poison gas cloud attack. I always really enjoy it when Monster Hunter puts some interesting mechanics and moveset depth into its really early game monsters, even knowing that those monsters are probably going to get bulldozed. I love that this guy can get extra properties from his attacks depending on what he eats, and he eats often enough that you'll see these gimmicks pretty frequently. The stun doesn't really hit too often though, from my knowledge. I'm a big fan of his color palette too. He's got a great set of blues and greens that blend together incredibly well in his feathers. He's also got purple in his tongue and in his tail stripes. He's vibrant without using your typically very loud, warm colors. I also think it lets his large yellow eyes kind of pop really well. And when he gets flustered and pissed, he's got a neat looking rage mode where his feather mane stands up on all ends and his face flushes red. It's a little bit of a shame that such a great design and set of mechanics is placed on a monster with such a small health pool, but at the same time, early game monsters still do need to exist, and I love when they put as much effort into them as they do with this one. Pookie is a monster that I've grown to like just the more and more with time, honestly. Giratotis is a Piscean wyvern who stalks the mires and the bogs where the river that runs through the Wildspire Waste spills out. He's a prime example of a monster who dominates one select chunk of territory within a grander biome. He's a slippery opponent to tangle with out in the bogs where he can swim, but he's too slow and clunky to be much of a threat in drier environments. Honestly, he's not that much of a threat to begin with, but we'll get there. Giratotis is a little bit of an experiment. See, at one point, we had these underwater fights in Monster Hunter, but reception of these fights were mixed at best. Still, wanting to make aquatic battles and aquatic animals, the developers behind World and Rise created these shallow water lakes and bogs that allow some monsters to act as if they're swimming while still allowing hunters to walk normally, albeit usually at a reduced speed. I have some fondness for Giratotis as he's the spearhead for this creative reinvention of aquatic monsters. The main issue with Giratotis is that he's laughably easy to defeat. Yeah, he's faster when partially submerged. Yeah, he's got stamina draining mud puddles that can litter the ground, and he's got a couple of attacks where he can lunge from beneath your feet, and he's got these like wriggling charges, but man, he is insanely easy to flinch. Brutally easy to stun. His attacks are very easy to dodge and generally just very slow. He's maybe the easiest fight in the game. Even easier than Great Jagras. Giratotis is just a little tankier in the health department. He's got that mud mud armor gimmick where he'll cover himself in dirt and grime, and this will change his elemental resistances and make his hit zones less vulnerable, but there's a better returning monster who uses this exact same gimmick. You can bully this fish insanely easy. He's just very, I don't know, got a boilerplate moveset, which he's gonna be repeatedly chain flinched out of using. The coolest thing he does is he has that turf war over dominance of the bogs with Baroth. His design is also extremely simple, though I think I like it quite a bit more than other people do. Honestly, I think his mud armor makes him just look kind of doofy. It chunks him up a lot. It covers a lot of his texture work. It makes the area around his eyes look a lot more fatty and adds this big lump on his head. Honestly, you knock that mud armor off, it makes him look a lot more sleek looking. Shows off his subtle color choices and fiercens up his face a little bit. Losing that mud crest makes him just not nearly as cute looking. He's still predominantly like a brown and gray, but he's got this kind of like oily, reflective sheen to him that gives his scales this twinge of green to them that I like, and he's got a nice understated salmon coloration on the ends of his fins. These colors only really pop with a good render, and I think Gyratonis would benefit from being a game that has a slight saturation boost. I kind of like him in the same way that I like Kuliaku in terms of design. He's a neat, realistic animal. If we had wyverns that evolved with fish-like qualities, they'd look like Gyratonis. He's a pretty nothing boss fight, but I enjoy the idea of his rulership of a small sliver of the Wildspire Waste, and I think his rivalry with Baroth is kind of cool. One of the most forgettable entries in World's Bestiary for sure, though. I just don't hate him like some people do. Tobikadachi, though, I would say is another big success for World's early game. Probably the best monster I've covered so far out of these chunk of 5. We have this static electricity charged flying squirrel viper who clings to the mid-level heights of the ancient forest. Occasionally, he'll venture lower to forage, but he's carved out this nice little niche for himself away from the larger predators at the tops and the bottoms of the tree. He's a real charmer, a perfect amalgamation of real-world animals and special abilities to make a very solid, complete package for an early game monster. Tobikadachi is probably the first monster in the game that has any hope of actually killing you. He attacks fast enough that his Thunderblight has a decent chance of stunning you, and his tail slams can hit considerably harder than pretty much any other attack you've been hit by so far in the game. He uses a combination of static electricity, acrobatics, tree scaling, and limited gliding to do battle, and it's an effective little ensemble of tricks. He wants to stick to areas with large branches or tree trunks so that he can temporarily disengage from the fight, and he wants to use his static electricity conducting abilities to make it so that contact with his fur can electrocute you. So he has lots of leaps and dives and slams where he's simultaneously trying to batter you and electrocute you to make it so that his next shot is so much easier for him to land. He's also got some launchable tail spines that he can fire at from a range. It's a very well-balanced toolkit, not too much, not too little, and they weave together to give Tobikadachi a distinct fighting style. The design is exceptional as well. It blends a viper-like head with a flying squirrel wing flaps and a body structure and texture that feels simultaneously mammalian and reptilian without feeling too cluttered. These elements blend beautifully, and he looks especially cool when he's all poofed up in static electricity, especially in his prominent tail, which is all adorned in fur and spines, which is his primary weapon in combat. It's basically a giant electrically charged muscle-backed paddle, which may be the first thing that sends a new player back to camp. I also love how his blood-red eyes look against his mostly blue and gray color palette. He's not difficult in the slightest, but I think this is the first truly great monster that World introduces. He's a perfectly constructed grab bag of traits and abilities that add up to an extremely cohesive and likable whole. Anjanath is basically the second flagship of Monster Hunter World. He was the featured monster in the first trailer. He's hyped up during the tutorial. He's the final obstacle before the first encounter with Zora Magdaros. He's one of the 5th generation's most prominent and defining monsters. To me, I think Anjanath represents what the base game of Monster Hunter World was going for with its creature design. He's predominantly a very grounded, feasible animal, built to feel like it could exist if evolution went in kind of like a certain way, but then with some slightly exaggerated and stylized elements that adds that extra Monster Hunter panache. He's very much a big pink Tyrannosaurus, or perhaps a movie version of a Tyrannosaurus to be more exact, especially when it comes to the head shape and the roaring, but he's got this sort of vulture-esque posture to his neck and a nice coat of dark purple fur running down from his back all the way to his tail. When he's angry, this massive navel structure and body heat controlling sails will then flare up with blood in an intimidation display, and then he starts breathing fire. Anjanath is basically your gear check in low rank. If you haven't stopped to grind some gear out at all, overall, you might get eviscerated. He's got huge body checks and headbutts and trampling fiery charges and flame breath moves. In Master Rank, the guy can even just sneeze fire at you out of his large nasal structure. He's got a few dynamic elements to his fight as well, like his legs are usually super resilient to damage, but once wounded, they can be turned into great weak points to target if you want to sacrifice some early damage to go after them. And when his flame-producing organ is superheated, enough damage to his head will cause that organ to burst, triggering a nice big knockdown. He's a perfect gateway to mid-tier difficulty monsters. He'll slug you if you're not careful in the early game, and he can still put up a little bit of a fight for the majority of the game proper. He's a great midpoint of power in the Ancient Forest, where he can crush a great Jagras and outmatch a Tobikadachi, but will be trounced by a Rathalos. He's tough, he's bad-tempered, he's an engaging battle. He's a solid wall for those brand new to world, and he's kinda goofy too. Anjanath is a pretty universally loved monster for a good reason, considering how much he featured in World and Rise and in Stories too. I kinda want to say that Anjanath is the premier monster of the 5th generation of Monster Hunter and its entire era, and you know what? I think he's a pretty excellent beast who deserves that position. Moving on to Tzitzi-Ya-Ku, he is what will greet you first when you trek into the Coral Highlands. He's another raptor bird wyvern and another pushover. He's basically one big gimmick. Those wiry tendrils on his head can unfurl into a massive frill that emits a blinding light. This is as much a weapon as it is a survival tool. You're probably going to be fighting Tzitzi incredibly infrequently. Instead, most of your interactions with him are going to occur when he stumbles into a battle you're having with another much more powerful monster within the Coral Highlands. Tzitzi will then stroll up, deliberately flashbang that monster, and then book it for dear life. He's almost more of a super helpful endemic life than an actual boss monster. Tzitzi's fight is a little bit of a non-factor once that crest is destroyed. It's kinda all he has, barring some physical attacks. I will give Tzitzi-Ya-Ku a couple of props though. At least he has his own physical attacks separate from Coolyaku. A lot of the raptor mini-bosses in classic Monster Hunter were barely anything other than reskins of one another, with maybe a different status element slapped on top of each other. Tzitzi feels a little bit more clever than Kulu. Whereas Kulu will attack you with head slams and peck attacks and all that kind of stuff, Tzitzi strikes at kind of weird angles with tail spins and back kicks. He's also got a change in Master Rank where he can backstep multiple times and change angles when preparing his blinding flash attack. It doesn't make him challenging or even terribly engaging, but I appreciate the distinction. He feels clever. He's also got a neat gimmick where his nest in the Highlands is coated in a light reflecting surfaces that can enhance his flash attack, but he's never gonna make it to that nest alive. I'm also generally a pretty big fan of his design. I think his dark violet colors work really well with the vibrant Coral Highlands. I appreciate that he's got more of a movie dinosaur look, whereas Kulu is a little bit more of a avian dinosaur look. The bigger boxy head makes him look a little bit fiercer, and I really like how he looks with his frill popped out, as well as the blue and the orange colors of the frill itself. It looks really nice. It's just a shame that his frill spends like 80% of his fight just furled up and invisible to you. He looks way cooler with that thing fully out. He's another one of World's low tier monsters it's just kind of a nothing fight because he doesn't really get to do much and because the hunters are just so much faster than he is. He does get some points of endearment for his usefulness as a hazard against things like Pink Rathian and Legiana, but his primary role in World is a glorified environmental trap. His flash is so easy to dodge and his physical attacks aren't particularly hazardous or strong or quick. He's got a fun role and a solid design, but I don't know, that's kind of the bulk of what there is to say about him. Paolumu is your mid-tier resident of the Coral Highlands. Despite being technically stronger than Tzitzi, he's way more of a punching bag. Paolumu is pretty non-threatening. They're big cotton ball bat wyverns who inflate themselves with an air sac and then just kind of lazily drift along air currents minding their own business. Most predators in the Highlands can mess up this bat pretty easily, meaning that Paolumu doesn't go too far into the upper regions of the Highlands where the bigger batter flying wyverns compete for territory. Honestly, I think Paolumu is a pretty solid user of wind pressure as a primary source of attack. He kinda has Rathalos' retreating fireball gimmick where he'll hop back and inhale a large quantity of air to stagger foes in front of him, which is a decent little get-off-me technique, and he can fire huge wind blasts when he's floating around. It's nothing dramatic, but it's a decent use of wind pressure as an actual combat weapon and not just as a byproduct of flying around. Him and Kashador are pretty much the only ones who use wind like this. The only fix I could make here is that I think his retreating wind attack attack needs a good follow-up to punish the hunters who actually get stuck in the stagger. When he inflates himself into his balloon form, he's got a few tail sweeps and wind shots and a couple of tail slams to use, but he's generally very lethargic and easy to hit. And on the ground, he basically just has an oversimplified generic flying wyvern moveset. This is a fight that Master Rank made also a little annoying for me because he gets this very fast triple ground slam that I swear to God is an attack with a ridiculous amount of stun buildup. I might just, again, have a skill issue or something, but man, do I find this attack obnoxious to deal with sometimes. And I feel like it always stuns me just no matter what I do. The design, however, is pretty fun. It's kind of just adorable. He's a big fluffy cotton ball bat that drifts around doing whatever he wants and not really bothering anybody. He's got this cute little mouse face that scrunches up when he gets all mad. He's just this goofy guy doofing around in the Highlands doing his stuff. He's honestly, I don't know, he's a little pathetic compared to how violent, fast, and aggressive some of the higher level carnivores in this map are. I've never found him to be particularly fun or even really that challenging, but I think he's charming and cute. I like seeing him. Great Gyros, then, I think, is personally underrated and overlooked. Now, here's the thing. I ain't saying he's some, like, dark horse 10 out of 10 masterpiece boss fight or nothing. Now, he's still like a, I don't know, like a 4 or 5, maybe like a 6 if I really like him. But I really enjoy him. I do a lot. He's supposed to be this example that even though a species may be physically weaker than some larger predators, given the right circumstances and numbers and opportunities, that weaker individual may have some very deadly advantages. A great Gyros and his pack are like hyenas, an environment consisting of solitary lions and rhinos. Kind of like Zitzi Yaku, Great Gyros and his underlings can often serve as a bit of an environmental hazard. Unlike Zitzi, these guys aren't just these one and done fight disruptors. They can throw a whole battle into chaos kind of quick. You might be squaring off with something like, say, an acidic Glavenus, and when the Gyros smell blood, they will descend on the battlefield. All of a sudden, the fight becomes this writhing mass of black scales and paralytic venom. The Gyros will likely paralyze the larger monster, and maybe you, if you're not careful. I really like the role these guys play in their ecosystem, and I could very well see an intelligent pack of Gyros being legitimately deadly to an Odogaron or even a wounded or unaware Tigrex or Radoban. Most of the other lower end boss monsters in World feel like they are fodder or survivalists, just trying to stay away from the big boys. Great Gyros feels like he's actually kind of in the game of some of the bigger, badder bosses in his region. He just has to play smarter. Now, his fight's not anything too crazy, but I think it is my favorite of the weaker beasts in this game. He's got a couple of good lunging bite attacks. He's got a shoulder tackle, several charging bite moves. He's got a good get off me tailspin. He's got some paralytic projectiles. His paralysis is not particularly fast acting, but they gave him several attacks that can create paralysis buildup. If you let too many minor cuts get on you, then you're gonna drop and you'll be assailed by the pack. In addition to this, Great Gyros is pretty adept at summoning his followers to his aid, and at times you're facing up to like 6 or 7 of these guys at a time. Now, any kind of endgame damage weapons are going to obliterate that pack in pretty much any singular longsword swing, but I still really enjoy the groundwork of this fight. Yeah, it's way too easy for it to be a genuine threat, but Great Gyros is, I think, a really good encounter that interacts with you and the other monsters in a way that nothing else in World really does. I think Great Gyros makes excellent use of the seamless maps in World and more complex monster against monster interactions. And on top of this, I think he's got a really good design. Very lizard-like, similar to Great Jagras, but way smaller, much leaner. I like the camouflage that his jet black scales provide him in the depths of the Rotten Vale. I think the colorful cobra hood, the hissing sound design, and huge venom-coated fangs weave Snake into his reptile design very well. I really like this monster, and I think it's a damn shame that he's so consistently overlooked. Radoban is yet another excellent early game monster that the Rotten Vale provides. He is a close relative of the 3rd generation's Uragon, and though he's another big, hefty, roly-poly tank of a hammer-chin brute wyvern, he interacts with his environment completely differently. Radoban coats his hide in the tar that is created by the Vale, and then uses that tar to fuse the discarded bones of dead monsters to its hide. And this isn't a random assortment of bones either. Radoban's smart enough to be picky. he will choose quality material for his armor and put the right pieces in the right places. Minus invading monsters and up until Iceborne, Radoban is essentially the sole resident of the upper Rotten Vale. The long pathways are built for him to roll around on, and every once in a while you'll find yourself being blindsided as he rounds a corner out of nowhere and smashes into you. The only issue with Radoban's fight is that he's so low on the game's power scaling. He takes basically everything Uragaan does and improves on it. He has alternative sideways rolling attacks that look awesome. He can be flinched out of his roll from taking hits or being shot by slinger ammo. He can use his bone armor as projectiles sometimes. He retains Uragaan's chin slams and sleep gas, and his armor is very satisfying but not too painstaking to chip away at and reveal more of his vulnerable flesh. He can also replace the bones on his body in his nest. He's just faster, more stylish, more edgy, and less obnoxious than Uragaan, with more ways to deal with the tanky defense issues that make people not like Uragaan. The design is also really sick, taking Uragaan's classic design, slimming it down, stripping off the brass armor, painting the whole body tar black, and covering the whole body back then over in giant spiky bone war armor. The monochrome colors work extremely well together. He's also got just some extra awesome details like that bone armor face guard made out of fangs and the Diablo's horns for leg guards. He's got an edgy base concept that contrasts with his big goofy chin and his expressive eyes and flat Uragaan teeth in a well-executed manner that makes him simultaneously really cool and also pretty endearing. I personally think he's a massive triumph when it comes to improving on Uragaan's core concept. Legiana is the apex predator patrolling the Coral Highlands. He is equal parts graceful, beautiful, sleek, territorial, and ferocious. Honestly, Legiana has some pretty half-decent story presence in World's second act as well. He'll attack your airship immediately after you enter the Highlands and will stalk you as you attempt to explore its upper reaches. In terms of its ecology, Legiana is a particularly unusual flying wyvern in that it doesn't really need strong wings to fly. The Coral Highlands is always surrounded by powerful wind currents, and Legiana has adapted to master said currents. They have developed a series of large sails all over their bodies, which they will unfurl when they wish to take flight. They can angle, redirect, and retract these sails at will, allowing them full control over their bodies in the air. Now, sometimes Legiana still do need to beat their wings in order to stay in place in the air or to take off and things like this, but this is a very unique concept for a flying wyvern that I wish was better represented in his combat animations. In its opening cutscene, Legiana makes a really good show of its dominance over other animals in its environment, as well as the specific of the environment itself, and I really enjoy him as an apex predator. Legiana's fight is pretty darn good. I don't adore it, and it doesn't irritate me in the slightest either. He's base game world's singular ice-wielding monster and uses it fairly minimally. He can expel frigid winds and razor-sharp ice crystals from his wings and torso, using his sails to toss these miniature hailstorms at opponents. These are used to buffet, batter, and slow down foes before Legiana goes in for a kill shot. He'll try to cut you to pieces with his talons or use his speed and weight to try and dive bomb you in a spinning corkscrew attack. He's not all that effective of a ground combatant though, and he still has a reduced ability to produce those icy hail attacks down there. He has got a lot of moves that Rathalos and Rathian have, as well as just his own bursts of elemental pressure and some speedy attacks. He doesn't really push the limits of what flying wyverns can do in combat in any super crazy directions, and I think his wind sail should be incorporated more into his abilities and maneuverability if and when he ever comes back. And his design is quite excellent. It's sleek, elegant, fast, and fierce. He looks big and intimidating with all his sails on full display, without making him look like cumbersome or fatty or anything like that. I love the blue and black patterns that adorn the top of his wings and all of his back, and it works pretty well with the tans of his underwings and belly. His silhouette, where his sails are on full display, grants him a visual uniqueness from pretty much all other flying wyverns that helps him to stand out. And I think it's cool that he can pull all of these flaps in to protect them when he's on the ground. I think Legiana is a pretty solid monster with some untapped potential. Its unique ecology needs a little bit more exploring, and the kit needs some diversification away from the standard flying wyvern attacks. I like Legiana quite a bit, and think that he deserves a return with a solid facelift. Odogaron is one of those monsters that pretty much everybody loves. The fight's sick, the gear rocks, the design is impeccable, and his ecology is compelling. This belligerent, scrappy, multi-clawed, muscle skin looking cutthroat death weasel is such such a stellar creature. Despite its size, he dominates the Rotten Vale, for the most part simply due to his speed and tenacity. He can blindside and shred an opponent long before they have any ability to properly defend themselves. It's nice to have an Apex level carnivore in Monster Hunter who isn't the biggest and the baddest and the strongest and the most cinematic creature in that biome. Odogaron is perfectly suited for the tight caverns and claustrophobic tunnels of the Vale, and so long as he gets the opening strike, he's got a good shot at taking down pretty much any other animal in his domain, barring the absolute most powerful organisms down there. Odogaron is world's resident spastic high agility monster. This guy is lunging in and out of combat, jumping off of walls, diving at you, tackling you, biting you, and trying to hack you to bits with his claws. Odogaron has this multi-tiered set of claws that he can extend or retract at will. When those claws come out, it cuts straight into your armor and causes you to bleed profusely. And when you stop to recuperate from the bleeding, you can bet that Odogaron is going to be all over you trying to capitalize on your weakened state. He's a pretty honest fight, all things considered. It's all about keeping pace with his ferocity and retaliating when he overextends. Odogaron is also well designed as a glass cannon monster. He's got a lot of part breaks all over his body that you can use to trip him up and stagger him and keep him in place and get some more consistent damage on him. He's got such an excellent gnarly design too. The guy looks like his skin is made out of muscle. The way his second layer of claws is aligned is almost disturbing looking. It looks malformed, like he has an underdeveloped paw that's kind of like sprouting above his regular foot. His claws are the size of small swords. He's got these tiny, malice-filled, beady little eyes. He's grotesque and yet simultaneously sleek and badass looking. Every aspect of Odogaron is super well crafted, and he deserves that stellar reputation that he has. And then Dodogama is the resident silly little guy of Monster Hunter World. He's a pudgy blue lizard man who waddles around in the Elder's Recess eating rocks. Everybody loves Dodogama. Well, most people do. If we're being honest, the fight is kind of a whole bunch of not much, and he got so popular for just being a cute little doofus that he kind of inevitably hit that point where some people started to not like him. But I do. He's just a little dingus lizard minding his own business while magma explodes all around him 24/7, and some of the most powerful creatures on the continent are perpetually trying to murder one another around him. He's so out of place compared to the blood-soaked carnage of the Elder's Recess that it makes him kind of endearing to me. His fight is pretty much just kind of a mild nuisance that you don't even really have much of any reason to engage with. His weapons and armor neither look nor statistically are particularly fantastic, and he's on the bottom rungs of the game's difficulty, so he's not going to get you any decent rewards. He can slam his weight down on you, he can spit up exploding rocks at you, he can charge at you, and that charge will give you blast blight. That's kind of the bulk of it. The stronger Dodogama can at least fire off several exploding projectiles in a row. Like a lot of the lower tier monsters in the world, his kit just isn't terribly interesting, and he gets by mostly on just being a cool animal. However, there are two semi-notable details about Dodogama in combat. He can make for a pretty good unintentional assistant if you're fighting something stronger than Dodogama, and then Dodo walks into the battle. The cheeky little bastard will oftentimes just start hucking explosive rocks at the larger bosses for you, and eventually then he'll just kind of waddle off. And secondly, when he eats his rocks and superheats his chin, that is the single weakest hit zone in the entire game, and he then became a test dummy for players to see what the highest possible damage number in Iceborne was. The design is what earned Dodogama most of his acclaim, and for what it's worth, it's a good goober monster design. He's a giant, chunky, fat, blue, big-chinned, massive underbite, dead-eyed doofus lizard. He looks so innocent and absent-minded and harmless despite his immense bulk, and the expression on his render is so perfect. It's just the 1,000-yard stare off into eternity with his mouth just yawning open. He looks like someone who would eat rocks. He's maybe a little more popular than he actually deserves, but I do get it. He's charming. Of all the monsters in base game world that aren't all that good as bosses but are just really cool fantasy animals, Dodogama is definitely the most famous, and I totally see why. And now let's swap things over to one of World's resounding successes, popularity-wise and design-wise. Flagships excluded, Basil Geese is is maybe the fan favorite 5th generation monster. He captured the atmosphere, the terror, the impact on the fan base just as well as Deviljho did when he was introduced back in Monster Hunter Tri. Everyone's got a story about Basil Keith. You just unlocked high rank. You've done a quest or two refighting some of the low-level bosses like Pookie or Baroth or Jagras, and then there's this deep, rattling, wailing shriek, a gigantic shadow, these egg-shaped red scales start falling out of the sky, and then this massive flying wyvern comes crashing down to the ground, sets off those scales in a chaining series of explosions that will probably kill you or one of your teammates and will deal immense damage to the poor monster you were just fighting. And from that point on, Basil Geese serves as a looming threat on every map and in every quest. This thing is a living, breathing, auto-reloading B-52 bomber plane that hates you and every other living thing in existence. If Monster Hunter was an insanely interactive game, or if there was ever like a really good animation of Basil Geese hunting, like some walking with dinosaurs type of thing, the sheer devastation a monster with abilities like this would wrought would be terrifying. While hunting, entire patches of forest would just be obliterated, and then Basil has free reign to eat the burned remains of whatever he got in his blast. And if something managed to survive, Basil is still a huge, heavy, and durable tanky Goliath of a wyvern who will use his weight to beat the survivors of his onslaughts to death. Oh, and guess what? If the flammable fluids in his body have processed new bomb scales while he's trying to bludgeon you into paste, then those gigantic physical attacks will shake loose more of his bombs that will try to incinerate you again while you're desperately trying to sword fight this gigantic flying wyvern. Basil Geese is a goofy concept pulled off phenomenally. They even lean into the bomber plane aesthetic by having his battle theme be evocative of old World War II propaganda music. His design is unique while also being simple and effective. He lacks any crazy colors, mostly just being a mix of tans, browns, and grays. Those understated colors make it so that when he gets pissed and his whole body heats up, the red-orange of his internal fire stands out incredibly well. He's also got a comically teeny tiny little face when compared to his gigantic head and neck, the underside of which houses most of his bomb scales. He's intimidating, communicates his gimmick extremely effectively, and still possesses a little bit of goofy charm to him. Even with all the hunts he's invaded and carts he's caused, he's still absolutely beloved, and that says something about how great of a monster that he is. And now we can move into World's original Elder Dragons. How about we start with the totally uncontroversial and very much beloved shambling mass of rocks called Zora Magdaros. I think everyone's got a fairly better opinion of Zora Magdaros due to the fact that he alone took an entire year of development to get working, and he's not very fun. So the question of what could have been in World instead of Zora Magdaros will always exist. Zora was trying to bring Monster Hunter into the mainstream with a gigantic cinematic bang. The first title much of the audience at that time would have tried in the entire series would open up with a kaiju-sized living volcano lifting your ship out of the ocean, forcing you to climb around on him, and then the bulk of the story is trying to pursue him across the continent. I kind of feel bad for the guy. Zora really tried to be epic and cinematic and imposing. It just doesn't really work. He's too slow, too unengaging, too plodding. Monster Hunter has struggled and tooled around with giant monsters before to mixed results, and some of their older back catalog of giant monsters could probably be tooled around to be made a little bit better, but Zora might be flat out too big to make work for an action game like Monster Hunter. I do, however, being me, want to give him a couple of props that I don't think most other people will. I think that Zora Magdaros is a pretty decent D&D encounter. There's a countdown timer to stop him before he reaches the base. There's these little harasser wing drakes scattered around to delay you. There's interactive explosive stalactites to drop on him. You have to track down these cores on his body to destroy him, to weaken him, though they're really just kind of busy work. They don't really do much. There's a huge super attack that you need to use the ballista binder to intercept, and Nergigante will arrive to fight you on his back partway through the battle. It's a pretty neat little ensemble arrangement of different set pieces and interactions that if I were to take all of that and translate it onto a TTRPG format, I think that would be a lot of fun for the players to solve. Hell, the Arch-Tempered Zora Magdaros, I think, even further proves this claim because your timer is reduced, his health and other statistics are all increased, and as a result, you need to be much tighter in your gameplay to be able to clear his quest. They even let you more properly fight Nergigante on his back by making Nergi stay a lot longer. I ran this quest back to gather footage for this video, and honestly, one other thing I'll give him is that towering visage of Zora Magdaros overlooking a battle with Nergigante and hurling lava blasts down upon the two of us as we were fighting, that's kinda sick. And I wish that they used Zora Magdaros' back as an event quest location more times. All of that, however, does not make for a great boss fight in a one-on-one action RPG. There just isn't a dance to him. Even with some of the other big gargantuan monsters, they can have the potential to engage with you on some level. Some of the newer ones actually do. Zora, he can't really combo you. He kinda can't attack you directly. There's just too much of him. It's almost kind of strictly what you can throw at him with siege weapons and him attacking installations rather than you. I think for a game designed around direct contact with the enemy's moveset and interacting around it and with it, Zora might be too big to engage in any kind of interesting way with the weapons. Maybe with some of the other mechanics, sure, yeah, if you think like the siege stuff is kind of fun, then you think it's fun, but with like the actual weapons, the core DNA of the game, he doesn't really have a size that allows you to properly engage with him. Zora has, however, made a couple of other interesting contributions to Monster Hunter in that his corpse has been a centerpiece to the Guiding Lands and Rise's Frost Islands. The Guiding Lands is the result of a dying Zora Magdaros. I don't remember if it's ever said if it's the story one or a different one, filled to the brim with bioenergy from the New World and then exploding into this kind of microcosm of the entire continent in the form of one single island off of its coast. And in the Frost Islands, the dead Zora was pursued by a dragon hunting ship until both of them froze and were stranded in this wasteland. His design is also pretty cool. Giant, god-sized alligator snapping turtle dragon that's carrying a volcano shell on its back. I will say there's some odd texture work on him, and often the molten rock pouring off of him kind of looks a little bit more like molten rubber. He's also got a pretty sick Dark Souls box art looking armor set that I really enjoy. Now, all that credit being given to him, do I like Zora? No, not really. He's not great. But, you know, I do want to give him some credit. There's some craftsmanship to the encounter itself that I appreciate and sometimes enjoy every once in a while, but he's in the wrong game. I just wanted to run a little bit of defense for him at the very least. Now, on to the first flagship of the 5th generation, Nergigante. It's become a little cool in a couple of places to hate on Nergigante recently. He is super popular and had that popularity reinforced because he came in 2nd place for the most popular Monster Hunter monster of all time in that poll that was done a little while ago. With that comes a lot of people who want to scream their hot takes at the top of their lungs because they find being a contrarian to be gratifying. These people are stupid and wrong. Nergigante rocks. Yeah, his role in the narrative is a bit undercooked, but we'll get there when we get there, and as a monster and as a concept, no, he's sick. He also solidified some fight groundwork that every other 5th generation flagship would go on to use, and then did it better than all of them. Nergigante to me is Monster Hunter's take on a 90s comic book anti-hero. He's decked out in horns and spikes and dark colors and a sinister, brutish attitude. Other powerful creatures are riled up by his mere presence. However, due to his biology requiring him to consume vast amounts of food, especially other extremely powerful monsters that are dense with bioenergy, Nergigante by his nature has a role in the ecosystem that we humans attribute with a sort of nobility. The main antagonists of Monster Hunter World and Iceborne, Xeno and Shara, are his targets because they are these colossal sources of rich, powerful bioenergy for Nergigante to consume. He has the same foes as us. He will emerge when beings like Zora and Xeno and Shara appear because they are buffets to him. He's not heroic. He's an animal, but our human brains have a bit of a tendency to kind of anthropomorphize things as it's how we understand each other, and we kind of put that on animals sometimes and to other parts of the living world. It's given Nergigante a bit of an interesting reputation and perception within the fanbase that I find fascinating. Nergigante has no idea that he's in a narrative. He's just trying to eat, and he'll absolutely kill humans in his way, but his target is still the antagonists of the narrative. He does what we consider the right thing to do for his own self-interest. Like I said, 90s comic anti-hero. Another thing people love about him is how he fights. For an Elder Dragon, his powers are very subtle. No big elemental breath weapons or weather manipulation. His abilities are purely defensive. He has some limited regeneration abilities which allow him to heal over some wounds and regrow his spines when they get hacked off. But here's the thing. Nergigante, despite knowing he has defensive abilities, does not fight defensively. Instead, he relies on his ability to heal and rearmor himself as an excuse to fight ballistically. He is a brutal combatant, terrifyingly strong, ruthlessly aggressive, and endlessly tenacious. In fact, he hits so hard that he will often tear out his own spikes from the sheer impact of his strikes because he knows that his body will heal itself. Most other hyper-aggressive physical attackers in Monster Hunter are glass cannons or no-holds-barred brutes that will abandon tactics for violence. It's kind of cool to have a brutal physical monster that fights the way he does, not simply because he's hyper-violent, but because he knows that the passive abilities of his biology will compensate for this fighting style. And therein lies the gimmick. In terms of gameplay, Nergigante's attacks will fling off chunks of spikes. These will then start regrowing over pretty quickly. They'll start off nice and soft, white, and vulnerable, but given time, these spikes will harden and be able to turn away blades easily. You want to focus on those weak spikes to knock down Nergigante before they harden. If too many of his spikes harden, then he'll perform a massive dive bomb that will reset his spikes and do a lot of damage. Basically, you're trying to stave off that dive bomb from happening and have to play aggressively with good target prioritization, all while the surface area you can attack gradually diminishes and diminishes. Now, Nergigante didn't invent this attack a certain body part to keep a monster depowered mechanic. Like, for instance, you gotta beat up Zenogre to knock him out of his charge state. You need to be aggressive against frenzied monsters to overcome its debuff and all that kind of stuff in Monster Hunter 4. Hell, there's even like the leg targeting on Shen Garen to get him back down to the ground in the second generation Monster Hunter games, but I think Nergigante perfected this gimmick. In fact, he perfected it so well that, like I said earlier, every other 5th generation flagship, Velkhana, Magnamalo, and Malzeno, have some form of the attack a specific body part to weaken the monster mechanic and get him out of a powered up state, and none of them could do it better than Nergi did. He's got a great kit of fast headbutts and big wind-up paw slams, a decent unit of wind pressure with his strong wing attacks, tail and claw sweeps, and that dive bomb is a simple, terrifying, card-inducing super attack if you are not prepared for it. I just love that design too. I think it shows off how good some of the spiky frontier monsters would look with some proper modeling and color work and color blending and proportion tweaking. He's like this gargoyle minotaur dragon with sleek onyx black scales, plenty of bone-like colors from his horns and his spikes, and some well-placed orange and violet around his face and his belly to give him a nice little splash of vibrancy. He's got this kind of blend of like big meathead badass and dark edgelord that kind of balance around one another and complement each other really well. I think he's exceptional, and I'm patiently waiting for him to properly come back in full force. Maybe a title update monster for Wild's expansion or something. That'd be awesome. Valhazak on paper sounds like a bit of a shark jump. Oh, a zombie elder dragon. Ooh, how 13 years old of you. But this is Monster Hunter where 95% of the creature design is fantastic, so if anyone was gonna get it right, it was gonna be them, and yeah, they did get it right. He's really cool. Despite not being the best fight ever, Valhazak, again, pretty beloved. He has a kind of symbiosis with the effluvia bacteria that dominates the Rotten Vale, and he can weaponize it while also assisting in its multiplication and enhancement, which allows the Rotten Vale to function. The scraps of carrion that Valhazak carries all over his body are what houses the effluvium bacteria, and he can then project that effluvium onto other animals and organisms, letting that bacteria gather nutrients. He can then let that effluvia be or siphon it back into himself, draining the life force of the other animals around him and sustaining his own body. Valhazak is basically a walking effluvia recycling and refinery plant, and since the effluvia is what allows the Rotten Vale to break down and recycle all the dead animals that the Vale collects into the bioenergy that sustains the continent, Valhazak is among the most ecologically important and fascinating animals in Monster Hunter. To be perfectly honest, we probably shouldn't kill these guys, but this is a video game, so I fight them, we do. This fight is certainly not bad, but it is Valhazak's weakest aspect. He's pretty slow, almost a one-trick pony, and doesn't communicate his core gimmick particularly well at times. It was only after reading about him in World's Complete Works guidebook that I learned that Valhazak, when not covered in effluvium, is supposed to be a quicker and more agile monster. I never put that together in gameplay. Valhazak is pretty lethargic, whether or not he has effluvium pouring off of him, and I would never consider him to be agile. The more notable part of his fight is when that effluvium gas is pouring off of his body. It creates a damage over time effect, and prolonged exposure can result in you contracting a debuff that cuts your health in half. You can also gain this debuff instantaneously if you get hit by Val's sweeping effluvia beams and downward gas exhalation attacks. It's one of the coolest debuffs in Monster Hunter and potentially one of the most deadly, but Val is usually just way too slow to capitalize on it. His beam and gas attacks usually don't have much in terms of follow-up moves, and if you use decorations to make yourself immune to this debuff, then his kit just kinda doesn't have much of any menace to it anymore. I think Capcom may have got cold feet over how potent this debuff is, and then overcorrected by making Val such a slow, lumbering opponent with super limited combo and mix-up potential. Additionally, I think there's a severely missed opportunity in the fight for Val to siphon the effluvia off of your body to do massive damage to you, like he can do to other small monsters on the map. I have never dreaded Valhazak's fight, not in the slightest, not in terms of actually fearing it, nor not wanting to do it. I just think he's half-baked. It is the ecology and the aesthetics that absolutely prop up Valhazak. As I said, this idea might not have worked if not carefully handled, but carefully handled it was. Valhazak looks amazing and carries a tremendous sense of gravitas to him. The brown and red of his carrion armor matched with his glassy blue and gray scales makes for a completely unique color scheme, and the desaturation of the game makes it so that these contrasting elements don't clash too hard with one another. I love the somewhat fish-like qualities of his head shape and the sheen of his scales, and the large yellow false eyes and separated second lower jaw gives him this kind of harrowing, alien, and striking look to him. Valhazak stands, I think, at the upper echelons of creature design in this series, even by this series' standards. The blend of dragon, aquatic life, the undead, bacterial bioweapon powers, and all of that just pool together into a lordly terror of a beast that essentially rules the underworld of the entire new world. Just writing this section makes me absolutely adore this creature. I just also want to adore that fight. Xeno'jiiva is the high-rank final boss of World, and man, you want to talk about out there monster designs. Xeno'jiiva looks like a straight-up alien. More of a Yu-Gi-Oh monster than a Monster Hunter monster. If the new world could be compared to a living organism, then Xeno'jiiva is a parasitic tumor nestled in said organism's heart. It is a beast that feeds exclusively on bioenergy and siphons it out of the new world's natural processes. As Xeno'jiiva prepared to leave its cocoon, it released a pheromone summoning dying elder dragons to migrate to the new world at an accelerated rate. This phenomena is what sparked the Hunters Guild to establish the Research Commission in the first place. I'll talk a little bit more about the overarching story later on, but it's essentially one giant exploration of the game's world building and cycle of life. Xeno'jiiva is meant to be an anthropomorphized corruption of that natural process. He is the raw power of the continent given flesh and form, and that I think is a fascinating concept. The fact that we can even have a chance of standing up to him is because he is a newborn. His powers are beyond his full control. His body is soft and vulnerable, and he has very little concept of tactics. He lashes out belligerently the second he hatches and is put down accordingly. Much like Valhazak, most will agree that this fight is just too slow, too laborious, and not terribly engaging. What's worse is that Xeno has a mountain of health and can often overstay his welcome. His attacks mainly consist of big trampling charges, a couple of paw slams, and a series of crystal beam attacks. I would say the neatest thing about the battle is that his beam weapons and the tremendous amount of heat pouring off of his body can then superheat the ground around him to the point where it can light you on fire if you touch those heated patches. This is admittedly a pretty cool way to dynamically shift the battlefield, and the extra fire damage is notable enough that it encourages me to bring fire resistance to this battle when I prepare for it. I don't know, the fight's just not horribly engaging. The light show is very pretty, but there are other monsters at this size that have more interesting abilities, greater speed, and better follow-ups. He does face some decent redemption in his arch-tempered form though, still not the greatest thing ever. This incredibly powerful form of Xeno'jiiva ditches the nothing burger for his phase, improves his combo abilities, and gives him more persistent fire on the ground after his beams. He's also got more quakes on several of his attacks and higher fire damage. This fight can be fairly challenging and incentivizes the use of defensive skills to get around his quakes and his fire. One thing that I don't love about either version of him is that he stands a little bit too far off the ground. His chest can be a tad tough to hit, and sometimes his head sits a little high too, unless you're really punishing one of his beam weapons. A lot of the time you're going to be knocking out his forelegs, and those don't always want to stand super still. It can be a little frustrating to fight him with melee weapons. And then the design itself is, damn, this thing looks crazy. Gigantic, with what is normally this translucent, just dull gray skin, fully then lit up with a brilliant, otherworldly blue of pure energy, and he's got this glowing, burning core that sits at the center of him, which sears even brighter when he's angered. That energy courses throughout his entire body, lessening the more it gets away from his core, and flaring, pulsing, flickering trails of bioenergy constantly just emit from him. He has several sets of false eyes running up his large black horns, which are meant to make him look larger and more intimidating. When those wings fully unfurl and he takes to the air, he is utterly colossal, filling up the entire camera. He perfectly encapsulates the concept of a juvenile, otherworldly energy dragon. I love his concept and what he represents in World's narrative, but among the 5th generation final story bosses, I think he is probably the weakest in terms of combat. Now, in World's 2nd title update, we were treated to the emergence of Kulve Taroth. We talked about the mechanics of World Sieges a while ago. Now let's talk about the monster herself, and she is pretty damn unique. A gargantuan, wingless, subterranean elder dragon with golden scales, giant ram horns, and an enormous, full-body encapsulating cloak of molten gold covering her entire form. She dominates these caverns deep beneath the New World that are teeming with gold deposits, and she uses her fire breath to carve out tunnel systems down here. She has absolutely zero competition in these caverns. However, the gold down here is so plentiful that she and the other smaller species that live alongside her have had their hides and carapaces warped to have traces and flecks of gold found within them. It is believed that her giant horns have a magnetic property to them, which allow her to more easily gather the metals onto her coat of gold. Cutting these horns and studying them is the main reason why she is hunted. There's maybe 2 issues with Kulve Taroth's fight in total, and that's about it. First of all, in her proper siege fight, her first phase is pretty boring. She just kind of marches around in these passageways, letting you shoot her with cannons and drop rocks on her. She doesn't really retaliate at all. It's typical old siege monster hunter stuff. It's not engaging, and you're just really kind of trying to rush through it. The back 3 phases are all excellent though, and the only other potential issue is that she's so large and long that some of her hitboxes on her huge golden cloak feel a little wonky, and that's kind of it. This battle is excellent, especially the Master Rank version, which cuts the first phase and siege mechanics out and just goes all in on the fight. She manages to be big and slow with her cloak on while still being ferocious. She rolls, uses tail sweeps and horn strikes and a very solid variety of flame breath attacks to fight you. She doesn't combo super often, but the gaps between her attacks aren't painfully long. This gives her a very steady and intimidating rhythm and cadence to her battle, considering the fact that she can very easily two-shot you. A lot of her attacks are just so gigantic and heavy-hitting that the more average speed of her attack output is what kind of balances things out and keeps the fight fair. You need to spend the battle cleaving through her armor, trying to enrage her, or landing mounting attacks to heat up and soften her golden armor. You then knock off chunk after chunk after chunk of her golden armor until she sheds her coat completely, lures you into her lair for the final battle. This last stage tones down the size of her attack and a little bit of the damage in order to ramp up the speed. She gets much more physical with comboing tail sweeps, larger head slams, full body lunges, and rapid horn strike hits. Also, a greater ability to aim her flame attacks. She also has an awesome looking ultimate move where she slithers up the spire in the middle of her lair and ignites the gold on the cavern ceiling, causing molten metal to rain down on the hunters. She is absolutely vicious and intimidating, and absolutely one of the best fights in the game, Iceborne included. Kulve Taroth is a pretty awesome super boss for World, since her model uses the same rig as Great Jagras and the other reptilian fanged wyverns that make up the lower levels of most of the game's maps. It's pretty cool to have a maximum power level of the game's starting monsters, and something that doesn't happen all that often in Monster Hunter, if at all, if I remember correctly. And her design is just stellar. She's got a nice, simple black and gold palette, which works brilliantly. I love the mismatch of textures and shapes and kind of jagged edges and cracks that are present in her golden coat. The art team did a really good job making her look like she's covered in a mass of melted together clumps and chunks and tidbits of gold. It really nails feels the feel of a big molten mass of metal. And when the cloak is gone, she's got a pretty stellar simple design. Big four-legged reptilian, nice and bulky, but also pretty sleek and agile looking, communicates strength and speed at the same time. She keeps a decent distance off the ground. Her horn proportions look really good. She's a huge gilded dragon lizard and pulls off that spectacle beautifully while not really trying too hard or being too garish with it. Say whatever you want about siege mechanics, but as a monster, I think Call of Taroth is an enormous triumph, one of the best that Monster Hunter has to offer as a whole. And now we're going to wrap up our coverage of World Monsters with the two crossover monsters we got towards the end of Base Game World's lifespan. The Behemoth from Final Fantasy, as well as the Leshen and Ancient Leshen from the Witcher games. Capcom put a lot of effort into these collaborations, going out of their way to add mechanics and music and fonts and little bits and pieces from the respective game mechanic-wise to recreate some of the spirit of those other titles these foes came from. I admire the craftsmanship and the reverence and the respect here a lot. They didn't just port over enemies from other video games. There's a level of effort that they didn't need to go into. With Behemoth, they gave him mechanics that incentivize you to have set roles, kind of a dedicated tank, some DPS players, and a support player. Kind of like roles in an MMO or a class-based RPG. Also, it will list the special attacks on the side of the screen that Behemoth is using, similar to how Final Fantasy will display the attack and spell names of the opponents you're fighting. And for the Leshen quests, you actually get to play as Geralt of Rivia and run around tracking the Leshen, speaking with the NPCs to learn more about them and the environment, and using context clues to deduce what beast is causing the disturbance in the ancient forest. I actually think this part's kind of neat. I'd honestly be down to see more of Geralt learning about the world of Monster Hunter. Now, did that make for good fights? Well, Behemoth certainly isn't bad. Far from it, honestly. He's a pretty tough challenge. His attacks are harsh and they're heavy hitting. He's got a broad mix of ranged and physical moves. Yeah. He just barely fits into the Elder's Recess, being one of the largest fights of the game that isn't on a single arena boss map, and that just makes the whole fight feel a little bit more intense and claustrophobic. Most of his moves are pretty fun to deal with, and his core gimmick is to bait out the use of his Comet ability, which will drop these stones down onto the ground. You need to then lure him away from the comets so he doesn't break them, as they are the only things on the map that will protect you from his ultimate move, the Ecliptic Meteor. Even if you retreat to camp and hide in the tent, Ecliptic Meteor will kill you, so you have to either duck behind the comets or use this emote that came with the Behemoth update to dodge the blast. The meteor will also damage Behemoth, and quite often the final blow against him will be self-inflicted. The big problem with Behemoth's fight is Charybdis, this tornado summoning spell. He loves this move and spams it all over the place. The tornadoes are enormous. They're basically just like Kashala's tornadoes in this game, which are annoying, and they can even block off entryways if you get really unlucky with his placement of them. You're supposed to do one of two things. You can either lure the tornadoes onto the walls so that they're kind of like these non-factors in the fights, or you can use flash pods to stun him out of the attack. And like we talked about earlier, flash pod efficacy drops off harshly in this game, and he uses this move so much that even if you manage to get a couple of tornadoes on the wall, you're inevitably going to miss at least one, especially if you're actively trying to fight him normally. Then you get targeted by the spell, then you need to sheathe and run to get to the tornado all the way over to the edge of the map, and then by that point the tornado is just going down in the middle of the map. It's immensely annoying. The extreme version of Behemoth especially will use this move sometimes like 4 times in a row. It sucks. Other than that, I tend to enjoy the battle. The class-based fighting doesn't really suit Monster Hunter, but it isn't overly intrusive, and his fight is typically fairly well balanced with some cool attacks and a nail-biting mechanic with the meteor. I generally enjoy it. And the Leshen fight is, I don't know. I don't think it's like bad. I just don't like it. Behemoth at least feels like a Monster Hunter fight. He's a big beast with ranged and physical moves, and he fights like a big beast. He's got some annoying stuff. Leshen, he works okay. First of all, fighting a tall, lanky humanoid that fights like a tall, lanky humanoid with spellcraft just feels odd, and it's not really designed around the Monster Hunter weapons, and yeah, you can hit him, but it really doesn't feel like his moves were just built for the things that Monster Hunter weapons do. The two different kits just kind of don't mesh well, and on top of that, Leshen just has a mess of mechanics that blend together to make a pretty annoying experience. He's got get off me AoE attacks, he's got ranged spam moves, he's got a damage over time aura, he's got teleportation, and he's got minion swarms. He lacks the ability to engage in a proper dance with you, so he kind of just throws as many things as possible at you to keep you from getting up in his face. I generally like monsters with defensive mechanics and tools to debilitate the hunter, but that almost feels like it's all Leshen has. Minus a couple of claw swipes, Leshen really just does everything in its power to not fight you, and it doesn't match this game. And what's worse, the counters for his gimmicks are kind of inconsistent. You get this little fire blast thing to ward off the birds that surround him and do damage over time, but the birds will replenish usually before the fire ability does, and you can also interrupt the teleport thing and stun him by hitting him in the head with slinger ammo, but the timing and the hitbox for that can sometimes feel kind of inconsistent and not work all that great. And then there's the Ancient Leshen. That thing's probably the least fun I've ever had with Monster Hunter in my life, and I've only fought it like twice total ever. Everything wrong with the regular Leshen is amplified, and that's just in the first phase. Apparently the thing just gets worse the more it goes on. If you really want a good breakdown of just how bad this fight is, I'd recommend you check out this World Monsters Ranked video by Brybash and Benedict, because at least he bothered to fight the whole thing. I'll take this as a stain on my journalistic integrity. I don't care. I'm not fighting him. Hey, actually, like, check it. I found a way to make it easier. See, I found a secret button that permanently deactivates this stupid ever-present bird armor that keeps reappearing within 3 fucking seconds of you making it go away. Here, look, check it out. Okay, now it's time for the brand new Iceborne monsters. Man, this is a long script. Holy crap. And yeah, no, it's not really getting any better from here on out. Right. So, on to Beototis. The Piscean Wyverns get some do and undo crap as an overall category. There's not a ton of entities in this line, and a half-decent percentage of them are pretty weak. Lavasioth has a couple cool relatives in Frontier that I think elevate the overall grouping if you want to consider them, and I've got some tamer opinions on the likes of things like Gerototis and Plesioth, and some people do, but I hold, I would say, the uncontroversial opinion that Beototis may very well be the best beast within the Piscean Wyvern category across the whole series. He looks cool, he sounds cool, he's an entertaining early bout, and does a really great job setting the scene for Iceborne. Now, Beototis is the first fight in Iceborne, so he certainly isn't difficult, but unlike Great Jagras, he doesn't exist to merely be slaughtered. He's a fairly threatening presence in the lower regions of the Hoarfrost Reach, chiefly because he can capitalize on the deep snowdrifts down there. He's kind of a shallow water fight, like his cousin Gerototis, having free reign to swim around in waist-deep snow that makes up the first 3 or so battle arenas on the map. He rules fairly unchecked there, save for the occasional appearance of Bonboro or a Fulgur Anjanath. What's also cool about this guy is his cultural significance in the region. The local Linian tribe, called the Boa Boa, treat Beototis as their greatest challenge. The Beototis is an honored foe that only the greatest of their kind can take down, and being able to best one earns you respect from their clan. There's even this little sub-quest that explores this. I love little world-building tidbits where the monsters are meaningful to the people who live alongside them. I think that's really sick. As I said earlier, this fight's not really going to challenge you, but it is going to make you bleed just a little. Beototis has the speed and maneuverability advantage, making far greater use of his environment than Gerototis does. He's got a fun rhythm where he kind of fights like a shark, relying on your limited ability to move so that he can leap in and out of the fray and pick you apart with little dives and bites and lunges and whatnot from afar. He struggles to be effective if knocked out of the snow and onto his legs, but he still has a couple of bites and charges and tail attacks and can apply Ice Blight fairly liberally. He also moves fast enough that his hit and run tactics don't make the fight monotonous. You more or less need to wait for him to lunge at you, counterattack, pick apart his ice armor, and then put him down. I think he's one of the series' better opening monsters in terms of threat and combat. His position limits what he can do, but I think he still does the best that he can. He also just looks super cool. He's got that massive halberd blade sticking out of his head. His mix of a very dark blue-gray shell with this lean frame communicates his speed and danger incredibly well. I like the yellow and the red colors on his underside and his fins. I wish they just let that pop a tiny bit more. His snow armor doesn't make him look rotund and non-threatening like the mud armor does for Gerototis, and the dude's just got this permanent hate-filled scowl, complete with these malicious little beady eyes and huge gnarled teeth. I also adore his sound design. He sounds like a revving chainsaw for some reason. It just kind of works. Beatotus is a pretty damn cool creation that unfortunately Iceborne kind of leaves behind, and I think the fan base has forgotten a little bit. He's one of those monsters where, by the game's relative standards, he kind of gets brushed aside, but if you saw that thing in real life, he'd be horrifying. I love the Chainsaw Halberd Ice Shark thing, and yeah, I hope he gets a comeback at some point. A question that's often asked is, what's one thing you could remove from a franchise's canon if you could? This may not be my real answer. There's probably way better answers than this, but man, do I wish that they just kept Bonbro on the Hoardfrost Reach and didn't let him go gallivanting around the entire world. I really like Bonbro. He's a giant, charming elk brute wyvern who runs around with trees and rocks in his antlers. Why the hell can he go to every map in the game? I know what the meta answer is. Developers wanted to create a monster that could have altered properties for its attacks depending on the map it was on. So they picked Bonbro, since Bonbro's whole shtick is that he rips up the map terrain itself and uses that as a weapon. Naturally, that terrain would change depending on the map. Few problems with that. Number one, you already got two monsters that can already do this in Iceborne. They're called Tigrex and Deviljho, who both have these rock-tossing attacks, which historically, and still in this game, have the property to change elements depending on the map that they're on. And number two, you picked to put on every map, including the barren desert, tropical rainforest, and volcano, an enormous, two-legged, fluff-covered caribou. Yeah, sure. I guess Bonbro can be a more dramatic version of the whole terrain manipulation ability thing, because he picks up larger objects and holds them for longer, but wow, he does not look good on some of the other maps, and I hate having this gigantic caveat just permanently lingering over Bonbro, because otherwise I think he's kind of dope. I think it's awesome when the monster categories break away from their typical design conventions and branch out a little bit. Brute wyverns are typically big, scary, dinosaurian theropod carnivores, because of course they are. That's what their model is. They're just other T-Rexes. So when you have these peaceful giant herbivores like Bonbro and Durambros at the brute wyvern category, it helps prevent the group from becoming one note. And Bonbro makes it so that Tries Durambros isn't a one and done for this kind of change. The fight is also, it's perfectly fine for what it is. He's Iceborne's second unique monster, so you're likely never dying to even tempered versions of him, but he can put in some halfway decent damage for how early he is, and his core gimmick isn't, like, super annoying or anything. Maybe just a tad overused, honestly. He's got a few of your classical tail sweep attacks and horn headbutts and whatnot that you'd expect a monster like this to have, but mostly what he wants to do is pick up objects with his horns. Most of the time, this will be large boulders. He'll either scoop them up and lob them at you, or he'll drag them around along the ground and try to bowl you over like that. What he'll want to do is make you guess how long he's going to keep the boulder, sometimes slamming it after one single charge, and other times he'll hit these very sharp U-turns to try and hit you more than once or catch you when you're trying to punish his slam attack. When he's in a wooded area, he can grab tree trunks instead. This move is similar, but the hitbox is much wider. There's not, like, too much to him combat-wise outside of the terrain drag attack, so he definitely doesn't count amongst, like, the greatest fights of all time, and certainly not within the brute wyvern category whatsoever, but I've never had a bad time fighting him, you know, during the times where I was actually intending to fight him. His design is probably his greatest strength and greatest weakness for the reasons already stated. He is a perfectly created Arctic creature and has no business being anywhere else. Maybe if they just made some modicum of effort and maybe changed the color of his fur in a different environment or thinned out the fur in a warmer environment, just like anything. Because on his home turf, he looks excellent. To put it bluntly, he's a mixture of a T-Rex and a moose with a gigantic coat of white fur, and it looks awesome. There's a component of him that looks very kind of cuddly and fluffy, but the posture, the bulk, and the expression, that kind of adds this this air of intimidation to him as well. The design captures that fear factor you would have seeing something like a moose or a rhino in the wild in real life. Even though he typically has a pretty even temperament, he's another monster where I honestly think his placement in the game undersells just how frightening of a creature he should really be. I don't think it would be unfitting if you took Bonbro in a future game and you scaled up his health, his damage, and his speed up to the levels of around like a Diablos and create another one of these giant, super powerful mega herbivores that you should know better than to trifle with lightly. Bonbro is a monster I want more out of with a really stupid component that I honestly just ignore. I know some people just straight up hate him for being on every single map. My answer every time is, yeah, that's not real. You know, it doesn't happen. That's not canon. It's not real. What do you mean Bonbro can go to a volcano? That's stupid. Of course he can. He's a giant caribou looking thing. If they ever bring him back, I hope that part just was acted like it never happened. And now we're gonna start working into Iceborne subspecies, and let me tell ya, I think even still to this day, Iceborne made really damn good subspecies. Probably the best in the franchise. Viper Tobikadachi, kinda like Bonbro, lives in an environment where his presence is weird. Also like Bonbro, that's kinda the point. Unlike Bonbro, this time it isn't awful. Viper dwells within the caverns beneath the Hoarfrost Reach. Unlike most other denizens of this region, he can't function very well for extended periods of time out in the cold. So he's a bit of a sneak in the dark, lurking at the mouths of the caves, waiting for Popo or other herbivores to wander too close. He'll then use his fangs and quills to quickly pump venomous paralytic toxins into his victims' bodies and drag them down into the depths. The tunnels down here are warmed by the hot springs that bubble up to the surface, and they allow him to survive in this little carved out niche. He's a devious little assassin, striking from the darkness to survive in a land that is hostile to him. I think the Viper nomenclature is perfect for how he operates and hunts. Now, Viper is a little bit less reliant on climbing tree trunks and branches like a normal Toby is. He can scale the cavern walls a little bit, but it's not really what he's built for. Instead, of Viper Kadachi uses powerful leaps to gain airtime and will deploy his wing flaps in short controlled bursts to maintain airtime and fire off projectiles down at foes or lunge at them. The toxins of the Viper are highly potent. His bite can paralyze you instantly, and his tail spines don't just inflict poison, they dish out the more lethal toxin debuff. His regular tail hits, though, will usually just inflict the normal poison status. Getting hit by these back-to-back can absolutely be lethal. However, Viper doesn't tend to spam his bite attack too much, and it's really the only way he can deploy his paralysis. In the times that I fought him, I don't really remember getting tag teamed by these debuffs too often, though it's happened once or twice. I am willing to believe that this combination has resulted in a few exasperating cards here and there, though. Now, that's a pretty dangerous combination of status effects to put on a fairly low-end monster, but I kind of dig it, honestly. As I said, he doesn't really spam his paralysis, which is far and away the more annoying of the two debuffs. When the two do combine, they're very dangerous, which makes counter building important. I'm very much of the opinion that if a debuff isn't annoying, then what's the point? And we don't have many dual status monsters at all, so that kind of uniqueness does give him a couple more points in my mind as well. I think this lineup of abilities also suits his name and his hunting style very well. He needs to be incredibly efficient in order to survive, and these abilities let him do that. That and the fact that he has his own separate fighting style and a pretty original roster of moves when compared to the original makes Viper Tobikadachi a very worthwhile subspecies, and those new attacks are pretty cool too. Very acrobatic with lots of repositioning and flanking and large area covering spins. He's a little bit more of a mid-range fighter than the normal Kadachi could be. It's too bad that there's not a ton of reason to fight the guy, because I wish I had done so more. It's a pretty cool little bout. I think he's got a great set of colors on him too. He has no real camouflage, but that's not really what he's going for. His bright amber colors and dark spots are meant to communicate that he is poisonous, not to be trifled with, not worth the effort. It is a deterrent. This is something seen in a lot of real-world snakes. Black and orange is also just a really nice looking set of colors. I'm very fond of how Viper took the snake-like attributes that the regular Kadachi already had and just leaned all the way into them. I think that's really cool. From the colors to the patterns to the abilities to the hunting style, I think Viper is a great nomenclature for the subspecies, and I think he's another fairly overlooked creation. I think he's a really solid status monster. I think Nightshade Palumu is pretty solid and a little overhated, honestly. Yeah, he's a pretty potent wielder of the sleep element status and uses it pretty frequently, but I think he's also a pretty solid physical combatant, and his usage of sleep has some areas where it's positively and negatively implemented. He's not the most ecologically fascinating animal. At some point, a population of Palumu migrated to the Wildspire Waste, and the harsher conditions of this environment made them more aggressive, more competent at fighting, and darkened their fur. This subspecies has a strong presence in the forested corners of the Wildspire, and some populations have been found over in the ancient forest as well. So, the main thing with Nightshade is that his air sacs can produce a potent narcotic gas that he can exhale in large clouds. These clouds will linger around for a while, leaving these sleep-inducing hazards for hunters to have to maneuver through to fight him. He can expel several of these clouds at once or fire them off in individual bursts. Additionally, he can use flaps from his wings, sweeps of his tail, and other strong inhalation abilities to manipulate these sleep clouds, altering the battlefield. So this concept I really love. Yes, he outputs a lot of sleep, but it leaves it more as a trap than as a straightforward attack. You need some good situational awareness to not get dropped. Another thing, unless he's facing multiple opponents, Nightshade is pretty damn good at savagely punishing slept opponents. Those he manages to incapacitate will rapidly be struck with very hard-hitting physical moves, and I appreciate that a lot. If you're gonna use a debuff to put me in a weakened state, at least follow it up with a punish. Make me want to learn to avoid getting hit by these attacks in the future. Don't just waste my time with debilitation followed by nothing. So that's all well and good. My issue with this battle is that he has a move where he'll shoot a lot of sleep directly under him, and another move where he'll inhale and pull a lot of sleep clouds back towards him. These are two pretty big moves with huge moving radiuses that are a little tough to react to if you're up in melee. They both have pretty sizable windups, but if you're committed to attack animations while you're at point blank, while he's setting himself up, you're probably going to get hit by these attacks. These two moves kind of mandate that you either have sleep resistance or energy drinks. Now, I absolutely don't mind monsters with potent status usages that make me heavily consider using defensive skills, but when you have attacks that make it so that if I don't use those defensive precautions, I'm very likely going to get slept repeatedly, I think you might have overtuned that status just a little. Now, the cool thing is that if you do slot in sleep negate, Nightshade doesn't fall apart. He's a much faster, more aggressive Palumu. He spends considerably less time just hovering around getting beat up in his inflated form. He's often strafing around, firing sleep shots, diving at you in the air, swiping and sweeping with his tail, and pretty often deflating the air sac to grant him increased agility in the air. He's got this new kind of corkscrew flying slam attack that I love, deals a lot of damage too. Honestly, I think he's one of the better flying fights in Iceborne, simply because he just wastes so little time and is still low enough to the ground so that you can satisfyingly hit him. He just starts flying around in a nice low altitude, boxing you out with his tail and everything, throwing hands and batting around sleep clouds. He's pretty tenacious for a little bastard, and you can have a good time sparring with him even if you take away his core ability. I think Somnicanth is probably still the best executed sleep monster in the series, and he has a few attacks I don't love, but I think Nightshade Palumu is a solid little duelist with a mechanic that's really cool with a couple of flaws in execution. And then the design is a neat change that communicates his temperament swap. He no longer blends in with his environment like a normal Paluma does. Now he stands out, using his harsh dark fur to communicate aggression and ferocity. When threatened, he'll then inflate his air sac up, which now has these two bright green and red spots that look like massive eyes. They are meant to make Nightshade look larger, more threatening, and deterring predators, insisting that they back off. This is a unique case where the change in the design doesn't necessarily reflect Nightshade's new environment, but rather how that new environment has altered his behavior and his outlook. It's fairly unique. I like it. Coral Pookie is up there on the list of greatest subspecies ever made. Perhaps not the greatest monster ever made that is a subspecies, though I think he's pretty high on that list too. But in terms of adapting the core of a base species for a new map and set of abilities, Coral does it better than maybe every other subspecies ever made. The Coral Pookie dwells in the lower reaches of the Coral Highlands instead of the forest floor of the ancient forest. The Coral Pookie lacks poison-producing organs and does not consume seeds and spore puffs to empower his abilities. Instead, these organs have been repurposed to intake massive quantities of water, which he siphons from the sponge-like coral formations found within the highlands. Now, that is already Kinda neat. An animal who gains power from what he ingests gains different abilities when it lives in a different environment with different things to eat. But then what happens is that Coral Pookie's entire moveset remains fundamentally similar, but changes in execution as he has gone from wielding poisonous globules and gas to high pressure water. He can use his forked tongue to split water beams from his mouth. He has both a horizontal and zigzagging water beam attack from his tail, and the coolest thing he can do is fire off water directly beneath him, swirl his tail in an expanding circular motion, hitting everything in an arc around him. It's an awesome super move, especially for the monster of his power level, and he balances all those range attacks out with charges and bites and tail sweeps and flying claw attacks. The fight has a pretty reliable rhythm to it. Coral has a lot of these huge sweeping water beam attacks that take up a lot of space, and their damage is pretty decent, but they're also fairly well telegraphed. You're going to want to exploit these big wind-up frames to get in and whack him. Once you're in, he'll try to batter you away with physical moves, and when he does, he'll very quickly follow up with water attacks now that you've been driven backwards. He'll then use more water attacks to try and keep you out until you can exploit his animations to get back in a striking distance. Pretty solid rhythm. Unlike something like Leshen, where he predominantly wants to box you out over and over and over and over, Coral is a monster with range and focus and wants to keep you out, but has more fun moves to evade and get in on, and doesn't deteriorate nearly as quickly when you do manage to get in on him. Additionally, hacking off his tail denies him access to a huge portion of his moveset, making it an incredibly important and gratifying tail cut. It's one of the most important part breaks out there that isn't tied to an overarching gameplay gimmick. For that reason, his tail is super adorable and warrants a lot of focus. Feels great every time it's sliced off. He's got a pretty damn fun dance to him, honestly. I think his design is also incredibly good, if maybe a tiny bit weaker than the original. I think just like the mix of green, violet, and blue on the original Pookie mixes so beautifully well. Coral goes for a bright orange mane of feathers and a predominantly scarlet red color on the top of his body, and then there's this sort of gray-blue that makes up his underside, which is fine, but it takes up a lot of space on him, removes a little bit of his vibrancy, and makes for a complete palette that has a lot of promise, but just, I don't think it comes together quite as well as the original. He certainly doesn't look bad at all. I wish there was more red on him. I think Coral Pookie is a damn near perfectly crafted subspecies. It makes sense for a Pookie to be in this region of the Coral Highlands, as it shares a vast range of altitudes like the Ancient Forest does. Both versions of Pookie roam the lower and middle regions of these maps, both gain abilities from what they eat and drink on the maps, and then each version uses the same bodily mechanisms to interact with the elemental prowess given to them by their environment, and due to the nature of these elements, both Pookies have fundamentally similar movesets that vary greatly in the details. You top all that off with being a really fun fight, and Coral is a phenomenal creation. Shrieking Legiana is not an uncommon pick for the worst fight in all of Iceborne. These are frostbitten variants of Legiana who acclimated extremely well to Hoarfrost Reach to improve upon their ice manipulation abilities. Also, these Shrieking Legiana do not become loners or outcasts from the Legiana flock. In fact, they are often seen fighting in tandem with the non-variant members of the species. Shrieking Legiana is what most Legiana who permanently make the Hoarfrost Reach their home will become. Whereas others may migrate back and forth between the Highlands and the Reach, those who remain in the Reach seem to have their ice-producing organs mutate and strengthen. Shrieking is, well, there's a lot. He's a pest. He loves to fly around, loves to barely touch the ground, also a very proficient aerial combatant, having not a lot of end lag on his attacks, loves to attack and then reposition and attack and then reposition over and over and over again. He also loves to summon another Legiana to fight at his side constantly, and even if you dung pod the second one, they share the exact same territory and will often just bump back into each other by chance, and he adores using ice AoE attacks, and that just kinda all stacks into an encounter that's a bit of a pain in the ass. Now, I want to be fair here. There's ways to deal with Shrieking and mitigate his abilities. He has a bit of a baby version of Velkhana's ice armor, where smashing a bunch of that ice can weaken him. He can get sick and be forced to land when poisoned. He can be flashed out of the air for as long as that works. Thanks again, Kashala. And as mentioned, the other Legiana can be hit with dung pods to make them flee. I also found that the Lance Clutchcock can kind of just no-sell a lot of his moves and punish him pretty easily. Also, you can just go with the Insect Glaive and meet him up in the air. You can deal with his crap in several ways, and I will always advocate for monsters being challenging and debilitating and can be solved like puzzles with defense skills and proper tools and counterpicks, but man, he's just not fun with most weapons, the abilities that counter him will only keep him down for so long, and then it's back to the erratic, non-stop movements and constant ice spike fields where he refuses to just let you hit him. I think the issue is that he doesn't have much beyond being an erratic flying ice monster. I think a lot of his moves are kind of cool in isolation. The ice shard corkscrew and the move where he rapidly ascends and then comes hurtling back down while tossing ice in front of him. Both really awesome looking and feel dangerous, but the fight just feels like it's attacks like that over and over and over and over and over and over and over. When he's on the ground, he's kind of just pathetic. He can barely do anything but just hop around. I almost think the normal Legiana is the better ground combatant. Shrieking is a lot of decent components mashed together in a poor ensemble with little to no connective tissue that balances out the more erratic and element spamming components of the fight. He leans too heavily into his gimmick, has poor punishability, is too reliant on counter tools, and isn't particularly good if those tools are implemented. There's not much to say about the design either. He's a darker, muted frostbitten Legiana. His tan chest has grayed, his brilliant blue wings have become a more kind of charcoal color with still a little bit of blue in there, and his ice protection is just a spattering of frigid fuzz when compared to the more proper ice armor that other users of this technique employ. I will say, when he's angry and the frost intensifies on his body, some of the detailing on his wing patterns and horns will shine white, which looks kind of nice on the darker wings, but yeah, Shrieking's just not great on pretty much any level. At least some of the nothing early monsters are pretty inoffensive. This is just a bad fight, and takes a pretty decent monster from the base game, over-designs his fight, and runs him into the ground. Alright, now with that smudge on the record out of the way, let's get back to the good stuff. Fulgur Anjanath rocks. He looks sick. He hits hard, his moveset is cool, his abilities are awesome, and he feels properly different from the original Anjanath. This white-furred, tiger-striped, thunder-powered Anjanath, kinda like the base Anjanath back in low rank, is a little bit of a gear check. If you're still bumming around in high rank armor at this point, or in some shoddily crafted master rank armor set, you're probably gonna get hit pretty damn hard. And thunder means additional stun chance, so the ability for him to cart you is nice and high if you don't take Fulgur Anjanath seriously. You know you're a good monster when, if my friends and I are on Iceborne and just want to kind of casually hunt something and we're poking around for something to fight, we routinely pick you. Fulgur Anjanath is a great fun run monster. He'll fold against a meta level set, sure, but he can roll with the punches pretty far into the end game and remain fun throughout. He is, however, another one of Iceborne's odd monsters where you can just go to like every map in the game. He looks considerably less egregious on other maps than Bonbro, but once again, you have a creature that looks great in winter camouflage, that looks gorgeous with the snow and the ice as a backdrop, and then you plop him in a rainforest. Why? I guess the Highlands like kinda work. Doesn't look too bad in the recess either, but man, he's not working a couple of locales. However, Fulgur Anjanath has a slightly better explanation for why he roams as much as he does. The Hoarfrost reach has made his subspecies more openly hostile and aggressive, rather than belligerent and territorial like the normal Anjanath. Additionally, the thunder-producing organs in his body generate their power by converting kinetic energy into electricity, which he can deploy in various ways. This means that Fulgur Anjanath kinda needs to be moving and fighting and roaming around to maintain its charge. And that charge is what the fight is all about. Physically, a Fulgur Anjanath fights a lot like his cousin. He strikes with his bulk, his long tail, strong kicks, and powerful lunges and various bite attacks. These bites will demonstrate how Fulgur Anjanath's power works. He has some limited capacity to control where his thunder element appears on his body. For example, he can try and stun you by lacing his fangs and powerful thunder shocks. He can flood the mucus he expels out of his nose with that electrical energy as medium-range projectiles. As he gets angrier and more amped up, he starts using his lightning attacks more liberally. This is where the two species of Anjanath differentiate the most. They wield their elements pretty differently. A regular Anjanath is pretty proficient at short range and long range combat, while also being pretty good at closing distance. He uses long-reaching flamethrower breath attacks and scalding flaming sneezes to try and attack those who are keeping their distance before charging back in. Fulgur Anjanath is a little bit more of a brawler, relying more on his close range thunder mucus, his thunder bites, thunder-backed kicks, lightning explosion ground bites, and when he wants to expel all his energy in a Hail Mary attack, he'll wreathe himself in lightning foley and dive at his foes with all of his weight and power put behind it. Though the regular Anjanath is a really solid battle, I think this is what makes Fulgur a little bit more satisfying to fight. He loves to be up in your face, biting and kicking and tackling and shocking, giving you very little space or breathing room. He's a very melee-centered battle with some mid-range options if he needs them, and is a great aggressive pace to him. And to top it all off, man, he looks good, especially when he's all lit up with electricity. I wasn't so sure about the color choice at first, but it's really grown on me. The vast majority of his body is sheer white with black tiger stripes running all over him. They make his face orange while still keeping the stripes. I couldn't find a direct answer for why his colors changed like this. Maybe the art team just thought that the full white kind of didn't look good or something. Maybe they just wanted to be more evocative of a tiger while also having some Arctic camouflage, but I think it looks stellar. The color blending between those two segments looks great, and it makes him distinct when compared to a lot of other monsters that will have just a very consistent color palette across their whole body. He's also got a much larger and shaggier coat of fur when compared to the standard Anjanath, which I appreciate because it's awesome when a subspecies or variant actually kind of tweaks the model a little bit beyond just colors when appropriate for a new environment or power sets. And oh man, when he gets pissed off and flares up the wings and the nasal structure and sends lightning pulsing through those organs and arcing out of his mouth, damn, does he look cool. Every single time it happens, it gets that kind of like hell yeah response going in the brain. He's one of those monsters that's got a ton of fan art just because he looks that good, and I'm sure a lot of people just love drawing him. Fulgur Anjanath is pretty stellar in just about every category. Love seeing him, fighting him. His armor looks great. He contrasts himself from the original species in terms of environment and element and fighting style. Why this is the only monster from the main story that doesn't have its own cutscene, I got no idea. Totally deserved it. Love the guy. I am a little surprised people don't talk about acidic Glavenus more, and that it kind of goes for me as well. He's a pretty sick subspecies for Glavenus, which inverts the fight in some clever ways that I think warrants a good deal of praise. And on top of that, I think it's pretty awesome that they just took a monster from a previous game and generation and gave him a brand new subspecies out of nowhere. That doesn't happen too often. Sure, you get those group gimmick variation monsters like the Risens or the Deviants who will fill in their roster with some monsters from previous titles every once in a while, but just an unprompted new species for a veteran monster is kind of a cool surprise. But I don't know. Maybe Glavenus is just a little too iconic, a tad too perfect of a concept. Acidic may be trying to reinvent the wheel, and that's why he doesn't get a ton of regard. He's a cool reinvention, don't get me wrong, but I think if you take a giant battle armor covered Carnotaurus with a burning greatsword tail and Optimus Prime colors and try to change them around too much, any other concept just isn't going to hit as hard. Acidic Glavenus is a pretty dominant presence within the Rotten Vale. His hide has become a murky green, he's lost his flame-producing organs, and his tail will consistently become covered in a highly acidic substance, which will start to harden over time. Conventionally, the tail of an acidic Glavenus is much lighter than that of the average Glavenus, and those acid crystals will weigh it down. That is the core gimmick at work with an acidic Glavenus. At first, you may think that acidic is just a color-swapped Glavenus with defense down instead of the fire element. The acid crystal-covered tail is also a pretty bad hit zone, repelling most blades, so that makes it a much tougher part to break, which is a little bit of an inverse compared to the typical Glavenus. At this point, it'd be kind of cool to just get a new Glavenus that has defense down, which is an often overlooked debuff, so that would put acidic around the quality of one of the better third-generation subspecies. But the neat thing is that the defense down acid is pretty much just a red herring. The fight does not revolve around that debuff at all. See, when a normal Glavenus runs its tail through its teeth, that's how it heats up its tail and preps it for ignition. This is him instigating the elemental part of his fight. When an acidic Glavenus runs his tail through his teeth, he's actually getting rid of the elemental component of his fight and unveiling what this battle is actually all about. An acidic Glavenus is a precise, fast-acting, and cunning swordsman, utilizing his lighter tail to pull off more elaborate flurries of sword swings. He's got this raised sword stance where he'll keep his tail near his head and pointed in front of him. From here, he can stab at the ground in front of him and can rapidly slash down at the ground before quickly repositioning, and he can lunge forward, sweeping his tail in large slicing arcs. He can even do a false tail spin, sweeping his tail harshly up in front of him and then following up with a returning sweep in the other direction. He even has some additional follow-ups on classic Glavenus moves. He can combo a lot of Glavenus's old big heavy tail spin attacks into smaller brief second attacks to throw you off guard. He's got a huge ensemble of insanely cool tail moves, and I think the animators did a great job of giving Acidic a lot of speed and technique while also retaining the weight that a creature this big should have. Additionally, his held sword stance doesn't make this fight feel like he's just holding an attack on delay to bait you to react early. The stance communicates which attacks he might be using next, and he has unique windups to telegraph these specific attacks from that stance. I find that this is a pretty satisfying fight to learn. I really enjoy facing him down with a lance to endure the onslaught, but but even more cool, I think, is trying to match his longsword design inspiration with a longsword of your own, trying to properly duel him with parries and counter hits. Most weapons should be able to deal with his moveset just fine, but I think he is best dealt with a weapon that is meant to clash with a monster's attacks. Pretty damn cool fight, especially with the proper matchups. The design for Acidic is... it's okay, I guess. Honestly, I think he's one of the bigger victims of World's desaturated colors. He loses the original's great-looking red and blue and sticks with predominantly a dark sea green type of color. Some of his spikes and detailing turn to a very dull dark gray at a few points as well. The color of his scales is insanely close to the more metallic color of his tail, and even when his tail is covered in acid, the color there is very lifeless. The sea green looks fine enough in the veil, mostly matching the deep caverns of the place. I think what's lacking here is some highlights in differentiating color. His icon, builder model, and some other art of him shows off what Acidic Glavenus could look like if they lean into those yellow accents a little bit more. They add some detailing to his jaw, his belly, they recolor his spikes and strengthen the yellow on his tail, giving him some color patterns akin to the normal Glavenus. But yeah, no, the in-game model just doesn't have this extra detailing to it. He needs more saturation, more detailing, more acid, more boldness, I think. I know that he's meant to match the murk of the Rotten Veil, but his colors all just kind of muddy together and result in him looking much less fierce. I think Acidic Glavenus is a welcome surprise who brought along a pretty damn neat subversion on the classic Glavenus' battle philosophy. He just doesn't quite fill the shoes of his iconic cousin, but he does a damn decent job trying, and in all fairness, those are really big shoes. There's not a whole lot to say about Ebony Odogaron. He's good. Odogaron's an extremely good base, and Ebony adds some neat little touches to that base, but they're really just touches. Ebony Odogaron are members of the species with wider, no clear-cut territory and voracious appetites. Somewhere along the way, their diet included some odd material or another that granted them limited control over the volatile dragon element. Perhaps these are Odogaron who consumed the remains of Devil Joe or Elder Dragons down in the Vale and went somewhat mad with power as a result. Between Bonbro, Fulgur, Anjanath, and this guy, Ebony feels like the only one of these three new Iceborne non-elders who makes sense being a map-traversing invader monster. Odogaron are already fairly crazed individuals, and having the dragon element coursing through their system would absolutely drive them to stalk all kinds of new hunting grounds, hostile environment be damned. Also, his design isn't meant to camouflage him at all, so he doesn't look super out of place on most maps, save for, again, like the Ancient Forest, he just does not look good in. From a game design standpoint, Ebony Odogaron was created because the standard Odogaron was being defeated too quickly. The original's glass cannon design meant it was being taken out before it could show off its full prowess, which it achieved from eating. Ebony Odogaron is meant to live longer and show off its full strength from the very beginning. It starts in its powered up state and needs to be beaten out of it with the use of elemental attacks, whilst using the dragon element to negate the hunter's abilities to inflict elemental damage. That, by itself, is a pretty cool little loop. Probably the neatest thing about him, honestly. The two of you are constantly trying to box each other out from using your elemental powers, because the element that the both of you wield can be debilitating towards one another. That's a really sick idea. But on top of that, I think he's just Master Rank Odogaron with Dragon Bites and 2 new attacks. Now those are 2 pretty cool attacks, for sure. He has this kind of double spin where he'll pick up speed before lunging himself forwards like a dragon-infused torpedo, and his other move is a flying leap where he'll spit out a blast of dragon energy while repositioning behind you. He tries to neuter you with the Dragon Blight to disorient you and then slash you apart from behind. Both attacks are pretty fun, they're flashy, and they weave well into Odogaron's established rhythm, but it's just kind of it. The only other thing I can think about is that every bite attack of his inflicts the dragon element. I think those dragon blast projectiles should have been expanded on. Let him lunge to your side and fire one at your flank. Let him leap backwards and spit out a burst and a retreating shot. If the goal is to keep Odogaron alive longer, use these quick, rapid, ranged options to clear distance and keep him alive and moving. He should have a whole set of like 3 or 4 other attacks just off these little dragon spit bursts. And due to his erratic nature, he could be due for some combo extensions too, but doesn't really get them. Ebony Odogaron is a slightly better Odogaron combat-wise, purely by technicality, but as his own individual, he's just kind of lacking. Whereas Acidic Glavenus was kind of pretending to be a minimally changed element swap subspecies, Ebony Odogaron pretty much just is that, exactly. The colors, though, Now that's pretty good. The dragon element has seared his face jet black with these kind of traces of red detailing coursing over his head and down much of his upper body. It kind of looks like a bomb went off in his face. The jet black colors complement those beady, soulless little eyes really well too. When he's pissed, those eyes will turn red, and the red detailings will pulse with this kind of scarlet glow, and black smoke will start to pour out of his mouth. His torso lightens up the further it gets from his head, turning a little bit more gray with like a teeny little bit of lavender in there, and a more pronounced blue-violet in the tail. His spine and paws also keep the black coloration from the head, and his claws are blood red. I almost wish his lower body was more strictly gray, just to let the black and red of his head stand out a little bit more, but I guess that would probably make his purple tail look kind of out of place. Overall, though, very cool. Takes an already savage-looking design and just goths the hell out of it, making for an edgy dragon demon dog. Pretty neat concept, but he doesn't lean into the gimmick nearly enough, and despite all the cool things about him, he kind of feels like he's just a little bit of a roster stuffer because of it. And Wilds didn't do him any favors, so yeah, that kind of stinks. Potential future third time's the charm, maybe? Seething Basilgeuse is a pretty neat variant with a huge issue that just isn't his fault. He's kind of just guilty by association. Iceborne made a stupid decision deciding that any monster that was in base game world that would have a variant in Iceborne would not be in Master Rank, except for Legiana. That variant would effectively become the Master Rank version of the monster, so there's no Basilgeuse, Deviljho, Valhazak, or Nergigante in Master Rank at all. This is what we in the industry like to call lame. Now that being said, Seething Basilgeuse is not lame, but the circumstances around him are. Now, this variant of Basil is not an invader and can be only found in the Elder's Recess. This is another big reason why people have a problem with this whole arrangement. The iconic flying invader is no longer an invader. He gets replaced by a bizarre motley crew of other monsters. Now, it does make sense for Seething to be a more permanent resident of the volcanic region, as the name would imply he is a superheated version of the original Basil. Even when enraged, his once brown scales have this kind of dull blue hue from the intense heat his body is given off. This gets even more intense as he gets angry. There isn't too much more to delve into ecologically. He's one of those variants who pushes the gimmick of his core species up a couple of notches rather than transforming their abilities or biology drastically. Seething Basilgeuse was designed to be simultaneously more dangerous and yet more learnable than the other Basil. His bombs grow larger, he's a bit more of a brawler, and he's a little bit more aggressive, but at the same time, his bomb patterns were designed to be more predictable. The original Basil's bombs were designed to drop somewhat at random, haphazardly dislodging from his body and firing off in hard-to-predict patterns during his physical moves. The developers went the opposite way for Seething, making sure his physical moves tossed his bomb scales in more consistent patterns to make for a fight that a player would have an easier time mastering. This is information that I'd say I kind of knew subconsciously. Once I read these production notes, it did kind of click that yeah, Seething seemed to be a little bit easier to read than a normal Basil. I'm not 1000% certain if this applies to all of Seething's bomb dropping moves, and that there's zero randomness whatsoever, but some of his bombs certainly have predictable trajectories, especially off of his tail sweep. Seething also seems to be a more aggressive physical fighter, spending much less time flying around using his carpet bomb attacks. He instead will use his powerful array of tail sweeps, body slams, flying slams, charges, and headbutts. He especially likes to use those tail sweep moves to get as many bombs on the field as possible. Seething wants to get his hands dirty. He certainly doesn't mind blowing you up, but he wants that to happen after he pummels you into the ground. He very infrequently uses Basil's iconic carpet bomb dive move, but at the same time, that means Seething wastes a bit less time. On top of that, Seething gets a new nuke attack where he corkscrews up into the air, sending out rows of explosives before coming crashing back down in a massive detonation and letting out this deafening screech in the wake of this carnage. They further compensate for Seething's predictability by making his bombs larger when enraged. A fully heated Seething's blast scales are so overflowing with explosive fluid that the scales will then start to expand and deform rapidly into these malformed purple flower-like shapes that then violently explode upon reaching critical mass. The hitboxes on these enhanced explosives are well telegraphed, but are still rather large and can be tough to avoid in a whole proper minefield. Additionally, these bombs have an adhesive quality, being capable of sticking to walls. Iceborne Seething is perfectly fine. He's a fun variant who has some give and take when compared to the behavior and abilities of the original Basil, while also adding some additional explosive pizzazz. I could go on about how now I think he needs a little bit more of his own attack, but yeah, that's what Sunbreak did to him, so, you know, problem solved. And then for the design, he starts out as a pretty normal looking Basil Geese with the scales on his head and tail having a darkened and blue tinged blend to them. I appreciate this kind of foreshadowing for where Seething's gonna go. The blue patches communicate that these scales have been superheated to the point of having like a warped coloration to them, but since then they've cooled off. His bombs will also have a brighter pink coloration. The dark burnt blue and incandescent pink contrast pretty well off one another. As he gets pissed though, a deep white hot is going to start to burn and spark up in his core, and his head and tail will light up in these brilliant broiling mixtures of white and yellow and orange and violet and pink all kind of mixed together, while his scales shift to a brilliant glowing purple. It's a crazy looking display and looks brilliant against the crystalline and lava-fueled backdrops of the Elder's Recess. I can forgive Seething for taking away the normal Basil, and I can appreciate his changes, though I think he loses a bit of what made the original so iconic. The spectacle that replaces the original personality isn't bad though, and then Sunbreak took Seething a little later on and fulfilled his potential a good bit further. Not the best variant, far from the worst though. I guess I'm gonna put Scardion Garuga here. I don't know. This is an odd one. Scardion Garuga technically isn't a 5th generation monster. He simply got grandfathered into having his own identity in the 5th generation. Scard became his own separate entity in this game. So I kind of consider him to be a 5th generation monster and will count him as an Iceborne original. I did it in the tier list I did for this game anyway, so whatever. The most notable thing about Scardion Garuga is the information about him outside of Iceborne. When Yeon Garuga was created back from Monster Hunter G and Freedom, the developers wanted to create a battle-hardened veteran of a monster, a tenacious, violent, and ruthless combatant that had been in a lot of fights and had the marks to prove it. To communicate to this, Yeon Garuga has, in some games and in some special quests, spawned with an eye and an ear missing. Sometimes it's fully intact, sometimes it wasn't. It always just kind of depended on the title. To the extent of my knowledge, the Scarred term was never used to treat the two as separate entities, nor did either version of Garuga have different combat abilities until Iceborne. Within Iceborne, the developers used the tempered monster system to divide the two. Tempered monsters are supposed to be tested survivors of several battles, which is exactly what a Scarred Garuga is. So there is no separate Yeon Garuga in Iceborne. Instead, a tempered Yeon Garuga is considered a Scarred Yeon Garuga in the game, has these battle wounds on spawn, is counted separately in the Hunter's Notes, and has a few new moves to him. He has no new armor or weapons, but you need a couple of his specific materials to max out the weaponry. As for new attacks, Scarred Yeon Garuga doesn't have too much. He's a little bit faster, chains certain moves together more aggressively than a normal Garuga can. Additionally, he has a really damn cool move where it can leap up into the air and just kind of machine gun fire off this fanning volley of fireballs into the ground. Yeon Garuga is a pretty solid fight in Iceborne already, so Scar just kind of turns that up to 11 and makes the fight a little bit more hectic. There's just not much else to say about Scarred Garuga aside from his developmental history, but knowing that story makes him a pretty cool little Easter egg to have in the game. Then you have Frostfang Barioth, who's in kind of an odd place. Due to complications with COVID, Frostfang got pushed around to release between Alatreon and Fatalis. You know, the two high-end ultra super boss black dragons? Yeah, we kind of just got a new snowcat sandwiched between them. Frostfang was supposed to show up long before this, but had to get shuffled around, and this kind of gets a little kind of forgotten in the mix due to what he was released between. You could tell he was supposed to arrive before Alatreon, since he has excellent ice weapons, which would have worked perfectly against the Special Assignment Alatreon quest. Thankfully for Frostfang, still a pretty great addition, giving a dangerous variant to a famous monster who was a potential wall in Iceborne, and he brought along excellent armor and weapons in tow. In terms of ecology, there's not much to Frostfang save for the fact that he's a grizzled, aged, and intelligent Elder Barioth, which his design and combat sell incredibly well. But yeah, he's not exactly the most complicated creature. The regular Barioth is built for fast, unyielding, and non-stop physical attacks, trying to blitz an opponent with a rapid slew of ice moves, flying dives, tail hits, and bites. Frostfang Barioth takes kind of a trap and destroy approach. He's still fast, still aggressive, for sure, but he mainly wants to use his frost attacks to root you to the ground before beating you into the dirt. He is the second monster in the game to utilize a mechanic that Velkhana pioneered, where he creates these movement-slowing ice traps. He can spray these traps in front of him while flying or on the ground, and will often often deploy them in sweeping arcs to make them harder to evade. Once a hunter is caught, they have very little time to break free before Frostfang either fires a massive ice projectile from his mouth or lunges up in the air and comes crashing down hard with a bone-shattering pounce attack. Frostfang is also capable of doubling up this bounce to try and fake you out. Frostfang feels tricky, cunning, while having the sheer power to back up that craftiness. I will once again praise a monster who has debilitating setup moves and the ability to properly capitalize on that advantage that he made for himself. It makes the monster feel intelligent and dangerous while also bullying the player into getting better at evading the attacks. Frostfang is also very good at mixing in bites and paw slams, hip checks, tail sweeps, pounces, and flying dives into his moveset so that he doesn't completely resort to constant ice trap spam. He's also a little bit slower than the normal Barioth, so learning his tells can lead to good punishes. I like the core game plan for Frostfang, and I personally believe that he pulls it off very well without relying too heavily into it. The fact that he can utilize his technique from the ground and the air also gives him variety and makes his trap and elimination fighting style feel a little bit more fleshed out. He is a solid battle, and the damage output of the tempered Frostfang kinda terrifies me whenever I fight it, making me extra scared of those ice attacks. I like it when a monster can have that effect on me. The design is very simple and borderline monochromatic, but it kinda works. This Barioth has been molded by the Arctic temperatures, all the orange detailing on his fangs and spikes is gone, and there's pretty much no tan colors on his underbelly or wing membranes anymore. This fur is gleaming sheer white with silvery little tinges throughout. His fangs are now simply the color of bone, and his scales are so layered in frost that they gleam with an icy blue. His fur has grown much longer and shaggier on his face, his chin, and his paws. He looks worn, weathered, and completely one with his environment. Frostfang Barioth is a true ruler of the cold and deserves to not be overlooked. Velkhana is the flagship of Iceborne and its namesake, the Iceborne Wyvern as she is called. Velkhana is probably the more contentious of the two flagships in this game. There's a mix of very high highs and notable design oversights with her combat that earns her a little bit of flack. I personally think she's another winner, with just a couple of flaws. Velkhana is equal parts graceful, dignified, cunning, and cruel. She is a dragon that rules the Hoarfrost Reach indignantly, freezing small animals solid and leaving their stiff corpses in her wake. Her control of ice comes from two mechanisms. First of all, she places special shards of volcanic ore along her scales. These volcanic glass scales help her to control the large quantities of supercooled water that her body retains. She can expel the supercooled water as a beam from her mouth, and she can release it as a mist from her body. Both of these methods of releasing the water will cause them to freeze instantly on contact with the air, creating huge walls of ice and falling ice crystals. And most famously, she can expel the water all over her scales and freeze it into a suit of frigid armor, granting her a sharp knight-like design and additional defense. I think she actually has a stronger role in her narrative than Nergigante does in his, and has a bit more to do, but at the same time, her personality isn't quite as interesting, and she gets fairly harshly sidelined in the story's third act. She's sort of just kind of riled up by Shara Ishvalda and becomes a threat simply kind of just because she's agitated, whereas some flagships like Nergigante, Magnamalo, Zinogre, and Malzeno have a slightly stronger connections to their respective final bosses. Now, for the combat, I really like her, but everyone seems to agree she has one major flaw. One of her big gimmicks is that her ice beams can leave these frozen ice walls in their wake. They start out as these huge walls of ice that block movement, and then they will break down into ledges that you can walk on and leap off of to perform jumping attacks, and then, after a few seconds, they will break apart fully. These ice walls, which seal off parts of the map and obscure vision, can restrain your movements, but not hers. She can run right through them and fire her attacks through them. Clipping through them with her own movements, that's forgivable. That just happens a lot in this game. But the fact that her ice beams can just kind of appear out of nowhere from behind an ice wall and blindside you is kind of annoying. It's a very rules for thee, not for me type of design. The other thing that I don't love about her fights is that her tail stab move has a hitbox that lingers a little too long. You can still get hit a few frames after the tail is fully extended and no longer moving. This is even worse for the tail attack where she spins, stabs the tail, and spins again to pull the attack back. The hitbox for that move is the entire tail and lingers even after the tail is stationary for a couple frames. That's kind of the bulk of her problems, honestly. She has a great grab bag of tools that cover a wide variety of ranges. She's typically pretty fast while having some larger moves that can be punished, and some moves that you can land some hits on if you're brave enough to dodge towards her rather than trying to run away from her. Velkhana is pretty damn good at tracking you too. Her straight shot ice beam and tail stabs come out fast and are extremely accurate, predicting where the hunter is going to be very well. It makes her tough to react to without learning her tells. She has a targeted ice drop where she'll freeze mist clouds into ice formations and drop them on hunters' heads, which is another great counter for players who aren't paying attention. She is the mainline pioneer of a gimmick where she can use ice to root your feet to the ground. She'll use this to punish hunters that are attacking her head too much, and if she can trap ya, she'll follow it up with a tail stab. When flying, what she can do is exhale these expanding rings of ice directly under her to catch hunters at melee range. This is a move that you can easily run away from, but if you know what you're doing, you can dodge in after the inner ring shatters, ignore the rest of the attack, and hit her for free as she comes back down. Also, she has a massive Ice Breath wave move that's far-reaching but leaves her exposed for several seconds. And then she balances out her Arctic assaults with charges, bites, and tail attacks to engage in melee. Her main game plan is to batter you away with physical hits or get off me tools, only then follow up with her long-range Ice Beam. She is incredibly effective at heal punishing and one of the best at it in the modern era, and she has caught me trying to immediately heal after being hit dozens of times. Honestly, I think she's among the most enjoyable monsters to master the moves of. Her speed, accuracy, and ability to snipe you makes her extra dangerous, so it makes you more keen to memorize her tells, learn your positioning against different moves, and not overexert yourself so you don't get boxed out and peppered in ice moves. Defensively, her ice armor can be destroyed piece by piece. It's on her head, torso, forelegs, wings, and hind limbs. Destroying a few pieces of her armor will cause the full set to shatter and trigger a full knockdown. Oddly enough, I kind of find her a little easier with her armor on because she then has access to her larger ice attacks that have a lot of end lag on them. With her armor off, she mostly just uses her tail stabs and quicker ice beam moves, which are her fastest attacks. Not to be the guy who just says skill issue, but I think the reason some people don't like her is that she demands that you learn her moves, and some people just don't. Her openings and tells are important because she is excellent at setting up combos, sniping those who are careless, and granting large openings to herself if you know what you're doing. I think she's just a few noteworthy fixable issues away from being perfect. And then Arch-Tempered Velkhana is one of the best fights in the entire game. She's not even that different, she's just super fast. The gaps between her attacks are tiny and her pressure is insane. She has a few new moves like a swift sweeping ice beam that will create several ice walls in its wake, and a few breath moves that will cause these giant massive glaciers to erupt under your feet. I'm not a huge fan of those specific attacks since she's really good at positioning you so that you'll be right in the middle of those ice blasts, and if you have your weapon out, it's kind of tough to react to those. She also has a massive new super move where she'll spin up into the air firing a huge ice beam and combo that with her downward ring ice attack. This variation of the ice rings hits 4 or 5 times, and the ice walls get continuously more massive, wreathing her in this fortress of ice. The Arch-Tempered also drops a lot more mist clouds, allowing her to freeze them into more falling ice projectiles. And one extra little tidbit is that if you're grappling onto her, her attacks will shred the integrity of the temporal mantle, making it so that you really kind of just can't abuse it to get tenderizes and wall throws. You have to earn all of those. Honestly, AT Velkhana is brutal, precise, unrelenting, but here's the thing, the animations for her attacks aren't any faster, just the gaps between them. So if you're good at your fight and you know her moves, you can claw for every opening, stagger, mount, knockdown, and tenderize that you can. You will be rewarded for mastering this duel, and you will be decimated for not doing so. I am also of the opinion that she is tuned to be just fast enough for the hunter to be able to react to her and engage with all of her moves. Her assault is brutal, but not so much so that some weapons struggle in the fight. As much as I do love Primordial Malzeno, I think AT Velkhana masters her game speed better than he does. Primordial is a bit overcooked. Velkhana, I think, is done just right. This duel is exhilarating and every blow feels earned. She does carry over the base Velkhana's issues, and those huge ice glacier moves can feel a little bit unfair, but honing the rhythm of this match is exhilarating. It was a magnificent grand finale to Iceborne. And the design is just lovely. Sleek and slender and magnificent, blending the dark lavender of her scales and the bright gleaming icy blue of her frost armor. I think these two core colors complement each other extremely well. The lighter ice armor grants a sense of regality and nobility, while the darker scales grant this atmosphere of an underlying darkness, which is fitting because she's fairly violent in the story. And honestly, without the ice armor, the lavender scales struggle to inspire that menace on their own. She doesn't look bad without the armor, but it brings the whole look together perfectly. I really like Velkhana. I think her battle is immensely satisfying to learn. Her moves are diverse, she suits Iceborne perfectly, and looks spectacular while carrying herself with dignity and lethal intelligence. She's a monster that I think gets better the more you fight her and the more you learn her. I kind of get why people don't like Black Vilval Hazak. Once again, we have a variant that completely replaces its base form in Master Rank. The Lord of the Underworld isn't an Iceborne, and instead he is replaced by his wandering, overgrown nomad of a brother. And there's a few other things about the fight that people don't like. A Black Veil Valhazak is what occurs when a Valhazak leaves the Rotten Vale and ventures beyond his kingdom and into the forests. Now this is kind of cool. Valhazak is built to live in the Vale. He is the beating heart at that map's core. He allows that macabre graveyard to thrive and contribute to the life cycle of the world. You put Valhazak anywhere else in the world and he is a walking nightmare. Overgrown with spores, mold, and vegetation, Black Veil has turned the ancient forest into a sickened labyrinth. Its inhabitants have no idea how to cope with the creature's ability to recycle and expel flesh-eating bacteria. And what's worse, the spores covering Black Veil seem to make him even more proficient at hurling this life-sucking miasma around. The air around the forest feels ill when he's around, and he lurks in the undergrowth, infecting the defenseless inhabitants. This is a great setup for a variant, and it sells the power of an Elder Dragon extremely well. This new habitat struggles to cope with him. His passive abilities choke the life force out of the entire environment. He feels like an aberration in the forest. Yes, his environment has changed him, but he has warped it 10 times more. When compared to the regular Vol, I think Black Veil is a better fight pretending to be a worse fight. Let me explain. Black Veil still isn't fast. I think the gaps between his attacks are maybe a little bit shorter, but that doesn't mean he's fast. He has a few more physical moves, but some of them are still kind of lethargic bites and charges and a snappy little tail swipe or chomp every now and again. What Black Veil mostly doubles down on is his damage over time aura and personal defenses. Black Veil seeks to undermine your aggression with a consistent output of damage. Not only does he have his standard effluvia damage over time, but his spore clouds covering his body can expel puffs of effluvium that can knock you back. These clouds will occasionally fire off in the middle of some of his moves, punishing you for being reckless during his lengthy attack animations by dealing damage and shoving you away. He has an alternate retreating effluvia breath attack, which is excellent at dealing chip damage and inflicting the effluvia debuff. He also loves this beam attack where he rears up and fires his effluvia downwards, which will ripple around his body in a ring. And for his ultimate move, the spores on his body will enlarge and pulsate in a pretty cool disfigured animation before popping off his body and raining down all over the battlefield, creating huge blankets of damage over time. The clumps of spores being aggressively ejected from his body can also hit you. The name of the game is to be aggressive and destroy those spores on his body to eliminate his defenses and hold off the spore nuke. He can reconstitute these spores by siphoning effluvia from his surroundings, so you do need to be mindful of that. Another issue with Black Veil is that he's got a lot of area control abilities, and the Ancient Forest is not a particularly great map for that. It has a lot of tight corners and narrow battle zones, and a monster with a lot of AoE damage over time is not super fun to deal with on a map with so many claustrophobic combat zones. It's a super cool environment for a Black Veil to be on, just not the best specific map layout for his combat philosophy. Now, yeah, that kind of sounds like a lot. How can you be aggressive against a monster with that many defenses? The developers talked about building him like a fortress. Well, that's kind of the thing. If you're gonna siege a fortress, you don't just smack against it over and over and over and over and over again to no avail. You find its structural weaknesses, you starve it out, you develop countermeasures and destroy it. Iceborne gives you a lot of tools to deal with Black Veil's tactics. The health booster can counter the damage over time fields he leaves on the ground. The vitality mantle can't take hits very well, but it can absorb a lot of damage from his natural effluvium defenses. Health augments on your weapons can help you muscle through health loss and recover what you lose in your assault. The clutch claw grapple can propel you out of the range of his ground blast attack if you tether to his head or his claws. The windup for that attack is also massive and very easy to respond to. Slotting in effluvia resistance can eliminate his debuff, and you can often see which spores are kind of pulsating and which ones are going to expel their gases at you, so you know where not to attack him when trying to punish his moves. You can respond to his defenses with so many different tools that the game gives you with very little damage compromise, since only one of these solutions cuts into your skills. Black Veil Valhazak is not a great duel. He does not have the most satisfying dance to learn, but that isn't his game. It's not what he's going for. It plays into one of Monster Hunter's other great strengths, that being puzzle bosses that require tool usage and countermeasures to undermine. I don't care if Black Veil is not fun to fight with a min-max set. These mechanics are part of the game too, and I will not be marking a monster down too heavily if they rely on puzzle boss aspects of the game. I think especially with a game like Iceborne that has so so many tool slots and so much room for skills, it would be a mistake to not make fights like Black Veil Valhazak. He's not the best opponent in the game. I don't think puzzle bosses like him will ever beat out an extremely well-designed duel, but I think he's very good at what he does, and the game compensates for his powers incredibly well if you actually do a little bit of preparation work. I would prefer that Monster Hunter not be a franchise that's too scared to lean into monsters with potent gimmicks, because meta slaves get mad that they will actually have to accommodate for a monster's abilities. And I still don't even think that Black Veil's fight is like that phenomenal, or that his kit is tremendously fun to deal with. It's alright, I don't mind fighting him at all. He's a good time to toss a greatsword at, but I do think fights like this absolutely belong in Monster Hunter and are a part of its identity. And I think that Black Veil is very well designed around the multitude of tools that the game gives you. The design's also grown on me too. Pun kind of intended. I still think the original looks better. The brown and red of the carcass armor looks so cool with the sleek dark scales, and he looks great in his home territory. Black Veil also looks pretty damn cool out in the forest. The insanely dark green that he has helps him fit the forest better, and the spores covering his eyes combined with the dual lower jaws just make him look insanely unsettling, and the spore clots all over his body make him look bulky and overgrown. They have this kind of nice, repulsive, fuzzy texture to them. They look unhealthy. I love how they pulse and undulate when they expel effluvia as well. They just look nasty. I like Black Veil Valhazak quite a bit for what he is, even if I don't think he stands amongst the best this game has to offer, and his combat philosophy does not stack up well with the layout of his habitat. In terms of creature design and the interactions between his mechanics and the player's toolkit, I think this is a solid creation that I wish got a little bit more recognition for the strengths that it does have. And the winner of Iceborne's beauty pageant is going to be Namielle. Holy crap, what a creature she is. What a phenomenal design wrapped up in an ingenious gimmick, but is she just a pretty face? Oh, absolutely not. She's a very solid monster, even if I think there's a little bit more room for improvement. Namielle is the undisputed ruler of the Coral Highlands, finally giving the map a proper elder dragon after Kieran was the local surrogate landmark elder in the base game. Namielle has a special relationship with the Coral Highlands, similar to how Coral Pookie Pookie does. The Highland stores up a ton of water within itself, and Namielle will absorb large quantities of that water to empower herself. First of all, Namielle's body blends that water with its own mucus to create an adhesive water slime. This water slime will remain moist and can be expelled as projectiles as well as distributed all over her body as armor. Many of her hit zones are more resilient when she has her armor up. Expelling too much water will dry out her skin, and she'll need to find another source of water to refresh herself. This control and expulsion of large quantities of water pairs very nicely with her secondary ability to generate high voltage electricity within herself, which she can use to illuminate her body as well as emit powerful shocks with the tendrils of her wingtips. I think you can kind of see where this is going to go. Those large puddles of water dotting the arena are slowly going to turn into a minefield when she starts shocking them. That and her ability to use her wings to manipulate the water are her core weapons in combat. Namielle is a decently well executed spectacle battle. A lot of her kit revolves around being an elemental showcase, and she's a bit lacking in the physicality department. For the most part, I find the speed, variety, openings, and countermeasures to her attacks pretty fun to deal with. Due to her barrage of elements, I personally enjoy swapping between the thunderproof and waterproof mantles, which is appreciated because I enjoy fights that make me want to use mantles besides temporal or rocksteady. Of the two, the waterproof mantle is the more important as it will stop her water currents from disrupting your footing. You can also use the Mire Walker skill to completely cancel out this detriment if you're willing to give up the skill slots for it. To set things up, Namielle will focus on water-based attacks predominantly, wanting to get as much of it out on the field as she can. To do this, she can cough out small, precise water projectiles, walk forwards while firing off a sweeping water beam attack back and forth, fire a single sweeping water beam in a large horizontal arc, rearing up and firing a large torrent of water straight down while sending out waves in front of her, and she's got this one really sick little animation where she'll stand up straight and swiftly fire these small, super precise, pressurized water beam attacks back and forth, and then vertically in front of her. She'll use her wings then to drag the water around her. If you watch her windups, you can tell whether she's going to be pulling water towards her or pushing it back out. I will say her water manipulation animations can sometimes last a little while, and she's not always great at punishing those who get caught up in the tide, which is a little bit annoying. She will also mix in a few bites, claw hits, wing slams, and a repositioning dash to add some melee to this battle. Now this is a pretty damn cool watery display, but that's all just setup. After a few minutes, she'll light up her body with a large electric shock, detonating the water around her and adding electrical physical attacks to her arsenal. This mainly consists of an electrified body slam that will detonate all puddles around her, but she also has a more precise electroshock with her wingtips. She can also take to the air for some extremely breathtaking moves. Her wings unfurl completely and she will strafe the arena, detonating puddles with her wingtips by either flying perpendicular to the ground or by curling her wings around herself like a jellyfish and zapping directly beneath her. These moves are pretty floaty and extremely easy to dodge, but look fantastic. As the fight goes on, she'll start to wear down her water armor gradually, sparking up her body with even more electricity and leaning more into the electrical moves, until eventually she pulls out her desperate gambit. She'll purge all excess water from her body, fire it down at the ground beneath her as she takes off into the air, and will come crashing back down with an enormous electrical discharge that will fry all connected water puddles in the zone. You have some time to run, but that blast radius is huge. She will then immediately retreat and go searching for a source of water to replenish her reserves. Until then, her skin will be dried out and her hit zones will be very vulnerable. When she's like this, she'll have access to water and lightning attacks, but can't use some of her more grandiose moves. It's a very unique rhythm for a fight. She has a phase where she's incredibly water-based, lays a whole bunch of traps, and then introduces thunder to the mix gradually, ramps up that thunder usage more and more and more, until she lets out a Hail Mary attack and needs some downtime to recharge. It's very reminiscent of the modern Teostra, who builds and builds and builds on his burning rage, introducing more firepower, and then eventually explodes and needs to have a bit of a come down. It's not your traditional boss fight phases, where she gets more powerful as her health gets lower necessarily. I like that design choice. It's fairly unconventional. Her kit is extremely stylish, featuring some of Monster Hunter's greatest combat animations attached to one of their most incredible creature designs, with a blend that results in their most ingenious elemental combination. If I had to improve the fight, I think sometimes Namielle is set up to interact with her gimmick a bit more than she is coded to interact with you. She sets her water traps all over the place, then systematically blows them up with her huge body slam or flying strafe attacks. It's not a bad kit to interact with in the slightest, but it can feel a little bit impersonal sometimes, kind of like she's trying to blow up her water puddles and hoping that the blast hit you more than she is deliberately trying to fight you. Now, I don't want to oversell that point. Her attacks are still obviously aimed towards you, but the majority of her electrical attacks are either too slow to worry about or are just big body slams. She's kind of set up where her battle is a feast for the eyes, and if she kills you, well then great, she kills you. I think she would benefit heavily from having some extra tenacity. She needs more small, fast, precise electrical moves. Claw swipes, bites, tail smacks, moves that won't cause the big explosions, but if you're standing in those puddles, you're still gonna get clipped by that initial hit, and then you're gonna get blown up. I think you should give her an electrical charge on that slide move she does as well. Give her movement some danger to it. She also needs more wing attacks that hit around her sides and tail, because as is, that is a complete blind spot for her without her body slam attack. She feels like a slightly faster, much showier, more hazardous, and definitely better version of Valhazak. Very reliant on an admittedly cool gimmick, though a bit impersonal, doesn't have the greatest punish options, and would benefit from a few moves that are a little bit smaller in scale but more snappy. I don't think she gets bad or meandering on repeat fights, but there are other battles that are a lot more fun to master than hers. She wouldn't be difficult to improve at all, and she isn't desperately in need of upgrades, but you could iron this out into something a little bit just quicker and more tenacious for sure. And yeah, of course, the design is crazy good. Ridiculously, holy crap good. She's fucking gorgeous, dude. And she's not just pretty. The weaving of all these forms of sea life into a draconic base is stellar. She's got vampire squid tendrils on the tips of her giant manta ray wings. She's got tiny anglerfish teeth and catfish whiskers. She's got electric eels bioelectricity. She's got rainbow lighting and the ability to curl her wings around herself like certain jellyfish. And there's probably a ton of other sea life inspirations in this design too, and the amalgamation is just perfect. Nowhere does it feel incohesive or like they just slapped animal parts together to make a monster. Every aspect of sea life present feels like it's the exact right amount, specifically in the place it needs to be. It's perfect for the Coral Highlands as well, which is basically an underwater map with no water. It makes sense that the ruler of such a place would be this oceanic dragon chimera, and the colors are perfect. With her water armor, she floods her torso and wings with this deep, dark, gorgeous blue, and then her bioluminescence shines through that watery veil with a mixture of oranges and purples and a little bit of yellow in there, and all of that has this kind of aquatic shimmer to it because of the watery nature of her armor. And then you have the rainbow lighting running through the wings and over her face in these mesmerizing, pulsating patterns. As she builds an electrical power, her whole body starts to then just glow blue as a current runs through the entire entirety of her water veil, and it even lights up her whiskers, and it's all complemented by the jet black of the back of her wings, which wraps all of that brilliance up in a sinister looking cloak that adds an air of dread and power to what would otherwise be a purely beautiful design. And when she's all dried out, yeah, she's all gray and not particularly interesting to look at, but that absolutely works. The contrast only serves to make her watery form look so much more beautiful. This design might be perfect. I have no idea how you would ever do better than this. I think it is a pure artistic masterwork of creature design, and that combined with its ingenious game mechanic concept has elevated Namielle to stratospheric fame in the Monster Hunter community. I certainly don't think that her fame is undeserved, but I do think these more spectacular elements carry what I believe is a decently good fight. Perfect that fight, and there will be few monsters more impressive than Namielle. The culprit behind the natural disturbances and upsetting of the natural balance across the entirety of the New World in Iceborne is CR-Volcanic, an ancient, gargantuan, and enigmatic elder dragon of myth that lies beneath the ground in a strange island off the coast of the main continent. CR-Volcanic is a beast so powerful that the seismic disruptions he creates on his island home can shift and rip apart mountains. The sound of the vibrations he creates ring off like a bizarre song that carries on the wind for miles. When the song is heard, the very ground cracks and splits apart. And when you manage to find Shara, you're greeted by probably the single most bizarre first impression that Monster Hunter has ever thrown at us. What looks to be a gigantic stone golem with finger-like tendrils where the wings of a dragon would be. That's kind of crazy for Monster Hunter. I mean, yeah, there's Gravios, which is kind of like a giant rock dragon, but this is multiple steps beyond that. The first phase of Shara looks like an artificial creation, a living pile of rocks, and there's only the tiniest hint of a face present with two tiny little beady eye holes and a small slat opening for the mouth. So you face down this walking boulder, carving away at its armor and chipping away at it, slamming it into walls, dropping huge chunks of rocks on him and forcing him to slam the ground of the arena down so hard that he repeatedly lowers the floor of the battlefield, shifting the island around him and burying you two further and further down. Then his armor starts to lose that integrity, crumbles away into dust bit by bit before he lets out a colossal shockwave that rips the cavern walls asunder, eviscerates his stone armor, and unveils his true form. This lanky, sinewy, and freakish looking dragon with long, gnarled, opposable digits where the bones of his wings once were. He swaps from a juggernaut to a master manipulator of air currents, and this is where the fight really gets going. Needless to say, the two phases are incredibly different. The first phase is extremely slow with very high damage and a lot of tremors. Shara is mostly just trying to bludgeon you to death since the wingtips are blocked by stone and have very limited access to their air attacks. He'll repeatedly punch the ground with his giant stone fists. Sometimes he might leap up and slam down really hard. Other times he'll just put his wings in front of him like a giant plow and charge back and forth. He will show a little bit of his air vibration prowess by softening the dirt beneath him into soft stand that he can slide into. From here he has a couple of other slam attacks as well as some smaller scale vibration moves. For the most part during this phase you want to just keep his head tenderized and attack it repeatedly. No other parts of his body matter. You want to throw him into large rocks to get those big knockdowns as well. You continuously chip away at his face until you hit phase 2. This first round is, I don't know, it's as fine can be. There's nothing offensive about it. His attacks are enormous and hard-hitting but have a ton of wind-up. The partial burrowing is the most creative part of this battle. Otherwise, it's mostly just big slam attacks. I do really like the unique concept of a golem monster, and the wow factor of facing something so unorthodox for the first time is really sick, but in a subsequent battle, you're really kind of just wailing on him for 5 minutes to get to the actual fight. Phase 2, though, is pretty damn good. I just wish it had more moves. This phase is completely different, swapping heavy melee attacks for powerful and controlled blasts of pressurized air. Shara has a really good grab bag of air moves that fire off at differing ranges and intensities. He can do something as basic as firing off a quick, simple, precise air shot at a target. He can snipe multiple enemies from afar by firing several wind blasts at different angles and pulling those currents towards him. He can unleash several wind blasts directly beneath him and push them outwards to repel hunters at melee range. He can also bring his tendrils together and combine them into either a pressurized air Death Star laser cannon or pool together this huge sphere of pure wind before he then slams that into the center of the arena for a huge blast. There's not a single move here I dislike. I think they're all fair with their own windups and sound cues. They're very hard hitting, but a little slow on the windup, and the animation and visual variety is very solid. And Denny's also balances out his kit with physical attacks, including bites, paw moves, and a few different raking wing drags where he swipes the ground with those wing tendrils, and these can strike either directly beneath him or a good ways in front of him. I don't really have any complaints about any of these attacks, though his bite move's hitbox is a little large and travels down the body a lot. That's mildly annoying. I guess the only really issue is that he has a ton of health and only like a dozen moves. His pseudo third phase where he opens his eyes doesn't make him much faster and only gives him his ground liquefaction and sonic spirit bomb attack. I have a good time fighting Shara, but man, do I feel like I just see the same move over and over and over again. Maybe give him some other stuff like rapid fire air shots instead of just continuous beams. Let him combo his paw slams with wing rakes every now and again. Maybe give him some extra digging attacks since he can travel underground when he softens the sand. He just doesn't do it very much. I also think there's a major missed opportunity to not blend some phase 1 elements into this second part of the fight. The two phases are completely different, feeling like entirely separate monsters from one another. How cool would it be if Shara stuck his tendrils deep into the earth and used the resin covering his skin to temporarily form new giant stone fists for himself, swapping from a ranged wind mode back to being a heavy bruiser for a little while. But now these attacks are going to be a lot faster because he's not fully covered in stone. Hell, if you want to go nuts with it, have it so that one of the wing is completely covered in stone as a giant fist and the other is free and using the wind attacks. Some blending of the phases I think would be not only just awesome to deal with, but would help to solidify him as an entire cohesive battle. So yeah, really awesome fight and well balanced with two awesome super attacks. There's not a bad move in the bunch, there just needs to be more of them. And damn dude, this is a nutty looking design. The golem dragon is just a giant boulder with 4 legs and 2 big rock fists. Nothing too crazy, though the colors and textures do look very good. The main body is what we're really looking at though. He's inspired heavily from several aspects of Buddhist mythology. Very rough translations of his name could point to him being called the Sound God or the Supreme Sound God, which by itself kind of a neat title, but he also has this blue, gold, and white coloration to him, similar to how the Deva deities were depicted. He's got a facial structure with large, wide open eyes and tusks, like the combat-oriented Ashura deities of that mythology. There's also an optical illusion with Shara Ishvalda's eyes, making it look like he's always watching the camera, watching you, the player, not the actual hunter. This may be in reference to the open eyes of the Buddha, representing the idea of being all-seeing and all-knowing. I doubt this is actually considered canon in the game world, but this kinda implies that Shara Ishvalda has some sort of higher understanding and is aware of the player and the world beyond the game, being able to break the fourth wall. Really cool reference at least, and the design itself is just terrifying. The opposable finger-like digits on the wings are uncanny, his whole body is lithe and scrawny yet extremely muscular, the texture of his skin isn't fleshy but instead kinda looks like it's carved out of stone, his mouth is filled with human-like teeth and tusks, and his massive, unblinking yellow eyes with red pupils are ever watching. Shara Ishvalda is unsettling. There's something very human and yet very alien about how he looks. He doesn't look like a conventional dragon in the slightest. There's something more there, something divine yet horrible. When someone says that fighting a certain powerful monster makes you feel like you're fighting a god, it usually means that the spectacle is incredibly grandiose. That's certainly true here, but Shara Ishvalda feels like a god more so in that it carries the atmosphere of being a thinking, understanding, dark, and ancient force in the world. Again, I don't think that's necessarily true to the lore of the actual game, but it's a look that's masterfully captured. Yeah, Shara Ishvalda is very cool, but all the final bosses are cool in a way. Shara is unnerving. It's bestial, artificial, unknowable, and somehow human all at once. There's nothing quite like him. Amongst all the variant replacements that Iceborne brought to the table, of all the variant versions of flagship monsters, man, this could have just been Nergigante. Ruiner Nergigante was made for a few different reasons. The developers were a little bit disappointed with Nergigante's limited role in World Story, so they wanted to reintroduce him while still allowing Velkhana and Shara Ishvalda to have their starring roles. So after Velkhana is slain, Ruiner is foreshadowed and emerges before Shara's fight. Ruiner is then knocked unconscious by us and reemerges to land the kill blow on Shara. He then flies off to the Guiding Lance and acts as a bridge between the main story and the post-game. From that point on, Ruiner kind of lurks in the background as a promised tease for you to face down at Master Rank 100. Okay, so none of that's horrible. The regular Nergigante should still be in Iceborne though, and Velkhana does get sidelined in the third act, but teasing us with an ultimate challenge that exists beyond the game story is a neat idea. Having it be the super-powered form of the famous flagship of world is also kind of cool, but then the problems really start to set in. See, Ruiner Nergigante is an older, more evolved Nergigante. The energy he's absorbed has mutated his spines, resulting in some of them becoming metallic. This is an extremely powerful form of Nergigante as well. Though we don't see a full-blown start-to-finish battle between the two, Ruiner was actively hunting Shara Ishvalda, an elder dragon, mind you, capable of shaking continents. Ruiner was confident that he could kill that, and wound up taking that kill shot for himself in the end. Ruiner has a pretty wide territory and diet, but he especially wants to track down and consume exceptionally powerful elder dragons. I think that makes sense, as an evolved form of the Eater of Elders would be wanting to go after much more powerful dragons than just the relatively rank-and-file Kushala Daora and Teostras of the world. He is also a wiser, more methodical version of Nergi, attacking more slowly and methodically at first before ramping up into a more ballistic fight as his health gets lower. Now, there are other monster variations where the creature is older and wiser, more reserved, and more cunning. I praised Frostfang Barioth for this a little earlier, but Frostfang turns from a fast-paced melee fighter into a measured trap setter. Ruiner Nergigante just kinda starts off slow and a little bumbling. What I loved about the base Nergi was that he knew that he could fight recklessly because of his defense mechanisms. He would willingly just rip himself apart. Ruiner lacks that personality to some extent, especially right out the gate. So that gets removed a little, and then what they fill that hole back in with just kind of makes Ruiner almost actually kind of easier than the regular one, to be honest. If you know this fight well and have a set that does a lot of damage, you can kind of just crush Ruiner Nergigante. Pay no mind to the fact that I do not do this in the footage. So with a basic Nergigante, you want him to break his spikes. That'll make the white spikes. You crack those to get a knockdown before they stiffen, turn black, and deflect your weapons. That remains true. That all endures. But now you also have the metal spikes on his arms and his wings and his head. And if you shatter those, you can also get knockdowns. So if you know what you're doing, you can just kinda ragdoll Ruiner in the very early stages of the fight and beat the tar out of him for free. And like I said, early Ruiner, kinda slow and tedious. Now, Ruiner's spike integrity does increase as he gets weaker, but against a particularly proficient player, it's kinda just too little too late. The damage is done, and Ruiner's not gonna have much health left to work with once he's a little less easily bullied. The other thing is that Ruiner kinda tosses out Nergigante's game plan. With the original, the black spikes are effectively a countdown timer. If you can't manage them, you will continuously lose ground until he pulls out the massive dive bomb, threatens to wipe you out, and resets himself back to 1. Yeah, Ruiner doesn't do that. He's instead got a grab bag of different alternate dive bombs with limited reach and range and spike destruction, and they will only trim off a couple of bits and pieces at a time. In execution, this isn't bad at all. Ruiner will have this ever-shifting goalpost for you to chase, constantly ripping, healing, and hardening different spikes all over himself, giving you new targets and priorities to chase. You have to watch which arms he raises when he rears up and roars, because the higher arm is the one he will slam back down with, and the opposite side of his body is safe. Raising both arms means he's slamming down forwards with his head. It's a cool little trick to watch for. It's satisfying to track his animations and have that battle knowledge so that you know how best to deal with him. It's a good rhythm. It's just, it's held back because they just kind of didn't need to mess with the original one. I mean, yeah, they kind of did because Ruiner is a different variant, but I don't know. It doesn't hit the same. The satisfaction of battle knowledge remains, but the tension of the doomsday clock does not. That clean reset so that you can start again and do better in the middle of the fight does not. It sucks because I like fighting Ruiner, and he's held back by the fact that I think he's just a reinvented wheel. On top of this, when Ruiner does his dive bombs and slams his limbs into the ground, his metal spikes will go flying and can inflict the bleed status. The blast radius for this attack is kind of wide too, so you really want to make sure that you get to safe zones from the dive bombs. I do like that the regular Nergigante is elementless, but bleed really doesn't bother me as an addition to him, considering that this is a monster whose game plan resolves around shredding his spikes down into shrapnel. He's got a few other neat tricks too. One thing he's good at is having pretty explosively quick movements. Often he'll be facing one opponent only to whirl around insanely fast and paw slam a completely different foe out of the blue. He likes to use a lot of small paw strikes to flinch opponents before he batters them with something stronger. You can even delay the shrapnel blast of of a couple of his paw slams to bait hunters in closer, only to then be shredded. It's the smaller moves where I think he's a little bit more tricky and intelligent. He's difficult, but not impossible to react to. He's not a bad fight, or even a bad reinvention of Nergigante, not at all. It's just that what was taken out of the original was replaced with stuff that's definitely good, but it's just not as memorable, iconic, personality filled. The right word eludes me. I think that the relationship between the original design, personality, moves, and gimmick just wove together into such a much more compelling whole, and Ruin or Nergigante is just solid. There's not too much to say about the design. It's a Nergigante with slightly darker colors, made to be a bit bigger, and he now has metal spikes. Again, the metal spikes aren't horrendous or anything, it's just not as cohesive. It's more than it needs to be. I really enjoy the original's big, imposing, spiky design. It's edgy, but edgy in a proper dose and tempered by a masculine brutishness. It's a bit much for some people, but I personally think that he nails it. Then if you want to add these sleek metallic spikes, that I think is just more than it needs to be. Yeah, I don't know. This whole section is going to sound pretty harsh for a monster I generally enjoy. Perhaps Ruiner would have been better served if he was just maybe a little bit bolder, went in a more extreme direction, and played around with how Nergigante would operate in some more wild way, but as is, he's similar, just different. And not necessarily worse, just kind of less compelling. And finally for this section, we have Safi Jiva, the final chapter in World's overarching narrative, though not the final boss of the game. As the name would imply, Safi Jiva is a fully grown Xenojiva. The soft, vulnerable, translucent skin of the Xeno has been shed over and over and over until strong, hardy red scales solidified in their place. The burning core of bioenergy is no longer visible, but absolutely still remains. Safi has been left to his own devices, slunk off beneath the Research Commission's notice, and has been gathering more and more bioenergy until he has emerged as this enormously powerful creature. It is this cataclysmic power that turned Safi Jiva into a raid boss. The only way hunters would fathomably be able to kill this dragon is if they broke off into separate strike teams and took turns assailing Safi Jiva while the other teams recuperated between battles. Each hunting party slowly picking at Safi Jiva's defenses bit by bit, only to have their damage overwritten by Safi's horrifying ability to rip bioenergy directly out of the ground beneath his feet and use it to heal over his wounds almost instantaneously. The energy of the ground around Safi is a well of power that he can constantly draw upon to sustain himself and continue to push through your assault. To slay Safi, not only must the dragon itself be surmounted, but the energy reservoir must be drained completely as well. So an entire server of hunters will be needed to take him down. I think this is an awesome way to justify a raid boss. Xenojiva was insanely strong from the moment that he was born, and it was really only the fact that he was an infant that allowed us to have any chance to slay it. This adult form should be beyond any singular hunter or hunting team's ability to take it down, hence several strike teams are needed. Now, in reality, you can potentially slay Safi in a singular run with one hunting team, and there is a single player version, but that's in-game stuff. You'll be tasked with driving Safi deeper and deeper underground, forcing it to dig into new sources of energy as you force him to drain his supply. The final battle taking place in this eerily lit cavern filled with luminescent pools and underground gases. As a raid boss, Safi is designed to fend off multiple targets from any angle, especially since all of his part breaks are valuable. He's got attacks to defend every single angle of himself. Some are more targeted physical moves, and there's a couple of other AoE attacks as well. Every limb has its own kicks, stomps, and slams. Some of them have small two-hit combos to try and trip up greedy players. His tail also has a few gigantic chops and swipes to defend itself as well. He also has a few large headbutts and trampling charges at his disposal to help him to turn to face new hunters and reposition himself. His forelimbs can also slam deeper into the ground, causing massive bioenergy detonations. Additionally, he'll often turn his head and fire his beam attacks over his shoulder to catch hunters that are attacking his sides. I like how this is set up. He's a giant monster decided to have several hunters attacking him at several angles, and he responds to this in a variety of ways, using beams, melee attacks, and the occasional explosion instead of just an unending flurry of full body explosion bursts over and over and over again. He's pretty physical and has a lot of these kicks and beam shots that can be pretty quick. This is kind of what I want for Namiel. Lots of elemental spectacle for sure, but with a proper balance of quick and sharp single target moves to even everything out. And Safi is also programmed to have a pretty good balance between these physical attacks and his larger element moves, so the fight never leans too heavily in either direction. Aside from his paw slam explosions, he has a variety of other breath attacks. All of that bioenergy he has stored up can be released as these high velocity blasts of bright blue fire. He has a slew of very quick beam moves that are meant to catch an unaware hunter in a nice crisp quick shot. He can fire sweeping laser beams. Any of his beam attacks that fire at the ground will trigger these aftershock blasts of bioenergy around him. He has a rather intimidating attack where he'll hold a beam move and track your movements precisely, anticipating your positioning before quickly firing off a shot with lethal accuracy. And then of course there's Sapphire of the Emperor. Yeah, I don't know if they're ever making an attack cooler than this one. He flies up, starts exhaling huge quantities of energy, focuses all that concentrated power into a single solitary star-like projectile, which glows all on its own, causing the rest of the arena to darken. The music will then kind of dull down into a whisper, and slowly the Sapphire will descend and descend and descend before it hits the ground with a screen-wiping explosion that kills any hunter not taking refuge behind a large stone. It's the way this attack is paced that's so good. It's the way that the music just kind of fades, the tension that builds as the bomb falls, the few seconds of just utter silence or darkness before everything just violently rips back to life as the explosion goes off. That's what sets the Sapphire apart from just about every other gigantic super attack out there. In the final phase, he can pull this move off quicker too, giving you just a few precious seconds to get to cover before it detonates. There's a very narrow window as well where you can flash pot him out of this super move, and it's very satisfying to land. I think they did a great job balancing a giant multiplayer dragon designed to be poked at and prodded from all different directions without defaulting to it being a gigantic light show. Safi's not a spectacular duelist, but he doesn't really need to be, and he's good at keeping everyone on their guard and using a lot of really quick spastic moves to throw players off before pulling off the giant, slower, more grandiose laser attacks. He can be deceptively quick, so you want to be paying attention to him at all times. 1 second you're trying to whack at his leg, and then all of a sudden you're being lasered on the side, and he's readying an explosive claw attack to finish you off. Also worth mentioning is that he's a fight that's built around the clutch claw. The integrity of the hide is so strong that his non-tenderized parts take virtually no damage. You need to be consistently landing those tenderizing attacks on him if you want to hurt him in the slightest. So yes, you will be spamming tenderizing attacks quite often. Neat thing about this is that he has so many moves at so many angles that you really don't need the mantles to safely bypass his attacks if you don't want to use them. And you also can't chain enrage him or chain throw him into walls with the clutch claw strikes to the head. The only thing the flint shot will even do to them is turn his aggression towards you. So yeah, you use the clutch claw attack in this battle, but a lot of the exploits that come with it aren't really present in this battle, and I think that makes sense with a dragon like Safi, that he would have scales so thick and resilient that they need to be weakened for your hits to even register with him. Plus, it's also pretty nice that his energy absorption automatically heals all tenderization on his body. If there's any issues here, it's that you pretty much have seen all of his tricks, barring the new pin attack and maybe another move or two by the time you're done with phase 2. Once you're down to the climactic final battle, he's a little bit faster, but doesn't really pull off any crazy new maneuvers. He shows off Sapphire of the Emperor in phase 2 and then just kind of doesn't get another super attack after that. Perhaps what they could have done with him is having him be better at attacking multiple angles simultaneously down here. For instance, maybe they change him around so that while he's slamming his left claw down into the ground, he's also firing his beam attack over his right shoulder. Or while he's shooting off a horizontal sweeping attack, he can also kick with his back legs. He's really good at having all his limbs operate independently, but I think having them move and operate a little bit more in tandem with one another would make him more capable of dealing with several enemies without defaulting to, again, nothing but big explosion moves. The design is great, but nothing too insane, and that's kind of by design again. Safi Jiva was meant to kind of be an equal to Fatalis, the red dragon to match the black dragon. And for that reason, Safi Jiva is an incredibly rudimentary Western dragon. Now, remember that in the world of Monster Hunter, a very dragony dragon like Fatalis and Safi Jiva are terrifying, as their insane power is so uncanny and difficult to identify. They don't have wacky organs or odd design conventions to explain how they do what they do. They simply are raw, unadulterated, tremendous power. Safi Jiva absolutely communicates that with his tremendous bulk, enormous wings, deep scarlet scales, onyx horns, and observant gaze. The one very neat thing about Safi, though, is that when he drains energy from the map around him, the energy will course over his body and light up his wings with these little constellation-like patterns. As good as he looks, one complaint that often comes up is that he's not a very good adult form of Xenojiva. All bizarre, alien, and unique aspects of Xeno kind of get discarded for a much more standard red dragon. I do kind of agree with that statement. I think it would be cool if the false eyes or some level of translucence remained, and the color is completely different. I will say, though, if you invert it, I do think that Xeno makes for a really sick, younger Safi. As an all-new, all-powerful, meant to emulate Fatalis' design philosophy while still being a unique creation with his own frame, shape, and distinctive features, Safi, I think, looks exceptional. As a mature version of one of the most outlandish-looking elders ever, he is, yes, perhaps a tad too stripped down. Okay. That's all of World and Iceborne's new monsters covered in excruciating detail. That took a while. This was all about 80 pages just for those 2 sections, by the way. Now we're gonna breeze through the monsters in World and Iceborne that are returning from previous games. Should be much shorter, but a couple of entries will warrant a little bit more elaboration. So, when arriving in the 5th generation, any returning monsters receive some universal changes. Compared to their original versions in the previous games, these monsters got new idle animations, they have more high-poly models, with updated proportions and better color blending, they no longer turn in 60-degree angles when trying to face you, and they move a lot more fluidly. Also, a lot of them got new turf wars. It's cool to see any monster from the first 4 generations brought up into the modern era, just to see them move, act, react, and hunt more realistically. They're just allowed to do more than they've ever historically been allowed to do, and even if that's a bit of a novelty, I think it's awesome for Monster Hunter, which clearly cares about its enemies, both as combatants and as animals. For the most part, we're just going to cover new behaviors and combat changes with a returning cast, so let's start to go down the list. Baroth is always a charming, low-tier desert dweller to have around, and he slots in well in the Wildspire Waste. The predominant gimmick of that map is the river that runs through it and how it creates these small forests and marshes and muddy bogs, so this is perfect to house a creature like Baroth, who wants to cool himself off in the mud. This territory does put Baroth in direct competition with Giratonis, who also wishes to rule the swamps. I think the rivalry between these two may be the series' best example still to this day of a turf war, with the emphasis of course being on the word turf. These two aren't just monsters on the same map who don't like each other and have a cool animation, they're equally strong animals competing for dominance over a very similar ecological niche. Additionally, Baroth has a sort of routine to him where he'll wander around shaking off mud throughout the waste, which actually stimulates plant growth in the otherwise arid regions of the map. Baroth is a monster that has never really changed combat-wise. He still has his varying elemental weaknesses, his 2 severable parts, and the fact that his head can only be wounded with impact damage, that's all pretty cool. And his 2 favorite things are still flinging mud off of his back to slow down opponents attacking him and flaring his nostrils before charging like a locomotive. The only thing they really alter here is that when you get hit with his mud projectiles, you no longer get ensnared in a big mud ball, you instead have your movement speed cut considerably and have to expend a lot of stamina to break yourself free. Both are decent enough tools at restricting your movement, but the original is definitely more charming. Additionally, you can instantly wash off his mud armor with puddle pod slinger ammo, which is a neat little touch. Baroth fits in great and is still a cool early encounter, but his changes are almost exclusively behavioral. Rathian is a monster who may just be doomed to never really change too much, and I think that's fine, because she pretty much has her position locked as the de facto practice monster. She is perfectly crafted to be the baseline wyvern. She's a little bit more maneuverable here than she used to be, yeah, and she can close the distance between herself and you and attack from her sides and bite at your flank and all that kind of stuff, and she flies a bit more gracefully. Her 2 most notable changes are that when you cut her tail off, her backflip can no longer poison you, which used to not be the case. This makes perfect sense though, since her barbs on her tail are what poison you, so getting rid of those, no more poison. Makes sense. On top of this, she can call for a Rathalos to assist her in battle when she is distressed. I get wanting to maintain Rathian's training dummy status, but I do wish they'd give her maybe just a couple new animations or attacks here and there. I actually think they took out 1 or 2 things from her version in 4U. Maybe, I don't know, something where she's tending to her nest just to give her, I don't know, more of an identity as like a protective den mother or something. World in Iceborne is right before Rathalos got really good. He's okay in this game. He's essentially Generation's ultimate Rathalos with a couple of new attacks and slightly better air mobility. He's able to turn and adjust more fluidly up there, and it lets him combo a bit more effectively, which is kind of cool, and it reduces the amount of dead air where he's just kind of sitting around and flapping his wings like in the older games, which is very nice. He's got a few new moves like a tail sweep and a semicircle flame breath attack that'll shoot off in front of him, and when he goes into Iceborne, he gets this move where he'll fly backwards and volley off 3 fireballs. These are all solid additions that are going to set some good groundwork for Rathalos' massive redemption going forward. I will say though, I think Rathalos may be one of the biggest victims of the desaturation stick. I miss the deeper red of his old shell, and I miss the oranges and purples of his 3rd generation wings very badly. I also think the Ancient Forest does Rathalos a lot of favors in this game. I love how the elevation changes of the map operate as different niches and territories for the various residents of the forest, and Rathalos ruling the entire thing from the very tops of the trees gives him kind of this sense of lordship and dominion that no game before or after this has ever afforded him. It's pretty cool. A lot of Diablos' changes in World and Iceborne come down to, I feel like, AI changes. Put simply, he's coded to just square up and fight with you a little bit more. The older bosses, especially I'd say in first and second generation, really enjoyed just kind of wasting your time a little bit. They charge for nice long distances in the big wide open desert, and they'd blow past you, and then they'd immediately dig underground, and they'd spend a little bit of time just not doing anything underground, and they just liked using these two high movement, time wasting abilities a lot. Iceborne Diablos will spend a lot more time above ground, and he'll use his tail strikes and his horn thrusts and his hip checks on you. He's also a bit better about stopping his charge after he blows past you, so you're not forced to play chase with him quite so much. His animation when he emerges from the ground is also different here. It's a little bit slower, where he'll burst out of the sand very harshly, but then he kind of has to drag the rest of his body back up, which is pretty different when he used to just kind of instantaneously spring up out of the sand. Diablos also gets to do a lot of cool things within the Wildspire Waste, making him feel like the Lord of the Desert, very much like Rathalos feels in the forest. Diablos will now rule from the bottom of the sands instead of up in the treetops like Rathalos does, obviously. He mostly dwells deep down in this cave in the desert, and if he is disturbed by loud noises up above, he'll come erupting out from beneath your feet, violently intruding on the battle and creating a sinkhole from where he emerged that could potentially pull you and the other monster down with you. Within his lair, there are also these walls that I guess you can only really describe as like sand waterfalls, and he can dig into and out of them, adding some spice to his digging animations, which traditionally he can only just go into and out of the ground. The fight feels a lot tighter and more engaged than it used to, if maybe like a tad slower. He still does really solid damage, making him a frightening presence, especially in the early game. Definitely the scariest thing in low rank for sure. Excellent detailing and texture work on his model here too. Lavasioth in Monster Hunter World is just... well, it's not Lavasioth. I've kind of talked about this to death on the channel and on streams and whatnot. This is a modded Geratodus with Agnaktor's heating and cooling armor mechanics slapped on and then executed much worse. Lavasioth does not have a long enough body with these different isolated segmented body parts for this heating and cooling magma armor to work on him effectively. He has been shrunk to only about like half of his height. His dive attack is a lot less visceral. He technically can swim in lava here, but he doesn't have too much that he can actually do in it. He's got very limited space to utilize that, and he's just not fun. Lavasioth has always been just kind of like this perfectly respectable monster with some solid strength and some good speed and hefty size, while also having his own distinct attack animations, where a lot of the older Piscine wyverns like Cephadrome and Plesioth mostly just kind of had stripped down flying wyvern kits. But yeah, no, none of that is present here. He's been reduced to a reskin, which he wasn't historically. His intimidation factor is pretty much gone, and he ripped off a mechanic that he can't pull off very well. It sucks that this is what most people think of when they hear the name Lavasioth now. I suppose the little fire traps he leaves when he wriggles around are fine. Some of his fireball attacks look cool enough, and the move where he'll lunge out of the lava pools, dropping magma everywhere it's a good spectacle, sure, but this is definitely one of the weaker fights in the game and a pretty bad butchering of an old monster. Uragan is another not so well-liked monster in the Elder's Recess, but at least this one isn't butchered. Uragan's never really been a fan favorite. He's got a lot of tools and mechanics that make him feel like a bit of a slog. First off, the dude's got a mountain of health, a lot of tremor-causing chin slam attacks, a rolling move where you either gotta knock him out of it with slinger ammo or just kind of wait him out, and he can leave flaming mines all over the ground too to kind of box you out of certain areas. He's kind of just one giant, long-lasting hassle, and he doesn't really change in World and Iceborne either. I do think he's a little bit improved, and I can't honestly say I've ever hated him or anything, much less here. As stated earlier, you can use a slinger pod to knock him out of the rolling attack, similarly to how you can do that with Radoban. In the older games, you pretty much just had to sit and wait for him to roll around until he was done, which was great. Additionally, two of the areas in the recess are designed specifically for him, having these half-pipe walls for him to roll around on and redirect himself. These animations, yeah, they kind of slow down the fight, but I guess it's cool to watch this giant brass death circle rolling up and down walls like this. A ton of his physical moves drop his bombs in predictable patterns, and what he really wants to do is either lay those bombs out and detonate them, or roll over them and light his shell on fire during that attack. Yeah, I don't know. He's still kind of the same tanky, time-wasting juggernaut he's always been, with a lot of inconvenience tools that he's always had, but he's a little bit more stylish about it now. I guess that kind of counts for something. Pink Rathian in world is fine, I suppose. She's not changed too heavily. She loses a fire bite that the original version had and instead gains this multi-bite combo. She retains the infamous Rathian triple charge, but the move is a little bit less annoying and also a tad less intimidating due to the fact that she'll telegraph the attack with a head turn towards the player before the charge, and she of course keeps Pink Rathian's traditional diagonal backflip. She's historically been Rathian, but with more pressure and more speed, and this remains true, though her animation changes and increased hunter speed, and a lot of the monsters that came into world being a little bit slower than their older versions just kind of in general makes it so that she's just not quite as potent in that ability as she used to be. Third and fourth generation Pink Rathian is definitely the scarier incarnation of this monster. What I will say though is I think that the Coral Highlands was a great map for her to feature on. She looks really good on it, and she's got a pretty fun rivalry for apex position against specifically Legiana. I kind of dig that they gave this rivalry to Pink and only to Pink Rathian. A lot of the older subspecies that aren't changed that much from their original versions don't have a lot of stuff like this, barring just attacks that they can call wholly their own. This was a nice little gesture, I think, for Pink Rathian. Azure Rathalos, then, I think is kind of just a big victim of not being around recently enough, because people really don't like Azure Rathalos at all. As of right now, Iceborne is his latest appearance, and as stated earlier, Rathalos is just kinda alright in this game. So Azure takes all of that alright, and then he sticks to his core gimmick, which is the Rathalos that flies around all over the place and never comes down, and yeah, you can imagine people don't love that all that much. Not a surprise that people kind of hate the guy. And yeah, if I ever need to fight Azure, I'm gonna be honest, I'm just throwing an insect glaive at him so I don't have to deal with all of that. He is particularly proficient at threading his flying attacks together in this game in rapid sequence, and does so in ways that's erratic and fast, yeah, but it's less annoying than, say, like Shrieking Legiana. He also has empowered fireballs with even larger explosive radiuses, and like his cousin, he was hit pretty hard with the desaturation stick, losing much of his brilliant luster and having those gorgeous green wings that I really like from the 3rd and 4th gen games neutered into the ground tragically. Azure's pretty annoying to deal with and indignantly refuses to fight you on the ground. I'm still eagerly waiting to see if the changes that Rise and Wilds brought to Rathalos can tune up Azure into a more respectable combatant. I really like to love the guy. Black Diablos then is a little bit of a terror in this game. I think until Lunastra was released, Tempered Black Diablos was easily the hardest monster in base game world, and she remains a beast worthy of respect right up until like the end of Iceborne. She is ruthlessly brutal. She gains all of Diablos' changes in world and adds them with an explosively fast and far-reaching lunge out of the sand catapult move and an additional horn attack. These two are a particularly interesting little grab bag of moves that Diablos and Black Diablos have actually historically ping-ponged back and forth to one another, depending on whether or not Black was in the game or not, and she's in this one, so she's the one that has the attacks. Also, in comparison to the original Diablos, she is healthier, faster, and a lot stronger, so yeah, no, she's kind of scary in this one. She also steals this bull charge that White Monoblos had in 4U, where she puts her forelegs on the ground and kicks before charging at an insane burst of speed. This move, by the way, can automatically stun if it hits you, and she also gets this combo in Iceborne where she can charge immediately out of a dig attack, which she will then signal by roaring, and she can combo that back and forth a little bit. I think you can get a really solid challenge and a good brutal fight out of Black Diablos in this game. Even up until probably like the later levels, she is just merciless. She threads her attacks very well while getting all of the modern Diablos' combat upgrades. Of the 3 subspecies we just went over that World brought back in, she is definitely my favorite. Big fan of hers. Deviljho got a massive chunk of new development in the personality department, along with some model and fight changes that I enjoy. In terms of moves, he's got an extended bite combo and an attack where he just smashes his face into the ground really hard and gets his teeth stuck in there. They just kind of sold on him trying to devour you at any means necessary. It's pretty fun. The one thing everybody remembers about Deviljho in this game, though, is the awesome interaction where he can pick up smaller boss monsters like Kuliaku and Tobikadachi, even up to Otagaron in his mouth, and he will then just start slamming these other boss battles around like a rag doll, just beating the snot out of them off the ground as he's trying to bludgeon you to death. To this day, I think this is probably the single coolest monster-on-monster interaction they ever came up with. On top of this, when he came in, his turf wars allowed him to annihilate Rathalos, Legiana, and Diablos effortlessly, which were the apexes of all their respective maps. Only Basilgeuse can properly match him in combat. They brought Deviljho back in World's first title update and let him just have the run of the place. He crushes every single non-Elder in Worlds roster effortlessly. The guy is so aggressive that he can even attack you when he's in a pitfall trap now. I like what they did to him visually as well. He's always had a very cool silhouette, but historically I found Deviljho's face kind of a little silly. In those older games, he had these soulless black shark eyes. It's a neat little technique that you can use to kind of convey a sort of mindless and inhuman violence in creature design. There's something about his facial structure, though, that made it, I think, look kind of silly. In my opinion, it might have been something to do with the shape of the eye, maybe the shape of the brow, but his facial expression kind of just gets stuck somewhere between ferocity and emotionlessness, and neither really kind of came through perfectly. The more reptilian eyes that they gave him in Worlds model commit to that ferocity angle. Those glowing yellow orbs with teeny tiny black pupils insinuate intelligence of some kind, as well as purpose and wrath. Yeah, I'm sure if they wanted to, they could have made the shark eyes look good on a modern Deviljho, but I'm glad they kind of just committed to going in the ferocity angle instead of just doing the kind of stuck in the middle design again. They also did a really good job with his texture work, adding some depth to his scar tissue and improving the look of his exposed muscles when enraged. Again, in those older titles, they just kind of painted part of him red when he was mad, and now if you look, you can really see the tears and the actual, definition of the muscle tissue on his back. New graphical fidelity was very nice to Deviljho here. The dude just exudes an aura of tyranny in the base game of World. He was the first attempt at a title update monster that Monster Hunter had ever had, and this rendition is such a great elaboration on his personality that was initiated in Tri. They did all that and still kept a pretty damn solid fun fight with a couple of touch-ups. This here is probably Kieran's best iteration, and I personally like fighting him quite a bit, but this is another monster where, I get why people don't like him. Iceborne Kieran definitely has the most complete kit out of all versions of the monster, even over the World and the Arch-Tempered version. He now has access to every physical attack he's ever had in the series, as well as the new Horn Uppercut. He pushes his lightning abilities further, having a lot of long and close range options now. He can casually conjure these rows of lightning bolts to strike while he's just walking around, and he loves this new move where he can create this kind of crisscross grid of thunder strikes that cover most of the battle zone. These long range moves can earn you some nice good openings. You just gotta be careful, as he can very quickly use his lightning in melee range if he wants to. Kieran in this game retains his armored enraged state from the 4th generation, where he can make his body an incredibly bad hit zone, and he'll communicate this a little bit better when he strikes himself with lightning. Then his mane is going to start to stand on end and his body darkens up a little bit. Additionally, you can use the Clutch Claw to rectify this ability, which kind of gets rid of this very obnoxious part of his toolkit, if you can get a good opening to pull off a tenderizing attack, of course. He's also got some limited ability to paralyze you. World's lighting and graphics also helps out a ton here visually, giving him a much better and more ethereal aura than the old games could ever allow for. I generally enjoy Iceborne Kieran since it can be pretty easy to bait out those long-range lightning attacks. He doesn't spam the super close melee range lightning moves too often, and he's also got a good enough grab bag of melee moves so he doesn't completely crumble when you get in close. I tend to enjoy fighting him with Switch Axe since it can hit fairly hard, bypass his armor, and is still maneuverable enough that I can duck away when he does his lightning. I found the matchup that makes me enjoy him, and I'd say this is definitely the most complete feeling version of the monster. Kushala Daora unfortunately kind of stinks in this game. They either took out countermeasures against him or made them worse, and they made him a fight that loves to stay up in the air for prolonged periods of time. And the tornadoes he summons are gigantic, they last forever, and are either slow moving or completely stationary. His AI, especially in World, can also be really fond of sitting in them or behind them out of your reach and then spamming wind breath attacks. Admittedly, his programming in Iceborne is better, but that can only do so much to kind of fix how obnoxious the tornadoes are. His wind aura can no longer be doused with poison and is instead suppressed with the Elder Seal property on dragon weapons, which is a lot lamer as it takes away this unique element of himself and just kind of turns it into a universal Elder Dragonism. Also, you can't neuter his wind powers by breaking his horns either, and as mentioned earlier, he and his garbage Arch-Tempered form were so annoying and needed to be flash bombed so often that the developers nerfed flash bomb effectiveness basically into the dirt. He does admittedly get a few neat physical improvements, including some extra bite attacks, this kind of short-range wind blast move, and a flying kick reminiscent of Rathalos. Too bad he's gonna often spend a lot of time happily just kind of not engaging with you and wasting your time, while your former techniques to hinder him are now rendered kind of useless. So many mistakes were made in his design here, so thank God for Rise's Kushala Daora. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum, the 5th generation made Teostra pretty phenomenal. He arrives with a new model that isn't drastically overhauled, but has solidified his sense of regality and ferocity with his much better facial structure and expressions. In the 4th generation, Teostra was turned into this kind of ticking time bomb, given a massive supernova explosion attack that would detonate at a set time after he became enraged. World and Iceborne took this idea and elaborated on it, giving him gradually ramping firepower that would build up and up towards the detonation. And on top of that, they gave him branching options for this ramp up. Again, with the 4th generation version of Teostra, they also gave him the blast status on some of his dust cloud attacks. So what they decided to do with the 5th generation Teo is give him a fire state and a blast state, which he will alternate between after every supernova move. His fire form is all about his flamethrower breath attacks, whether they're in the air, fired off in front of him, or straight down at the ground as a bit of a get off me move. His blast state will then leave a lot of blast scale clouds in the wake of his breath and physical moves, and he can choose when he wants to detonate them, sometimes leaving them lingering in the air for a few seconds until he gets a good chance to blow you up. These states each have their own attacks which are unique to one another, as well as shared moves that have altered properties. This keeps the fight feeling fresh and like he's continuously doing new things. After a couple of minutes, he'll detonate his Nova, he'll reset to 1, and then he'll ramp back up with a fresh batch of attacks. He also has a lot of moves that leave his pretty weak head exposed, and if you got good positioning, it can be pretty fun to punish him. He's stellar in this game, honestly. Super happy with what they did to my all-time favorite. And boy, oh boy, Lady Lunastra, what is there to say about you? Some think that you are the scum of the earth, overtuned, unfair garbage. Now, to be fair, I think you were scaled pretty ridiculously when you first arrived at the title updates for World, considering how effective your weaponry is, and Master Rank definitely made you feel a whole lot better relative to the rest of the roster. You're not perfect, and I think you could do with a couple of tweaks, and I definitely should, I think, make a full video about this at some point, but for the reasons I was kind of talking about with Black Veil Valhazak, I adore how Lunastra is designed combat-wise. She just needed ironing out. What I love about Lunastra is that if you know your tools, your skills, and the functionality of her Nova, there's a bit of a flowchart you can actually use to deal with her insanely powerful attack that I find enormously satisfying to plan around. Let's kind of break this down a little bit, alright? Lunastra used to just be Blue Teostra, nothing but the same attacks and slightly different maps, and her stats were a little bit lower. She was then absent for years as there was just kind of nothing to do with her, and then, kind of out of the blue, she reappeared in World's title updates with a whole new roster of attacks and a controversial Nova mechanic. If she is allowed to detonate this attack, what happens is she will deploy a long-lasting damage over time aura complete with strong wind pressure and miniature flame detonations that will make it extremely difficult for you to run away from and use items to heal yourself within. Many, many, many players have been incinerated by this move and left very pissed off. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that this Nova is perfect. I'm going to tell you how it should be fixed in a bit, but if the right fixes are or were made, I think Lunastra's Nova could become one of World's most well thought out attacks in terms of preparation and strategy. Now, this is supposed to kind of be a shorter section of a video. This video is huge. And Lunastra is not the main subject of today, so I'm not going to go into a full tangent here, but a little while after this review comes out, why not? I'll make a nice longer video breaking down how the flowchart approach to her Nova could work and how to deal with it and give this argument the solitary attention that it deserves. But let's do an abridged version for the purposes of kind of justifying and reinforcing my statement about her Nova for the purposes of this video. So Iceborne gives you a very wide roster of tools and tricks and countermeasures that, when applied to how Lunastra works, can mostly lock her out of her Nova and control the pacing of the fight. I say mostly because there's a couple of inconsistencies with this attack, right? She has an animation where she'll stop in place, she'll charge the Nova, and there's multiple ways then of interrupting this charge. For one thing, if she's not enraged, you can use the Clutch Claw strikes to brute force her out of the animation and fling her around. Or you can attack her directly, and a small number of hits will result in her canceling the animation to retaliate. If that fails and she manages to charge herself, you can use the Elder Seal property to force her out of her charge state if you don't mind sacrificing some elemental damage to pull this off. If you're not going to go down that route, she has a consistent timer on her charge, so what you can do from there is a number of things. You could have the Windproof skill, which can prevent her Nova and other wind-based attacks from locking you out of item usage. If you're standing outside of her flame pools while the Nova's going off, you can ignore the wind pressure and heal normally. The fireproof mantle then can reduce her fire damage to the point where her Nova should pretty much just be incapable of killing you, regardless of her wind and regardless of you being unable to heal. And the Rocksteady mantle can make you completely unflinchable, so you'll still take a lot of damage no matter what, but you'll have free roam to heal yourself through the Nova, irregardless of bad positioning. She will give you a large grace period between her charge finishing and her Nova detonating, so you have ample time to either shut her down or wait for a set duration until you're sure that your mantle will be up and running when she explodes. The fireproof mantle especially has consistent integrity and is a very safe option to use like half a minute or so early. The game gives you like a half dozen skills, tools, and techniques to lock her down. Deny her super move, neuter its damage, or reduce its debilitation, and a lot of these techniques aren't simply down to skills, so you don't have to compromise massively on your damage to pull this off. Simply put, your agency when approaching this attack is absolutely tremendous. Countering her Nova comes down to a mixture of skill, timing, positioning, and equipment knowledge. This fight rewards strategy and insight on several levels that most other monsters barely even touch, and that is what I find really compelling about it. Now for the problems. There are 3. We're gonna do the worst one first. She is hard-coded to randomly get a Nova for free. I'm not sure when exactly she gets it, but unless you are eviscerating her, she will at some point pop a Nova, even if you're stalling out her charge. This was an insanely bad call for the developers. Attacks like this need to be consistent, they need to be honest, they need to adhere to their rules. The developers can't just wave a magic wand and force their special attack to pop off regardless of how well you're doing. This, I think, is inexcusable. Now, you can absolutely still accommodate for this free Nova, and knowing that it exists out there will help you, but that doesn't make it good. Secondly, and this is a broader issue with her fight, her fire patches that she can ignite with her wing beats detonate at very odd hitboxes that go up in a bit of a cone shape. So you can stand clear of the actual box of those fire pools and have, say, windproof on there, and potentially because they go up in that invisible cone, you can still get hit by them. I don't know why they designed them like this, but the size of the blasts are very badly communicated and should definitely be fixed. That or the animation needs to show that cone a lot better. Third, I don't think she should roar before she triggers the explosion. Teostra's supernova gives you a little bit of time to sheath or block or run before he detonates it. You see him fly up, and then you have like a couple of moments to react. Lunastra has the much more dangerous attack, but she'll roar first, and that can stun you out of not being able to react accordingly very well. Again, you got the Rocksteady mantle on, you can accommodate for this, but this is absolutely, I'd say, another mistake. The players should be allowed a second to respond to that Nova popping off. If they're allowed that second for a much less oppressive Nova. I think that just kind of makes sense. So these 3 bad decisions hinder what I think should be an excellent attack. Personally, I think Lunastra's Nova is more interesting than Alatreon's Eschaton Judgment on a conceptual level because of those choices you have in prepping for her and the countermeasures that you have access to, whereas Alatreon is a much more formulaic approach. The key differences though, and the reason why Alatreon I'd say is more forgiven nowadays, is because Eschaton Judgment is strictly consistent every time. Now, all those changes I think are insanely easy to implement. You can delete the hard-coded random Nova, you can fix the bad fire hitboxes, you can get rid of that roar stun on wind up. You could change that, I'd say, in like a week. I would love to have more fights that live up to the Lunastra's potential, fights that understand the game's entire toolbox, give you multiple ways of using that toolbox to deal with the strong gimmick, and if you don't engage with it, you're gonna get beaten down. I think stuff like that is really cool in Monster Hunter. I think this is a franchise that's awesome because it allows its enemies to do stuff like that. But, you know, if you're gonna make a fight like this, it has to be consistent, it has to be fair, and it has to be ironed out, and it has to be well communicated, and that is where Lunastra stumbles. Now, the Nova is not the entire fight, but I wanted to highlight it because I feel very strongly about it. So how's the rest of the kit? I think Teostra's moves are a little bit more fun, but Lunastra's still pretty good. A lot of Lunastra's attacks are very large with huge windups and very distinct telegraphs, making her pretty easy to read and react to, which compensates for the high damage and the large blast effects of most of her moves. I think she is pretty damn satisfying to fight with iframes because of those big distinct movements that she has, which lead to her larger fire attacks. So you can weave in and out of those flame breaths and give yourself some pretty nice openings once you learn those timings. And her head, like Teostra's, is pretty damn vulnerable. So if you get some good pressure in there, you can thrash her pretty effectively. Her attacks can sometimes have a lot of recovery on them as well, so learning how to get around them or dodge them is very rewarding. Additionally, a lot of her attacks deal fire damage and come with wind pressure, so if you're bringing wind negate and fire resistance and all that, these skills have utility beyond that one attack, which is appreciated. The only real issue her main kit has is that she loves using her tail sweep, and the hitbox on that move is weirdly busted, especially considering Teostra also has that tail sweep, but not that busted hitbox problem. The box on that tail is oddly massive. I don't really know why. Other things to note include the fact that she has this awesome bonding move with Teostra where she'll combine her Nova with his and use it to create a combined super detonation. The two will do this animation together where they combine their power before using the attack. This one has a nice long wind up though, so you can actually kind of properly get out of the way. She also has a neat interaction with Kushala Daora where his tornadoes can suck up her flames. The more I learn about how Lunastra actually works, the more I simultaneously adore how she's conceptually designed, and I'm frustrated by the oversights that linger as these huge caveats over what I think could have really been a fantastic fight. I don't care who complains. I would love to have Lunastra back at some point, and I don't want her watered down. I just want her fixed. All the groundwork for something excellent is there, and it works like 75% of the time. That leftover 25% though is very potent, and it's just gonna leave this lasting impression that she's poorly made on like a fundamental level, and I really just can't disagree with that more. I decided to chop up the monsters that World brought back and Iceborne brought back into their own separate timestamps just to make things a little bit snappier and to make editing all of this audio a little less soul-crushing, so here we go. Barioth is probably going to be a bit of a surprise wall for a few people in this game. I don't think anyone was expecting Barioth, of all things, to be as fast, combo-heavy, and intense as he turned out to be here. First things first, Barioth is pretty damn quick, stringing his moves together effortlessly while having a ton of mobility. Thankfully, his claws retain their dynamic part break, where you can slow him down by causing him to trip up over himself after a couple of moves if you manage to smash them. That feature is very much appreciated here. He also has some new sweeping claw and tail attacks for new moves that give him some wide hitboxes, and the tail sweep specifically can put him up in the air. The standard Barioth also has this new pounce that Frostfang will later be able to combo. And he also makes great use of the large amount of ice and cave walls that the Hoarfrost Reach supplies, which allow him to dive at you from above. He's a very solidly intense battle in this game. His speed combined with his really solid assortment of big new attacks makes him a battle that I always feel like I needed to pay attention to. Really great incarnation of this guy. Alternatively, the 5th generation treated Nargacuga very weirdly and kind of badly. For one, in Iceborne especially, he's kind of slow, like way too slow, considering he's supposed to be the insanely agile and aerodynamic member of the Big Cat Pseudo-Wyvern trio. Barioth is absolutely faster than Narga in this game, come to think of it. Additionally, Iceborne sped up the process of the standard Nargacuga, stealing all of the unique attributes of 3rd generation's green Nargacuga. Generation's Ultimate already had the base species pill for the double tail slam, and Iceborne now steals the double repositioning leaps as well, and Rise is going to continue this thievery later on. What's new for Iceborne Narga is a size increase, a lot of quick dashes to your flank, a new rushing bite move, and a lunge that combos into a tail sweep. I can appreciate that the developers wanted to make Nargacuga a lot hoppier, with the ability to get at your sides and back a lot easier, but his moves now just don't have the speed to capitalize on his newfound mobility. If we had a Nargacuga that fought as fast as the 4th generation Narga could, with Iceborne's leaps and flanks and a bit more acrobatics here and there, then, you know what, I think we probably have a really respectable challenge on our hands. The only thing worth noting here is that Narga's tail spikes will stick in the ground for a little while longer after being launched, and then they can inflict bleed, which is neat enough, I suppose. Yeah, this might very well be Nargacuga's single weakest outing, which is really a shame. It doesn't make him bad, but I think Narga really needs a redemption arc after what this game and even still Rise kind of did to slow him down pretty badly. Glavenus wasn't changed that much. He's maybe like a tiny bit worse. They changed the animation surrounding his attack where he lobs a fireball at the ground and moves around that. In Generations, what he'll do is he'll start running and then he'll just hum off a fireball off to the side in mid-sprint, and he'll use that as a kind of distraction to obscure your vision before he follows that up with a tail chop, usually right into the explosion that just went off. In Iceborne, he can fire this globule fire explosion attack, and then all he really does after that is just leap in a quarter circle to reposition. Yeah, the new version of this move just isn't anywhere near as fun. On top of that, he can sometimes get a follow-up off of a couple of tail swings, and that's kind of the bulk of it. It's still Glavenus, which is a fight that I adore to run lands against, so there's no major complaints here. It's just missing that one really cool move. Offensive Guard is the greatest thing to ever happen to Tigrex. Yeah, go on and blabber about how all of his variations are better than the core Tigrex. I mean, you're right, but still, the original, I think, is woefully underloved because I think that people fight him wrong. Tigrex ain't a spectacle fight, he ain't a gimmick fight, and he ain't a duelist sword fight. He's a bullfight. People don't treat him like a bullfight, and that's why they're wrong about him. I apologize for the half-joking condescension. I have a lot of love for the brutal simplicity of the original Tigrex, and I see him just get lambasted a lot, and it bugs the ever-living shit out of me. Bullfighting a Tigrex with an offensive guard lance set in Iceborne, I think, is a really fun warm-up battle. It's just such an honest, straightforward fight that rewards good timing and good positioning against him. I wish Iceborne's Tigrex charge attacks were a little bit faster, but he doesn't feel quite as stripped down as this game's version of Nargacuga. They made a couple of changes to how his charge attacks operate as well. First, they gave him a small windup where he'll do a bit of a backstep before opening his jaws and then come lunging at you. In the old games, this windup was a little bit quicker than that. They also expand on his charge by allowing him to combo out of his attacks with a spin move. This is a pretty good little mix-up because a spin finisher is always a possibility, but never a guarantee. If you're not anticipating it, he might be able to catch you a few frames early as he moves forwards a lot faster than he would normally. His AI is also a little bit more inclined to stay up in your face and throw out bite and claw attacks before he goes dashing off again, compared to his older versions. I prefer to keep the normal Tigrex pretty simple, as it lets his variations then branch out and do a lot of interesting things in their own ways. So if you want to add some mix-ups and a couple of combo extensions to his core moveset, in my opinion, that's the right thing to do with the core species. Tigrex was never the best battle, and he still isn't in Iceborne, but I think him against the Lance is one of the best matchups in Monster Hunter because the two kits just blend so well, and the changes that Lance got in this game specifically, as well as Iceborne's introduction of the offensive guard skill as it brought back Tigrex, made this particular matchup in this particular game enormously fun for me, and it's one of my favorite battles to do. If Brachydios has any issues in Iceborne, it's that his rage mode just doesn't speed him up quite as much as it used to, and angry Brachydios back in 3rd and 4th generation was a terror. Other than that, Iceborne gives Brachydios a lot of solid improvements. First off, they give his slime attacks a couple of new properties. Now, Brachydios was the pioneer of the blast element, formerly the slime element, back when he was the sole wielder of it. In a move that I assume was meant to pay homage to the fact that he introduced the status, Brachydios has been given the improved blast scourge, which is functionally the same debuff, but it now takes 5 rolls to clear it off of yourself rather than 3. Blast Negate is a very handy skill when facing him, just for convenience's sake, because this change is kind of a pain to deal with without that skill. However, they did make it so that when you roll, you reset the timer on the detonation, so you aren't forced to roll 5 times in a row. You can keep the blast down for a little bit and then keep on doing something else in between the rolls. On top of this, some of his larger slime attacks can leave these big pools of slime that can root you in place on contact, forcing you to scramble and dive to get out before the whole thing detonates. He gets a bit more mobility and combo potential with a small horn attack that he can use to extend his combos, and he can steer his punch walk rather than be forced to just walk in a straight line now. They also made a pretty cool change where the slime on his horn can now diminish, much like the slime on his hands always has been able to. That's just something that wasn't present in the older versions of his fights. Though he's lacking the top speed that the older Brackies could put out when enraged, his combo structure has been greatly improved, and I think an eventual marriage of the two could make for a pretty harrowing fight, honestly. He retains the fun dynamic where he tries to force you into a kill box with his slime puddles, and the fact that his slime mold can ensnare you or force you to roll more is a bit of a daunting elaboration on this combat style. He just needs like a little bit more punch to really follow up and make it super deadly. Gotta say, the graphical fidelity of World also did wonders for his textures as well, and they really nailed that polished obsidian look for his shell. They made Savage Deviljho cracked out of his mind in this game. Holy. Of the monsters that were replaced by variants in Iceborne, Deviljho hurts the least because Savage is so good and such a great expansion on both Deviljho and previous Savages. That being said, still would prefer it if Deviljho got into Iceborne. One of the the cool things about the old school Savage was that he could be somewhat rare in Tri-Ultimate and a pretty special encounter. That and the two were always just able to be fought at the same time. In Iceborne, Savage just takes the Deviljho slot. It makes him less special. They changed Savage a ton in this game, and absolutely for the better as far as I'm concerned. Classic Savage was basically a permanently enraged Deviljho with a heightened rage state. On top of that, extra damage, extra dragon damage on certain bite attacks, a tendency to use pin attacks a little bit more, and this really goofy fun move where he'd rear up and go swinging around dragon breath attacks all over the place. That attack, tragically, is not in Iceborne. It's the one big failing that this version of him has, but they replaced it with him just being an utter maniac. Yeah, Savage in Iceborne is extremely hard to knock out of rage mode. Will follow you around on maps very consistently once you piss him off. He'll stop fighting you to just beat the crap out of other monsters just to fight whatever he can fight. And he has the ability to leave lingering damage over time, dragon clouds on the ground. He's got new long-reaching straight shot dragon beams. He's got this move where he just fires dragon energy straight down at the ground until it overloads, collapses in on itself, and explodes. He has a number of combo extensions, a notable speed increase, and sometimes he'll just jump you. He'll just launch his entire weight at you. He's out of his mind, dude. He craves blood and murder and destruction. He just fights until something's dead, and he's so damn fun too. Now, the developers compensated for this by making him pretty easy to stagger, so a top level player can bully him pretty bad, but for an average level player, I think this is a pretty fair trade-off considering his hyper-aggression, the large quantity of time where he can't be flint shot, and without the comfy mantles, it is pretty difficult to land tenderizing attacks outside of his staggers. Savage Deviljho is one of those awesome fights where it looks like he's doing a million things at once and there's no good way in, and there's nothing you can do, until then you start to see the gaps in the attack animations that make him vulnerable. He's not quite as satisfying to learn as, say, like a Velkhana, but yeah, he's meant to be a little bit sloppier and more animalistic than that. Oh, and Deviljho was initially designed to be a monster with strafe capable of matching Elder Dragons. Savage makes good on this promise by engaging in beam battles with and matching the powers of Black Veil Vol, Namiel, and Velkhana. He's a complete and utter monster. Big fan. I think this guy's a blast. Iceborne Zinogre is an interesting case because the guy was not originally intended to be in the game, but there was such a demand for Zinogre to appear when World was released that the developers decided to add him in a little bit later on in production. So Zinogre didn't have any place to be put in the progression of the main narrative, and he had to get cycled back a bit, being a monster that introduces you properly to the Guiding Lands after Ruiner Nergigante led you there. Now this means that Zinogre is fought after the bulk of the Elder Dragons are introduced and had to be jacked up in order to compete. So Iceborne Zinogre is now borderline Elder Dragon level in terms of strength. He feels like it too. He is massive in this game, has a few new lightning moves, including a revolving Fulgurbug defense ring and a dual pounce slam that can change targets. He also has his combo paths extended. Considering Zinogre is more or less the original combo monster, this makes a lot of sense. He can combo in his hip check and his tail spin incredibly easily. He can even initiate a combo off of a counterattack from being flinched. Monsters with combos aren't particularly special anymore, so it's nice to see that Zinogre is still allowed to be extremely proficient at it. He's got a great redesign in this game as well. His colors blend together much more naturally, his proportions have been improved, his spiky bits stick to him a little bit more cohesively, and I think changing the patterns of his spikes so they all flow in the same exact direction, down and towards his tail, helps to even him out a lot. Another thing to note is they changed Zinogre so that he would become enraged while not fully charged in order to prevent clutch claw abuse. Zinogre is enormously fun in Iceborne. He feels well balanced for single multiplayer. He got the design tune-up he needed. He's strong, fast, graceful, has a nice wide variety of combo paths that I have found very fun to learn. Yangaruga is weirdly more hectic and more kinda toned down in Iceborne. See, his roster of moves is nuttier and still really kinda all over the place, but they dialed back some of his tendency to roar stun you and then immediately go into tail backflips and pull off these one-frame insta-charges at ridiculous speed. Honestly, thank God that's pretty much completely gone from the monsters in this game. I guess the best way you could put it would be, he's still pretty spastic, he's just less cheap about it nowadays. Iceborne Garuga will still use retreating roar stuns to clear some distance. He can still fly incredibly quickly at you. His pecking and fireballs and tail whips are all nice and fast. He's got a cool looking new tail slam and an attack I absolutely adore where he flies up and the maniac just torpedoes the ground where you're standing face first and he gets his beak stuck in the ground. I think they captured the manic goober psycho murder chicken angle of young Garuga exceptionally well in Iceborne, whilst trimming the elements that made the original kind of obnoxious and a tad unfun. As much as I love the approach to fighting the standard Tigrex, as complete packages, his variations are all improvements on the core design. Brute Tigrex has always been a neat idea. Let's take Tigrex's damage-inducing roar and work that so it's more properly into his attack kit than it just kind of being a novelty of the creature. Iceborne Brute triples down on this design choice, and it works really well. He can combo pretty much any of his attacks and repositions into long-range roaring moves or quick little bursts of sound with smaller hitboxes to them. He also has what can only really be considered a sweeping roar laser, something that's just ripped right out of a Cantor's playbook, but on a smaller scale. All of these roar attacks force Brute to stay put for a couple of seconds, and he uses these moves a ton in Iceborne, so he will spend way more time up in melee range trying to concuss you with sound attacks. Whereas a normal Tigrex is more mobile, and if you're not letting him come to you, you're going to be chasing after him a lot. Brute has a more conventional ebb and flow of a duel, and these roar-oriented mix-ups make him feel kind of unique compared to other duel-oriented monsters. Wisely, a very few of Brute's roar attacks actually cause roar stun, they're just traditional attacks. If this wasn't the case, Brute would be awful, as you'd just be in perma stun lock the entire time. I'm very glad they decided to elaborate on Brute's roar attack gimmick with greater variety in Iceborne. The original Brute Tigrex was a good battle, but didn't have much beyond his stampeding roaring charge. He feels more complete, more unpredictable, and more refined in Iceborne. His inclusion was a very welcome surprise in the expansion's postgame, and Iceborne Brute I think is very much in the running for Tigrex's greatest incarnation, right up there with Frontier's Zenith Tigrex. The Metal Wraths were never all that liked historically. More often they just felt like slightly enhanced versions of Pink Rathian and Azure Rathalos, with more health, more damage, minor attack variations, different elemental weaknesses, and much more annoying hit zones. Their heads and tails have become extremely hard to damage, and it is instead their wings that you want to hit. Sometimes their legs, kind of depends on the game. These two never had that much identity outside of being inconvenient. Then Iceborne came around, reinvented them completely, and it's a whole other story. The biggest and best thing about the New Age Metal Wraths is their incandescent or Hellfire mode. After they take a set amount of damage, they will light up with a burning blue flame, which will enhance their fire attacks. Dealing enough damage to the head will temporarily knock them out of this powered up state. Also, getting the head break will make their head a permanently weak hit zone. Their heads don't deflect attacks quite as easily as they used to in the older versions of the fight, but they're still incredibly durable until being busted apart. This is a solid way to mitigate the heavily armored qualities of the Metal Wraths without dumping that aspect of them entirely, which I appreciate quite a bit. The two are much more approachable and fun to engage with now that they're not just two unflinching masses of metal. This universal change flipped perception of the Metal Wraths pretty much completely overnight. Now for their individual changes. Gold Rathian is my favorite of the two in this game. She is an absolute master of flips, combos, and fake outs. She loves to punish your autopilot understanding of a conventional Rathian's patterns, interrupting her fireball combos to go charging into a tailspin. But at the same time, maybe she will follow through with that proper fireball combo, holding that third one just for a beat to see if she can fake you out. She's fast, but not so fast that you can't react to her. You gotta pay attention to the subtleties of her windups and act really quickly, or she's gonna bait you out and hit you. You wanna watch to see if she keeps her head up, or if she's gonna lift her tail. She can also interrupt her triple charge in this way as well. I generally really enjoy mix-ups in Monster Hunter fights, where instead of routinely interacting with each move the same way, you need to be aware and react quickly to sudden changes, keeping me on my toes. Then, the blue fire gives Gold some stronger oomph in a lot of her breath attacks, which is pretty neat, but the coup de grace of the whole thing is a new fire attack where she flies up and lets out one single gigantic fireball right in front of her. I think they changed up Gold in a lot of really good ways in this game. Silver Rathalos, I don't like quite as much, but I still enjoy. Silver Rathalos takes the Metal Wrath's new Hellfire gimmick, and then uses Azure Rathalos' moveset, stays on the ground more, and then adds new melee and fire attacks to fatten up Silver into a very substantive experience. He steals the Flame Bite of Dread King Rathalos, and adds a larger tailspin to his physical repertoire. The double Flame Bite is extra cool if he's in Hellfire form, because then it's gonna leave these lingering flames in the air. In fact, a lot of his flying flame attacks will leave lingering fire on the ground when he's in Hellfire mode, and he can rip off these moves in rapid succession, turning the battlefield into a hellscape. He also has a new charged fireball attack, kind of like Gold does. With Silver, I feel like they struck a pretty happy medium where he's simultaneously more fiery and ferocious in the air than Azure, yet also far more willing to end his air combos on the ground and then spend more time facing you down while he's on his feet than Azure is. The way Silver operates, I think, is a really good precursor to how Rathalos is going to start to be treated going forwards in the series, and I'd say he's probably the best version of the Wyvern King up until this point in the franchise. In Iceborne's first title update, there came Rajang, and people who had been around for a little while crapped themselves because Rajang has a long, brutal history of massacring people in games past. The hunter speed boosts and monster hitbox fixes have definitely kind of evened the playing field out a little bit, but Rajang can definitely still keep up. This guy is violent, punching and smashing and slamming and spinning and lasering to hell and back non-stop. In Iceborne, they gave Rajang a couple of quick little trip-up attacks, like a lunging jab that can stop you from healing pretty easily, and another attack where he'll launch off a couple of small quick strikes before turning rapidly 180 degrees and punching the ground hard, and a bull charge. Patience and openings have always been the game plan for Rajang, but Iceborne brought him up to speed and gave him a lot of very quick, fast-acting moves so that he can adequately compete. And then they also just trimmed the time between his attacks considerably, so he can kind of just keep going and going and going. He also gains this new gigantic body slam, which will signal with a roar. You should have enough time to sheathe and Superman dive this attack. I generally really enjoy iframing Rajang in Iceborne, but this move makes doing this a little bit more annoying since it has a lingering hitbox to it. I've been able to get evade mantle procs off of the slam and still get hit by it once or twice. There are a few other major changes here. First of all, he has a lunging grab where he can toss you into the ground and follow up with a massive strike. He can get this for free, by the way, if you carelessly grapple to his arms with the clutch claw and he initiates his punch walk combo. This means that you have to either wait for his knockdowns or staggers to get the tenderize, or grab him while he commits to some of his lengthier attacks, mainly his lightning beam move. That, or you can bring the comfy mantles, of course. He also has an interaction where almost all of his part breaks will grant you a full topple, and some big knockbacks can get you this topple as well. But here's the thing, if he's close enough to a wall, he can then catch himself on that wall and retaliate with a flying punch. For this reason, it's smart to fight him more in the center of a larger arena. It also makes him pretty easy to topple if you bring Part Breaker with you. This is good for you because, as stated, Rajang is a quintessential glass cannon. Additionally, they changed how his tail worked. Originally, if you chopped off a Rajang tail, you could lock him out of going into rage mode. This is no longer the case. However, they changed it so that if you deal enough damage to his tail while he's in his rampage state, you can preemptively knock him out of it. So, good positioning, patience, consistency, and map awareness can take him down pretty hard, but he'll absolutely obliterate you otherwise. Iceborne Rajang is a pretty tricky fight to master, which makes him damn satisfying, I think. And he stands out as one of the better examples of a returning monster being adjusted properly to deal with the newfound speed of the modern hunters. I think people sometimes forget about Iceborne Stygian Zinogre since he was almost kind of a bit of a red herring that served as a precursor to the tease of Safi'jiiva. Regardless, Iceborne Stygian Zinogre basically mashes 4th generation Stygian with Iceborne Zinogre and then adds a little extra style to it all. On the combo end of things, Stygian Zinogre is really good at comboing into his tail spin. One of his favorite options is following up his flying back slam and then getting up immediately into that tail flip. He's also got this new spinning claw swipe, which he can use to initiate some of his combos. They changed around how his dragon lightning projectiles work a fair bit as well. Classic Stygian basically had the same spherical projectiles that the regular Zinogre had, but they had an aggressive tracking property to them. Now, all his Dragon Thunder attacks rain down these lightning bolts on the battlefield, and he can send out these in sheets of lightning that you need to dodge through. The spectacle of these red lightning bolts raining down everywhere is pretty damn cool to look at for sure, and they're really fun to dodge, but there's a little bit of a charm and terror lost from those heat-seeking dragon death spheres that he used to have. It's made up for a little bit because Stygian has a new ultimate attack where dragon lightning starts raining down like crazy, and then he combos into a new double paw slam, and then goes into this dragon wolf psycho crusher. It's not even that tough of a move to avoid. It's honestly kind of just like a mild fight interruption, but man, it's so cool. It's so cool. How the hell does he even move his body like that? Who cares? Iceborne Stygian balances out having a crazy light show with a fast, intense mix-up containing combo structure and walking that tightrope pretty well. Learn how his lightning works and how his combo path operates, and then you're gonna be in the clear. Someone at Capcom raised their hand and said, hey, let's take the lamest variant we've ever made and turn him into one of the single most memorable fights in the whole franchise. And that guy deserves a handshake and a raise. Nobody gave a singular about 4th generation Raging Brachydios. He comes from a long line of variants where they're just permanently enraged forms of the original monster with a few things added here and there. And by the time they hit Raging, man, this approach was just kinda out of steam. He's also just insanely annoying. They put slime on his tail, made him bigger and slower, barely changed his moves, I think, at all, and they added this stupid gimmick where his slime will start glowing orange and then red on his body, meaning that parts of him might just blow up. It sucks if you're locked out of a punish because you can't hit him or you'll just explode. Yeah, no, that's all just kind of in the garbage now. They remade him, like, completely. Well, kinda. I'll let you in on a little secret. Iceborne Raging stole a lot of moves from Frontier Exotic Brachydios. Yeah, that combo where he can send lines of explosions ahead of him in rapid succession with his horn, that's Frontier Brachy. The move where he'll do the 2-punch combo that sends explosion trails out in front of him, that's a modified version of a punch drag that Frontier Brachy uses. It's kinda cool. On top of that, he has all of the normal Brachydios' fight improvements that he got in Iceborne. And then what they also did is they restructured the glowing slime on his body so that if any of his slime turns orange, striking it enough times will cause it to fall off of him and then blow up after a moment or two. This is still mildly annoying if you're trying to capitalize on a knockdown or something, but at least you're just given a lot more time and warning to readjust and get out of the way, rather than having to deal with the monster just randomly exploding all over the place. Raging Brachydios is technically a little bit slower than the standard counterpart, but he has a number of combo attacks with a lot of range, and he's gargantuan too, so his pressure is insanely intense. And then everybody loves the final phase. He goes into the volcanic depths of the Guiding Lands, he locks the two of you in the zone together with no means of escape, and it's a final stand gladiator match to the death. What he does here is he discharges the entirety of his slime mold off of his body and into the ground beneath your feet. He gets faster, but his attacks can't inflict blast scourge anymore. However, all of his moves now cause this slime mold to start broiling towards the surface, leaving damage over time pools on the ground. When he gets enough of these on the ground, then he'll roar, which causes them to explode, and this can hurt you and it can hurt himself. You then run that loop till someone loses. It's fun as dude. No tricks, no holds barred, nothing. No traps, no tail raiders, no farcasters, no running away, no slime, no nothing. He's willing to kamikaze himself if it gives him a slight chance of killing you faster, and the music in this fight is nuts. We'll talk about that later. Talk about a perception coin flip. Guy went from like the worst variant they ever made to kind of probably like top 3 in one single redraft, and his rework was a couple of new moves, a gimmick tweak, and a really sick final phase with some new music. With Raging Brachydios also came the Furious Rajang. This is an interesting case, where Raging and Furious were both permanent enraged form variants, and the classic Raging was probably the worst version of this, and I think the classic Furious was probably the best version of this approach to variants. And he still might be, dunno, Savage is still really good. And then there's also like Scorned and whatnot, who's also pretty damn good. So with Iceborne Furious, we take all of the changes that Iceborne brought to Rajang and then tune up the spectacle with a lot of new lightning moves. You also need to alter the strategy a little bit because his tail is gone and that weakness no longer exists. So instead, what you gotta do is target Furious's head to de-escalate the fight. He gains a new lightning projectile attack where he leaps up and fires them in a fanning volley, and he's got a new move where he'll send bolts of lightning rippling through the ground, causing large shocks. What you're gonna want to do here is look out for his lightning moves, since they're the ones that are usually gonna give you the best opportunity to hit him in the head. This is part of why I like the Sunbreak Furious a little more, since his ground shock is much better at giving you this opening. Additionally, a rampaging Furious Rajang gains a new pin where what he'll do is repeatedly slam you into the ground while still then holding you in his hand, lightning breath you point blank, then lunge up into the air, extend his palm so that you're going to come crashing down first, and he'll just drive you into the dirt. It's the best pin in the entire franchise by like a mile and a half. Also, he's got the same mechanic where he can retaliate if he's knocked into a wall, but this time, he'll fire a laser instead of lunging and punching. Furious is a pretty damn fun lightning-boosted form of Iceborne Rajang, and the altered weak point and new moves make it so that you have to approach the fight with a similar strategy, but with kind of an altered approach, which keeps things kind of fresh. Okie dokie, and now it is time for Lunastra Part 2, Alatreon. If you've been paying attention to this video whatsoever, you can tell that I really don't mind if a monster forces you to play their own game. Is Alatreon an immensely hyperbolized take on that concept? For sure. But considering the fact that he's in like the top 5 most powerful monsters of all time, I think I can allow this like once where you're kind of corralled into playing by his rules. And honestly, if you're good enough, you don't even have to. You can absolutely muscle through him with raw damage and good playing. Of course, what we're talking about here is Eschaton Judgment, Alatreon's new ultimate attack and the mechanics that surround it. Here is the quick version. Alatreon has a fire form, a dragon form, and an ice form, right? He will start in either ice or fire, and you can tell which is which depending on the name of the quest that you accept. Depending on his state, his elemental weaknesses will change and his attacks will be different. You want to deal enough elemental damage to him before he instigates Eschaton Judgment. If you don't get that knockdown, the attack will kill every hunter on the map and you cannot farcaster out of it. When he's about halfway to detonation, he will then swap from his ice or fire form into his dragon form. His dragon form increases most of his elemental resistances, minus dragon itself, and gives him access to his entire moveset. You still have time to shut him down if you haven't hit that elemental check before his dragon phase. Additionally, when he is in that dragon state, you will then want to shatter one of his horns. If you break a horn, upon the activation of Eschaton Judgment, he will revert to the elemental state he started the fight in, fire or ice. If you don't crack a horn, he swaps to the other state. This can be extremely dangerous because normally what's going to happen is you're going to build your set to maximize elemental damage in his opening state so you can get that topple as quickly as possible. So if he starts in his fire state, you want to throw ice damage at him, but if you don't break his horn and he manages to get into his ice state, you'll still have ice damage, but he will then be completely immune to it. And if you can't hit that element check on solely dragon form, then Eschaton is going to wipe you out. That is the loop. Now, I think there's 3 good arguments against the existence of this mechanic. One being that it is very formulaic, very scripted, strong arms you into a specific playstyle, locks you out of some build freedom, and feels a little bit more like a video game raid than a more fluid Monster Hunter fight. To some extent though, every Monster Hunter fight has to have some kind of scripted and gamified elements and readable rhythms to it because it is a video game, it's code. Alatreon is just a fight that leans into this more heavily. I don't think that Alatreon feeling gamified is an intrinsic problem because I think that argument will kind of start to fall apart under scrutiny. Additionally, I also don't think that restrictions on player freedom are a bad thing whatsoever. Sometimes I believe it is perfectly okay if a game does not allow you to just do whatever you want all the time and it forces you to instead display understanding and mastery of specific elements of that game. Restrictions, done right, can be incredibly fun, and I think Alatreon is a good example of this. I think the blow is also softened because Alatreon is very consistent, fair, and extremely fun. If you subjectively just aren't a fan of Monster Hunter fights having this degree of railroading in it, that's respectable. I personally enjoy it. Like I said earlier, I think it's perfectly acceptable for Monster Hunter to have a monster that's this mechanic heavy like once or twice, especially on an opponent that's this powerful. The second argument here is that having a fight that's so predicated specifically on elemental damage is an issue because of how elemental damage works in this game. Slower weapons are typically pretty bad at putting out elemental damage. Now, the developers compensated for this by having it so that weapons that can't inflict as much elemental damage have a lower element damage threshold to get the topple. That's perfectly fine, but it's going to mean that if you want to throw a greatsword at Alatreon, you're either going to have to endure a death or two at the Judgment's hands, or drag out the fight a lot by building for element and having a very suboptimal skill loadout for a greatsword. This argument is very fair, and it comes more down to math rather than just preference. So yeah, I would say this is a legitimate flaw with the fight. Now, it's an easily circumnavigable issue because, well, you can pick Switch Axe, Charge Blade, Light Bowgun, Sword and Shield, Bow, or Dual Blades. Half the weapon roster is built to deal elemental damage very well. I get having a favorite weapon, I do, but to some extent, it is on you if you pick a bad weapon matchup on purpose. And third, Alatreon doesn't actually have fantastic elemental hit zones. He's somewhat resilient to elemental damage just about everywhere except his forelegs. I think this is honestly more kind of a half flaw than a proper flaw. I know exactly why this choice was made. The developers didn't want speedrunners to hit the element check in 5 seconds and turn the judgment into a complete non-factor. They also wanted less skilled players to feel the pressure of the countdown and be challenged to hit the threshold. Also, they didn't want the head to simultaneously be a critically important part break and the best place to do elemental damage, so that the horn would snap immediately after entering the dragon state because you were hitting it the entire time. I think these decisions were pretty smart on the developers' end honestly, it'd be really disappointing if this gimmick was used to trivialize Alatreon when it was supposed to make him scary. Also, I think the numerical balancing for this check is perfectly fair, even with Alatreon having subpar elemental weaknesses. If I am playing decently with a set that has all right elemental damage output on a weapon that I barely touch, I can still hit that DPS check insanely consistently. I think the numbers pan out in a way that's fair to both the players and Alatreon at the same time. However, I think it would be perfectly fine if they had one or two other really good elemental hit zones, like the chest, maybe the wings, or the tail, something like that. I think it's really fun to pick on people who complain about Alatreon, but at the same time, I think there's very valid reasons, both objective and subjective, to not love the fight. The people who cried on the Steam forums are still really funny weenies, though. So, how's everything in between? Because like Lunastra, Alatreon isn't just Eschaton Judgment. Well, that's the other thing that makes me not mind Eschaton that much. The fight that the move revolves around is really good. They overhauled it completely. I like Gen 3 Alatreon, but let's be honest, the thing's just a giant modded Kushala from Gen 2. The new Alatreon is almost entirely his own beast, complete with rings of fire explosions, giant ice crystals that can be blown up with lightning, sweeping fire breath attacks, full body dragon explosions, ice breath that freezes giant patches of the ground, targeted lightning strikes and traveling lightning waves, sniper accurate ice spear projectiles, pitchfork fire explosion bursts, and dragon empowered horn sweeps, claw slams, and charge attacks. He is the best bullet hell fight they've ever made. The hitboxes on his attacks are incredibly clean. The windups are well telegraphed through visuals and sound cues. Every attack is satisfying to weave through, and he offers up so many openings to capitalize on if you know what you're doing. I think the cadence of his onslaught, perfect. Yet another fight where it feels like he moves at 1,000,000 miles an hour until the gaps eventually become so blatantly obvious that you have no idea how you missed them beforehand. There's fights that are faster, and there's fights that are more chaotic, and there's moves that are a little bit harder hitting than Alatreon's, but I think that's perfectly fine since you need to deal with Eschaton Judgment, and the kit should fairly allow you to hit that check consistently. If there's any issues with a core fight, I think he kind of flies a little bit too much in his dragon form, though you can knock him out of the sky with the clutch claw, so that has a counter to it. And the hitboxes for the rocks that you can throw him into, those are abysmal, like really, really bad. If you don't fling him into the rocks at the perfect angle, he might just like slide off of them and then go on his merry way, and then you've missed that opportunity. So honestly, I would just save the flint shot for when he's up in the air. There's a few problems with Alatreon. Definitely room for someone to subjectively think that he's over-designed mechanically, but I think the rhythm of his moves, the balancing of his resistances, the countdown timer to judgment, and all his other numerical balancing is really close to perfect. His moveset is awesome and dangerous without the judgment by itself, and I think anyone of even middling skill can work themselves up to a point where they can deal with his main gimmick by themselves really consistently. If you want to do a fight like Alatreon, that's fine. You do have to iron him out to as close to consistency and fair balancing as possible, and for the most part, I think Capcom absolutely nailed it. And then there is Fatalis, the grand finale, the final stand. Fatalis was the perfect fight to end this game on in a meta sense. He is the boss of bosses, the big bad of Monster Hunter, the final fight of the original title. So with Monster Hunter getting a giant overhaul with World and entering a brand new era, Fatalis was the perfect choice to bring an end to this second beginning. Interestingly enough, he wasn't the initial choice to end Iceborne on. The developers said that fans got so excited seeing Fatalis in his brand new updated model in the 15th anniversary Monster Hunter Celebration video that they decided to alter their plans and bring Fatalis into the game, creating an additional narrative and map for him while remaking his fight entirely. Not counting Frontier, the classic Fatalis Trinity was never that much better than mid. They're fine in the 4th generation games, but several other big bad Elder Dragons had surpassed them in terms of spectacle and fun factor at that point. Iceborne allowed Fatalis to reassert himself as the big bad of the entire franchise and put himself in the running for one of the all-time great video game bosses ever made. Though not flawless, I think Iceborne Fatalis is spectacular. His damage is insane, his speed is terrifying, his attack pool is diverse, intense, and fun to engage with for the most part. The dude's nuts. He's also got a 30-minute timer on him, so if you want want to win, you gotta move. Kind of like Eschaton Judgment, that 30-minute timer adds an extreme tension that makes the fight more terrifying, and it forces you to play well. Fatalis is a fight that will encourage you to both learn your weapon and its optimization, as well as how to deal with his moveset. You'll want to learn which attacks will leave his head or stomach exposed, how many hits you can get in, and only take what you know you can get away with before he will then try to bat you away with extremely powerful fire attacks. The name of the game is baiting out certain long-range moves, because that will be a lot of prolonged fire breath attacks, which will very often lower his head and have long commitments to them. The name of the game is baiting out certain long-range moves, because a lot of them are prolonged fire breath attacks, which will lower his head, and they have prolonged commitments. Additionally, you'll want to be careful about hugging his stomach too tight. He has a lot of moves that will hit directly in front of him, and if you're in there too close, you can kind of get snagged on his legs and get hit from there. Fatalis succeeds partially because he has an answer for every range and every angle. You are never going to be safe from him, so you have to create your own opportunities, only to get out then while the getting is good. There is a big reason why his fight is so fun. He's ruthless, but he's honestly somewhat predictable if you know how to manipulate him. I will say, some of his hitboxes feel a little gigantic. His charged fireball especially is my least favorite part of the fight. Their blast radius is not very well indicated by the fire effect that comes out. They can hit you off of his head if you're tethered to it, unlike a lot of his other fire moves, and they can hit directly under him, even though the animation looks like he's firing his attack outwards. Despite this, knowledge of the move will still make it avoidable. You'll want to dodge off to his sides rather than closer to him or further away from him. The attack roster here is huge, and you're going to want to know how all the tells work. He's got single shot fireballs, a sweeping fire breath, body slam, and snake charge from his original incarnations, but now he's also got charged fireballs, extra bite attacks, a giant flame cone move, these tracking explosive flame walls, delayed blast fire globs, a pin attack where he tries to melt you to death with his body heat by sticking you into his chest, which actually is a cool throwback to some classic Fatalis lore about him fusing the armor and weapons of dead hunters to his hide. He's got dual flame sweeps and this over-the-shoulder 360 flame breath attack where you have to avoid it by clinging to the shoulder he's not firing towards. Every single move is deadly. Every single move is fast. Every single move is calculated. For the most part, this is a very straightforward encounter, save for a few notable mechanics. Enough damage from siege weaponry, for one thing, can guarantee a knockdown, which can be very helpful. If he's standing upright, the flint shot will knock him onto all fours, and if he is on all fours, then the flint shot will allow you to hit him in a wall. So you gotta be mindful about when you use this ability. Also, as he gets angrier, his firepower will increase in damage, so you need to destroy his horns to mitigate this. If both horns are intact by phase 3, basically any fire move in his arsenal is going to one-shot you. So you want to be hitting those horns as much as humanly possible. Cutting off one should be just fine, but getting both horn breaks will save you so much stress in the last legs of the fight. Also notable are his giant fire breath super moves that serve as health markers for the battle. He will fire off 5 of these huge flame attacks, and each one will be a mark of how low his health is. There's one for 75%, 50%, 40%, 20%, and 5%. For the opening 2, you dive behind rubble in a giant metal door, and for the last 3, you gotta run under him. When his health is low, you can also fire off the Dragonator, which will cause the original Proof of a Hero to start playing. That's really sick. As for a few critiques, it's definitely frustrating to learn the fight at first. Some of the hitboxes are not very well conveyed, and I think his downward flame breath, delayed blast fire attack, and charged fireball is a little tough to react to, but generally, I think this battle is pretty well refined for how demanding it is. There's also the case that some weapons are going to struggle in the one-on-one matchup. I've heard that ranged weapons have a very tough time dealing with his insane ranged pressure, and I've heard that that matchup really isn't fun. And I think there's a couple of other weapons. I believe I've heard about Charge Blade struggling to be optimal against him, and it can oftentimes be relegated to baiting and punishing the same attack constantly. Someone can correct me on that though. Also, not really a flaw, but just don't go anywhere near his back. You can't cut off the tail. The hit zones back there suck, and his tail attacks are enormous. You have no business being back there. Just stay up front. His giant tail moves is basically just a signal to get out of there. Again, not a flaw, just an observation. I do think the fight is a bit more fun in multiplayer than in single player. The fact that his AI is registering multiple hunters at once will make him use his long-range moves a bit more consistently. You can get a bit of a breather much easier, and some weapons that struggle in single player are now going to be more viable. He's also laser focused on you, and extremely brutal in single player, so facing him down with a competent group can take a little bit of stress off. Personally, I think Elatrion is the more fun of the two, but despite a few attacks that are a little bit tough to dodge, I think this fight is pretty close to a masterwork. It's extremely challenging. It can be very rewarding to learn. It's a great summation of Iceborne's speed and mechanics, and just a blast from start to finish. All right, there you go. That's like 120 pages of just monster coverage. Can you tell I like these guys? I cite this guy a lot, but it's well-deserved. Shout out to the boy Heavy Wings for tracking how all of these monsters have changed over the years. That dude's videos are a treasure trove of good information and help me keep my facts straight when covering the monsters and how they develop and change. And now we're going to be rolling into stuff like villages and music and maps and all that good stuff. But real quick before we do that, we're going to have a section that I just completely overlooked and didn't do when I did my Rise celebration and critique.